The time came when the exam was supposed to end. The teacher was ready to collect the papers for grading. There were only 10 minutes left, but many students were not ready for the exam, so they were prepared to receive poor grades. Often, their only hope was cheat sheets with the answers, but they didn't have any. The boys had been counting on Lin Tian, who usually prepared these cheat sheets, but everything was getting out of control. The exam was coming to an end, and the guys noticed that Lin Tian was sniffling, sprawled out on his desk. In fact, this was Lin Tian, a man who would take all your attention to himself. Lin Tian seemed to be the most ordinary student at WW University, not a know-it-all, but he would achieve what he needed to when necessary. This guy was always happy simply because he could eat and drink every day. He didn't need much to be happy. Every day he came to the university cafeteria and asked for seconds. This was already his 5th bowl of plain white rice. Every time a woman offered to buy him some delicious food, he proudly refused and said he had no money. Lin Tian seemed to be in good shape, but many people didn't understand why this poor guy was so poor. He couldn't even afford to buy food and used a plastic bag as a school bag. And when people stared at Lin Tian because of this, he didn't ignore it or hide, but on the contrary, he didn't understand why they were staring at him so much. Had they never seen such a stylish fashionista like him before? Our hero had always been poor, but one day everything changed. Lin Tian fell asleep during the exam, which of course did not please the teacher. Her student did not answer a single question. Was he trying to get himself expelled? It seemed that Lin Tian really didn't care at all, and he looked bored, reminding her that he still had 10 minutes left, and why did she have to wake him up anyway? The teacher could only laugh, because what could this trash do in 10 minutes when the exam was 40 minutes long? She had seen many tests from poor and stupid students who couldn't study well and didn't even have the means to pay for their education. She considered such students a burden on the university. Therefore, she advised poor students like Lin Tian, who had no power, no influence, and no brains, to stop dreaming. Did this fool really expect that if he didn't answer the questions and continued to stare out the window, the answers would appear in the sky? Lin Tian, in fact, did expect that. He was sure that the answers would indeed appear in the sky, and his 10 minutes could indeed change a lot. The answers to the test really did appear outside the window. No one could believe it, but Lin Tian was sure of what was happening. It seemed as if he had ordered the helicopter himself, so that everyone could cheat on the exam. Without hesitation in front of the teacher, Lin Tian turned to his classmates and told them not to wait, and to hurry up and cheat while they had the chance. Of course, everyone was delighted with the opportunity to cheat. To them, Lin Tian was like Robin Hood. When the exam was finally over, Lin Tian said goodbye to everyone and took his leave. But the teacher was not happy with this situation, and forbade everyone from cheating. If Lin Tian had cheated on the exam, he would receive a 0 and would not be allowed to retake it. Everything was done strictly according to the instructions, and of course, the pilots now expected some kind of payment. Only then did Lin Tian remember to throw the bag of money out the window. There was more than he needed in the bag, but he didn't need it at the dacha. The whole class was covered in money. Everyone suddenly forgot about the exam, and wanted to catch at least one bill so that the currency would not go to waste. Lin Tian chose not to respond to the teacher's warning. He had to hurry to catch the school bus, and if he was late, there would be no seats left for him. It was quite a hassle, but our hero managed to do it, and he was happy. After leaving school, he received a notification from the system that the task had been completed. Lin Tian had to use 150,000 yuan in cash in any way convenient for him during the exam, and he did it. This kind of Chenjin spending system had only recently appeared, literally a week ago. One day, Lin Tian went to the bank. He stood in line for quite a long time, but it seemed as if it wasn't moving at all. At that time, it was very difficult for him to save money. He was a student and had constant expenses. He worked odd jobs wherever he could to combine work with study, and for a month's work, he earned pennies. But even a robber wouldn't bother with such a small amount. It would be an insult to him. It was as if his thoughts had materialized, and on the same day, robbers visited the bank. A bunch of scumbags in masks with guns threatened everyone in the bank. Move, and you die. Lin Tian was very excited because these were just thoughts, and he clearly did not want robbers to appear here. The situation was getting more tense by the minute, and everyone present had to obey the robbers' orders or face death. While many lost hope and felt confused and powerless, Lin Tian tried not to lose his concentration and attempted to find a way out of this situation. But the robber noticed him and pointed his gun at his head. He found Lin Tian suspicious. Lin Tian couldn't take it anymore and finally confessed that his butt was itchy and he wanted to scratch it. As they say, no matter how small a mosquito is, it's still meat. And he didn't want to let these robbers steal even his 200 yuan, so he tried to hide it in his pocket. Something distracted everyone in the room, but the robber did not take his weapon away from our hero. But he didn't care anymore. For him, it was a perfect chance to escape, which he decided to take advantage of. So he slowly moved to the side. One of the robbers started to harass the girl, and she desperately tried to break free from his grip. The main robber was unhappy because they had come here to rob the bank, and this scumbag Mouse was once again harassing the girl. Mouse tried to find understanding in his boss's eyes. Because this girl was beautiful, he couldn't ignore her. But the girl was not shy. She would rather die than be with a scoundrel like Mouse. Our hero had already done everything in his power, pressed the emergency switch, and was about to leave when he suddenly stopped. He demanded that the scoundrel let the girl go. If Mouse had something to say to him, let them come over. After all, she was his homeroom teacher, Teacher Chen. But of course, if they were going to rob him, they might as well rob her. All attention shifted to Lin Tian, and the robber didn't even have time to see when the guy managed to open the door and run away. Lin Tian had no idea what the quarrel was about, and suggested that the robbers talk calmly. The guy started to get closer to the man, but he didn't like it, and shot him right in the chest. Before his death, Lin Tian found it difficult to comprehend that he would die so easily. But he didn't want to die like this. It was too boring a death for him. He couldn't die like this. At least before his death, he wanted to spend those 200 yuan before he died. That's how his first task came about. Use 1 million in 3 minutes, and as a reward, avoid death and gain access to the system. It was as if time had been rewound. Once again, it was him and that stupid bandit. Once again, he tried to hide his 200 yuan, and once again, the bandit noticed him. Lin Tian really did go back 3 minutes, and time was passing. It was all real, and in 3 minutes, he could die again if he didn't complete the task. The robber repeated the exact same phrases as last time. The whole scene repeated itself in 3 minutes, and only our hero could change it. Lin Tian was a little discouraged. He didn't know what to do now. The robber was on edge, and any unnecessary movement could cost our hero his life. He tried to remain calm, but at the same time, the past was driving him crazy. After all, having taken his life once, the same bastard was threatening him again. But he couldn't let that show. Lin Tian tried to think of something worthwhile to say. But the thief couldn't calm down, rushing him and not even giving him time to think. And then the idea came completely out of the blue. Lin Tian decided to say that this guy had dropped some money, and he was going to politely inform him about it. Of course, Mouse hadn't lost any money and was completely taken aback by this. Still, it was enough to distract the robber. The thief demanded that Lin Tian now show him what he meant. As he walked away, he winked at Teacher Chen, a woman who recognized her student and was surprised to see him there. Lin Tian tried to act confident and approached the other robber, pointing out that he had dropped the money he had tied to his leg. Pay attention to your lower body. He noticed that 100 yuan bills were flying out of his pants. Of course, it all looked like Mouse had betrayed him. The main robber was furious because they were on the same team, and he had been betrayed. Even though these guys were supposed to have bags to carry the money, this guy was so pathetic that he had to use his pants. Mouse himself didn't understand what was going on, because he hadn't put any money in his pants. He tried to justify himself, saying that it had nothing to do with him. Lin Tian continued to mock him mercilessly. After all, even if this guy filled his pants completely, he could only carry a few thousand yuan at most. So he ironically suggested that he bring him a bag. The boss no longer wanted to trust his partner, but Mouse still tried to justify himself, saying that it was all untrue, and that it was probably some kind of trick. Our hero continued to play the role of a good guy, and, to be honest, he did it confidently. After all, he was counting on the boss not being so stupid as to not see his subordinate hiding money so foolishly. Lin Tian came up with a plan on the fly, and in addition to his assignment, he also wanted to help Teacher Chen. Lifting her from her knees, he whispered quietly for her to play along with his next move. He held his hand behind the girl's back, and thick bills of money appeared out of nowhere. Lin Tian made it look as if the girl was forced to hide the money for another guy, whom he pointed at. The Jianji system worked as follows. Money could appear together with the specified user of the system, and the amount was also determined by the user. In fact, this was the first rule of spending money. The boss understood perfectly well that all these people had always been unscrupulous, but now that the time had come for the big deal, they had decided to grab as much money as they could for themselves. Mouse desperately tried to justify himself because he and the other guys had never done anything wrong to their boss, so why didn't he trust them now? And if they said they didn't do it, then that was the case. But his gun didn't believe it. If they hadn't done it, then the money had just appeared out of thin air, which would be absurd. The boss is the boss, that much is clear. But our hero decided not to stop there. He reproached the chief robber for doing the wrong thing. After all, hadn't he himself put some money aside on the floor, behind the flower pot, and even hidden it? Mouse did not miss this opportunity to reproach Lu Haopen, because it turned out that he was also dishonest. Mouse revealed the robber's real name, which, of course, he did not like at all. This idiotic act enraged the boss. Lu Haopen opened fire, and a shootout began between the gangsters. They found themselves in an unusual situation, and instead of taking the money, they were killing each other. Lin Tian, like a man, tried to calm his teacher, who was holding up quite well. Everything seemed to be over, but he hadn't spent the whole million yet. He still needed to get rid of another 100,000. Time was running out. He had only 1 minute left, and he had to do something urgently. Otherwise, he could die again, as the gun at his temple proved. He had to make a decision quickly. The gang leader was furious because it was all Lin Tian's fault, and now, of course, he wanted to kill him. Teacher Chen decided to take a desperate action and covered her student with her body, knowing that she would be shot. Chen considered herself a good teacher, and therefore decided to take the bullet for her student. But something was wrong with the robber. The thief stood frozen. The teacher thought that he was shocked by her sense of justice, and therefore did nothing. In any case, Teacher Chen was ready to die without any regrets. But when the shot rang out, she realized that she was not in any pain and was still conscious. Chen didn't even notice that there were stacks of money in front of her chest. Only when she looked down did she see it. The bullet got stuck right in the stacks of money and never reached the teacher's body. Our hero's money served as a shield. The robber didn't like this situation at all, and he began to suspect that it was the work of that guy. How else could he explain what was happening? Although it seemed like the only reasonable answer, he still couldn't believe it, because there was no logical explanation for it. And when he pulled the trigger to shoot again, his weapon simply exploded in his hands. Thousands of small pieces of paper and banknotes spilled out of it, and the gun shattered into pieces. The robber's eyes were injured. The man could no longer see anything after the explosion. Of course, our hero did not admit to his actions and blamed it all on karma. He said that the gun exploded because of his past deeds. And somewhere in his thoughts, Lin Tian confirmed his guesses that his theory had worked after all, and he had indeed managed to put the money in the gun and blow it up that way. Finally, our hero was snapped out of his thoughts by the teacher, who asked him to remove his hand from her. Lin Tian was shamelessly holding his hand right on the teacher's chest. Our hero could think of nothing better than to play dumb, pretending to be so surprised that he didn't even notice how he had started groping her chest. Although he apologized for his misdemeanor, he couldn't get the thought out of his head that it had been very pleasant. Lin Tian remembered that his money was still there, but unfortunately, the system did not deceive him. As soon as he touched it, it disappeared. He couldn't take the money with him. Finally, after some time, the police arrived at the scene of the crime. Everyone who could ran away from the cursed bank, leaving only the corpses of the bandits and Lin Tian with the teacher inside. As soon as the police officer entered the building, she wondered what had happened here. But our hero had no intention of explaining himself to her. After all, she was an officer and should figure it out for herself, and besides, he was late for work. When the guy walked away, the officer noticed 200 yuan in his back pocket, and, of course, thought he had stolen it. Therefore, she was not going to let him go just like that, and demanded that he stop. Having stopped the alleged criminal, the officer was also indignant that he had called her Auntie, even though she had only recently graduated. When all these problems were finally resolved, life returned to normal. University, classes, teachers, and of course, sweet dreams during class. Where would we be without them? Lin Tian works so hard and tries to rest wherever he can. Some students were no longer surprised that this beggar was sleeping in class again, as this character often liked to call him. Our hero's sleep was so sweet and deep that he didn't even fully realize where he was and what was wanted of him. The teacher's skirt fluttered before his eyes, and her words passed through our hero's ears. The teacher was unhappy. After all, she was giving a lecture for everyone, and she wanted this guy to pay attention to her lessons. Lin Tian admitted that he didn't even realize when he fell asleep, and wasn't shy about saying that he was incredibly tired after his part-time job. His classmates were already anticipating that this beggar would be punished, because how dare he contradict the teacher. Teacher Chen remembered very well how bravely Lin Tian had defended her yesterday, and she still couldn't forget it, because it was a very courageous act. Therefore, she decided to forgive her student, but only this once. Many students were indignant, because how could the teacher let him get away with that? Lin Tian's classmate received a message and decided to read it right in class. It was news about a mysterious university student who had outsmarted robbers during yesterday's bank robbery and saved the hostages by calling the police. The guy was extremely surprised that it was this beggar who studied in the same group with him. After this news, Lin Tian was the center of attention. The girls couldn't take their eyes off him. Some were already making up stories that Lin Tian was skilled in martial arts and had defeated all the robbers single-handedly. They admired him. Lin Tian kept agreeing with them, just to look at their curvy figures. He liked the female attention. Suddenly, someone joined the conversation and suggested celebrating the event. After all, it's not something that happens every day. A wealthy classmate declared that since Lin Tian was now a big star, he would have to treat everyone to dinner. Many agreed with the guy's suggestion, because how else could they cement Lin Tian's status as a big star? The girls wouldn't say no to a nice dinner either, and were already openly asking him to take them. While they were discussing all this, Lin Tian slipped away from the classroom because he clearly had no interest in dinner. How dare these scumbags ask him to spend money? Adios. Definitely, they found a sucker. But realizing that Lin Tian was still somewhere nearby, the guy loudly said that Lin Tian was just a beggar with no ambition. Of course, he took off and ran away, but he could still be considered a star. Only Lin Tian had already changed course and quickly returned, inviting everyone to the dining room as if nothing had happened. This guy had some kind of plan, so he boldly invited everyone. In fact, he was just lucky. A new assignment came his way, and just in time. Of course, no one shared our hero's enthusiasm. Many probably expected to be invited to some prestigious restaurant or someone's home. But here, Lin Tian was inviting them to an ordinary cafeteria. Was he really going to treat them to soup? For his classmates, it was just ridiculous. But Lin Tian was more persistent this time, and reminded them that he was treating and inviting everyone. After all, it was his celebration, so he wanted to see as many brothers and sisters as possible, and asked them not to delay. The girls reacted positively to this idea. After all, the cafeteria served decent food, and they didn't mind eating there. There were some dishes they had wanted to try for a long time, and now they had the opportunity. Only the rich kid was indignant. Did Lin Tian really expect him to eat in the cafeteria? Where had anyone ever seen him eat in the cafeteria? But if Zhang was just afraid of embarrassing himself, he could have just not gone and said so. Lin Tian didn't really beg him. Everyone in the class who heard the invitation to the cafeteria to celebrate Lin Tian, the rising star, immediately rushed to the cafeteria without waiting for special invitations. The two sixes obeyed their boss, Zhang, in everything, so before leaving with Lin Tian, they had to ask his permission. Or maybe their boss was just afraid, and they were ready to go in his place. But this only angered Jian even more. What kind of nonsense were they telling him? Zhang ordered the second guy to gather everyone near the dining room. There was another reason for that. Zhang wanted poor Lin Tian to be torn to pieces and disgraced as much as possible, and he would rise above him again. Many were surprised that this beggar was really going to treat all his classmates. I wonder what it would be. But some had heard that he was ready to treat the entire university, not just his group. Wouldn't that be going too far? Or did the latest news affect Lin Tian so much that he decided to believe in himself? A huge crowd gathered in the dining hall, and one of the restaurant's chefs, Zhang Hao, was pushing the students around. Zhang was supposedly in a good mood today, so he decided to treat everyone to dinner at his own expense. A mobile kitchen arrived at the school with professional chefs ready to treat everyone. In fact, those who didn't like eating in the cafeteria could eat at Zhang's restaurant at his expense. After all, the chef of a 5-star restaurant had come here himself. Many took advantage of this opportunity, as it was a luxury that was inaccessible to many. Of course, they found it preferable to the usual cafeteria. Jiang was very generous and treated everyone from the bottom of his heart. After all, he could afford it, unlike some fools who pretended to be generous but were actually very poor. Jiang was already rejoicing in his victory, because he had managed to rub Lin Tian's nose in it and show who was cool here. The girls also wanted to go and eat at Jiang Hao's restaurant, because they didn't have enough money to go to a 5-star restaurant, and here they were giving out food for free. First of all, they wanted to eat, so they thought, why not go there and have a bite to eat? Later, they were ready to come back to support Lin Tian. It seemed that our hero was not at all concerned about the whole situation. He had everything under control, and Jian should not have spent so much money trying to impress others. Finally, he got a call. Lin had ordered food earlier, but it took some time to prepare. The restaurant was late, but Lin Tian was still there, as almost everything was ready. Jiang watched Lin Tian's behavior from a distance and wanted to see him die of shame from how he had set him up, but he didn't see that at all. Soon, he and the other students could see huge containers descending on parachutes right onto the grounds. And after a short while, a huge van with a team of chefs was parked right in front of the university. The truck was filled with lots of food, top-quality wine, and other kitchen supplies. Everyone immediately thought that Jiang had secretly ordered all of this. They assumed he was worried that the students would not have enough to eat, and decided to play it safe by ordering more food. In reality, the guy had no idea what was going on, but he tried not to show it. His servants quickly told everyone to line up if they wanted to try the best food in the world, because today, Jiang was feeling very generous. Jiang, of course, did not do this, but thought that one of his servants had probably done it. In his mind, he had already promoted and praised him. Of course, he decided to use this situation to his advantage. Jiang Hao admitted that he loved to make everyone happy, and that money was no problem for him at all. He politely decided to appear before the woman who seemed to be in charge of everything. But she rudely pushed him away, as if he were some kind of vagrant begging for alms in front of her. Lin Tian was quite dissatisfied, because these guys seemed too slow to him, even though he had told them 1,000 times that money was not a problem for him, and if they hurried, he would double the amount. Manager Cicely apologized for the delay. She also warned the guy that in the future he could just call her Celie. Lin Tian decided to twist it around and call her by his own name, Xiao Li. He ordered everyone to start cooking. He also asked for 2 bowls of rice to be prepared for him, as well as a bottle of plain cold water to drink. This request stunned Xiao Li, but of course she couldn't refuse her customer, and the guy went about his business as if nothing had happened. Now everyone knew that it wasn't Jiang who had called for the airdrop. Everyone had questions. Was Lin Tian rich all along and had been carefully hiding it? It takes a lot of money to organize a plane to deliver chefs and ingredients. Jiang Hao had obviously lost face now. Many people wanted to refuse his food and go to the cafeteria to try Lin Tian's food there. Jiang Hao was very angry because his plan had been ruined. Lin Tian dared to go against him instead of being disgraced. Jiang Hao couldn't help himself and made it clear to everyone that delivery was nothing, even if it was air delivery. After all, the most important thing in cooking is the chef. And by the way, he wanted to remind everyone that his chefs were famous all over the world. After all, even the best chefs from the country's 5-star restaurants were present here, and it was unlikely that Lin Tian's chefs could compare to his chefs. But Jin Hao's chefs were literally on their knees, begging Lin Tian's masters to teach them some tricks. They wanted to make progress in their craft at any cost. Lin Tian's chef was extremely surprised, because this chef was a chef at a 5-star restaurant, one of the best restaurants in the country, so how could he ask him for anything? Jiang Hao could no longer hold back. He reminded him who was the boss here and threatened to fire him if his chef did not return to him. But the chef did not care at all, because if he could learn something from the master, he would not care about being fired. By this time, our hero had already gotten hungry. He wasn't particularly interested in all this friction. He had a task to complete, and he was simply doing it. The chef, hearing our hero's wish, warned him that he would have to wait a little, as he was about to start work. It all seemed like a divine turn of events in a manga, but for all these miracles, Jiang Hao demanded payment from his servant. Jiang Hao was sure that this scoundrel had something against him, and that Lin Tian had bribed him, so he drove his servant away. Jiang Hao was very angry, and could only watch from the sidelines to see what these culinary savages could cook up. In such a short time, our hero had already been served the first salad. Lin Tian was not particularly pleased, as he only wanted a bowl of rice, and did not need any salad. In fact, Xiao Li was a little upset because she expected their exquisite dishes to be tasted and appreciated, but the customer was not quite the right one. Still, she insisted that he try it anyway. After all, they would always have time to make him a bowl of rice. As soon as Jiang Hao saw the salad, he started mocking it, because it looked like a regular torn cabbage leaf. The girls literally hung on Lin Tian's neck, because the salad he was supposed to try was simply magnificent. Lin Tian hadn't tried anything yet. He knew that the cabbage would certainly be delicious, but he didn't understand why the girl was exaggerating so much. Xiao Li wanted her customer to take a closer look at this so-called cabbage. After all, it wasn't as simple as it might seem from the outside. This cabbage-shaped salad appetizer was actually made from truffles using molecular cooking technology. The dark part was different types of black truffles. The light part was the more expensive white truffle, and the cabbage leaves and stems were made from snow clam paste. Each piece of this so-called cabbage could be eaten in one bite, and each bite cost more than 30,000 yuan. But Lin Tian's reaction did not impress those around him. He thought it was really delicious, and a little better than in the cafeteria. A killer compliment for a chef. But that wasn't all. Xiao Li introduced new dishes. The students understood perfectly well that every bite of this food cost a lot of money. They thought that Lin Tian had become so accustomed to delicacies that he preferred cafeteria food. Xiaoli introduced another dish, the so-called free soup in the cafeteria without oil. It was made with boiled water and cabbage. Next was rare white asparagus with an endangered breed of pork, Mangalica. The pork had a fishy taste and almost no meat, seasoned with saffron. Eggs with tomatoes and rice and special tomatoes glazed with honey and spherical fish meat. Everyone agreed that it was much better than Jiang Hao's dishes, and Jiang Hao's title of boss was nothing more than an illusion. He was no longer as good as their young master, Lin Tian. Now he seemed like a dark horse. Jiang Hao couldn't believe what was happening. Was Lin Tian really a millionaire? And was he really going to lose? He didn't want that. First of all, it was very important for Xiaoli to know his customer's opinion, whether Mr. Lin was satisfied with everything. In principle, he was satisfied with everything. In his opinion, the dishes were not bad. The only thing he was unhappy about was that the water they gave him was too cold. Xiaoli explained that it was cold because it was spring water from a snow-capped mountain. The most important thing for her was that the gentleman was happy. Moreover, she wanted to return the remaining money, as Lin Tian had paid too much. Lin Tian was very angry when the girl wanted to return his money. How dare she even suggest such a thing? Let her buy herself handbags, cosmetics, and all the most expensive things. Even the guys appreciated Lin Tian's actions because it was very manly, and the girls found Lin Tian more and more handsome. Everyone admired the new star, and Lin Tian was happy that his task was completed. He only regretted that his stomach was small and he couldn't fit more food in it. When the system accepted the completed task, he received a lottery ticket with a random organ improvement as a reward. Lin Tian just prayed that it wouldn't be an improvement to his appendix. The improvement was selected. At first, Lin Tian didn't understand what the improvement was, but for some reason, he now began to see girls in their underwear. It turned out that the improvement affected his eyes, and now he had X-ray vision. He was quite happy with this, and in general, he felt that the system was very kind to him. While he was enjoying his new ability, Xiaoli was trying in vain to get the master's attention. No one understood what was happening to Lin Tian, but he meanwhile realized that he had no regrets in his life. After that incident in the cafeteria and on the exam, Lin Tian became famous throughout the university. Every dog knew him. Although the robbery case had been closed, the officer felt that something was wrong, so she wanted to meet Lin Tian in person. However, it took her a while to find Lin Tian himself. After all, there were quite a lot of people at the university. In the end, someone noticed the lady and was willing to listen to what she wanted. Of course, the madam's address to her was very offensive. After all, she didn't consider herself that old. Her name was Zhou Weiwei, and she wanted to be addressed as at least a sister. It wasn't the first time Zhou Weiwei had seen such bags in the hands of students. She noticed that they were very common at this university. In fact, it was very simple. Carrying such bags was very fashionable, and it was Mr. Lin himself who started this fashion. The students still remembered that wonderful dinner the other day. For some reason, Zhou Weiwei didn't even think that this was the Lin Tian she was looking for. She thought it was some kind of rich kid's prank. Zhou Weiwei couldn't stop being annoyed that people called her little sister or madam, which often offended her. For some reason, she was worried about not being old. Finally, her expectations bore fruit, and she saw the one she was looking for surrounded by girls. However, she didn't wait too long and was glad that she quickly met this guy. Lin Tian paid no attention to the group of girls. He found it strange that after the robbery, dinner, and exam, after these 3 tasks, the system suddenly informed him that the training was complete, and he was moving on to the task selection screen. Mr. Lin essentially ignored the girls, and they tried in every way to get his attention. They would have been happy to taste the food that was served at dinner again. But he was immersed in his own affairs. After all, the system assigned him a punishment for not completing a task, and the higher the difficulty, the harsher the punishment. Lin Tian continued to ignore the girls, but they stuck to him like flies to honey, making all kinds of hints that they would be alone in the room tonight, and so on. Zhou Weiwei was completely shocked to discover that Mr. Lin was the same Lin Tian who was in such a hurry to get to work. Moreover, she couldn't believe what was happening because, according to the investigation, he was poor. In addition, he worked and went to university at the same time, which was quite difficult. It became obvious to the officer that Lin Tian had probably become rich after the robbery. What else could she think? Now the girl was sure that he was involved in the robbery. The thoughts haunted her, but she was quick-witted, so she decided to stop Lin Tian immediately, without waiting for him to slip away from her. Meanwhile, Lin Tian didn't hear anyone at all. He was immersed in choosing the difficulty level of the task from the system. He decided to start with an easy task, since he had nothing to lose anyway. Since the guy did not respond to the officer's calls to stop, Zhou Weiwei finally caught up with him and said she wanted to talk to him. Because of this, our hero accidentally pressed the difficulty button. This was not in his favor. His hand suddenly found itself on the officer's chest, because it seemed to him that everything was already over, and how could he complete a difficult task? Zhou Weiwei wasn't very happy about some guy's hand on her chest. She was already ready to say that it was really all over for this guy. Only now did our hero notice Zhou Weiwei, who had been trying to get his attention for several minutes. Our hero had very little time, so he hurried, because time was running out, so he ran away. He had a new assignment where he had to buy a car worth more than 2 million and take part in a race. He only had 6 hours to do all this. But of course, the officer knew nothing about it. The punishment for failing to complete the task was severe. If our hero did not have the language skills and was unable to negotiate everything, the consequences would be serious. It was already 2 o'clock in the afternoon, which meant that everything had to be done by 8 o'clock in the evening. And yet, that should be enough, and no one should have prevented our hero from spending money. As he ran to fulfill his cherished goal, He suddenly felt that for some reason he had taken flight. In fact, it was Officer Wei Wei's strong grip. The girl had no intention of letting Lin Tian go and was becoming increasingly suspicious of his misdeeds. However, the weight of the guy made it difficult for the girl, even though she was an officer, to hold him, so they both fell to the ground. Zhou Weiwei arrested Lin Tian and charged him with hooliganism and assaulting a police officer. He was arrested for violating public order in accordance with the law. At the police station, the officer and Lin Tian glared at each other with discontented looks. All this was very inconvenient for our hero. Zhu Weiwei demanded the truth from our hero. She wanted to know everything he was hiding. But Lin Tian explained to her once again that it was all just a silly misunderstanding and nothing more. But with this approach, the officer could spend the whole day with the guy and wanted to see how long he would last. Zhou Weiwei should have let the guy go, if only because he could really lose his ability to speak. Suddenly, Officer Zhou received a call, and someone on the other line told her to release Lin Tian. After a while, Xiao Li appeared. She introduced herself as Lin Tian's lawyer and told the officer that her client had been released on bail and that if Zhou Weiwei had any questions, she should ask Xiao Li. Lin Tian couldn't wait any longer for everything to be sorted out, so he left the girls to deal with his affairs and ran away, as the task from the system couldn't wait. Our hero ran to the car dealership, but it turned out that it was already too late. It was already 6 o'clock in the evening, and all the car dealerships were already closed at that time. Leaving the car dealership, he wondered where he would now find a car for 2 million. He was completely lost in his thoughts, and didn't even notice when a bus stopped near him, almost running him over. The bus driver cursed loudly, thinking that he had another suicide victim in front of him, but fortunately, he managed to stop in time. Lin Tian didn't seem to care at all. He was struck by a new idea, because now he knew how to solve the task from the system. It seemed that things weren't as bad as he had initially thought. Overjoyed, he thanked the driver for something. Just think, a bus is a great idea. A hybrid, huge space, lots of horsepower. Automatic air conditioning with a constant temperature. Leather seats, a spacious interior. And inside, there were even mirrors that rotated a full 180 degrees. Why wouldn't it be a $2 million car? It was definitely worth the money. Our hero couldn't even think of a better option at the moment. From that moment on, our hero became the owner of his own bus, and no longer had to use public transportation, and his language skills would be preserved. After purchasing the bus, the system displayed a notification that the first part of the task had been completed. The goal of the second part was to win a drift race in the purchased car, with the race starting at noon. But his joy quickly evaporated, because how could he possibly win a drift race in this bus? It sounded like madness. Moreover, he did not know how to drive any vehicle, let alone a bus. Was this a failure? Suddenly, Xiao Li appeared and confidently informed our hero that she knew how to drive a bus. At that moment, Xiao Li seemed like an angel, a savior to our hero. After all, he couldn't have hoped for anything better. He was incredibly happy that Xiao Li had come to him at just the right time. He was ready to give her a promotion. It is unknown what emotions Xiao Li felt about this, but she probably wasn't particularly impressed with what Lin Tian was doing. She was uncomfortable with the young master taking the opportunity to hug her, and even more so with him groping her so openly. Quickly switching to a serious mood, Lin Tian asked Xiao Li to stop chatting and hurry up with the business. Meanwhile, more and more cool sports cars were gathering for the race. The racers specially equipped their cars with nitrous boosters and did everything necessary to achieve victory. Of course, Zheng Hao also took part in such a sensational event. How could it have happened without him? He was confident of his victory like no one else, because he had a pretty good car. Many people remembered Zheng Hao from a recent event when he invited people to dinner, but they didn't even want to eat his food. This greatly angered the young man and hurt his ego. It seemed that this conflict was about to escalate into a fight. But suddenly, the girl in the mask ordered everyone to shut up, clearly unhappy with what was happening. Everyone turned their attention to her and forgot about any conflicts, because before them stood the goddess of racing, the legendary racer Luo Jiashan, who drove a white race car called Snowstorm. Her Bugatti was considered one of the best cars, and Luo Jiashan enjoyed a reputation among other racers. But she wasn't interested in all this chatter, and wanted to start the race as soon as possible. Legend had it that whoever won would be able to remove her mask and see her face. For some reason, Zheng Hao thought that today it would be him who would do it. This further intensified his excitement for the race. He anticipated his victory and truly desired to remove Luo Jiashan's mask. It seemed that everyone had already gathered, but just then, Lin Tian arrived and delighted everyone with the news that he also wanted to participate. No one had any objections. Our hero's bus pulled up alongside the other sports cars and got ready to go. For the first time in her life, Xiao Li felt a sense of shame, because she had come to the race on some kind of bus, where everyone else was competing in sports cars. Zheng Hao was, of course, very angry at the appearance of his main rival, because even here he did not allow him to relax normally. But Lin Tian didn't even pay much attention to Hao, who didn't really bother him, and he didn't see him as a rival. His attention was focused on another person. Luo Jiashan was not only interesting to other racers, but also to Lin Tian, so they exchanged glances for a moment. Although the girl was wearing a mask, our hero had X-ray vision, and, of course, did not miss the opportunity to look at her through it. And he knew this girl quite well. She was Su Shuiqing, a top student from his university. Su Shuiqing was the goddess of all the guys at the university. Every guy was crazy about her. She had everything perfect. She came from a good family, had good looks, and of course, a good figure. Of course, she was an excellent student. This further excited the other guys and made them admire her. Of course, she was perfect even in sports. She was a master of sports. and her famous sweet and gentle smile could melt even the coldest heart. This girl was perfect in every way, and now our hero couldn't even believe that she was participating in races. For quite a long time, Lin Tian literally stared at Su Xueqing and couldn't take his eyes off her. This annoyed the girl, and she couldn't help but say something to this idiot so that he would stop staring. Stunned, Lin Tian quickly turned away, as if embarrassed by his own gaze. Lin Tian never thought that a goddess could be so arrogant. Appearances can be deceiving. Time was running out, the countdown began, the engines roared, and the cars took off. Our hero's bus was among the last and also trailed behind the other vehicles. Hao, in turn, was indignant at our hero's latest antics. How could he even think of racing on a bus? He was sure that this time he would definitely crush Lin Tian. Lin Tian, on the other hand, was very relaxed and decided to turn to the beautiful Su. He was curious as to why she was still standing there. Su Xueqing honestly said that she had an agreement with the judge that she would give the others a 5-minute head start. Otherwise, everyone would say again that she was mocking them. For some reason, Lin Tian decided that he could stay and wait for Su Xueqing. To participate in the race, you had to pay $500,000 for the entry fee, and Su Xueqing was very surprised that Lin Tian was willing to part with it so easily. But it was only $500,000, and Lin Tian believed that it was much more important to be patient and calm. In fact, the system gave him the money anyway, and he couldn't spend it anywhere else except on his mission. Still, he was sure that he had not wasted $500,000, because they still had to see who would win and who would lose. Su Xueqing was extremely surprised by the guy's confidence. What was he counting on, and how did he intend to win this race in an unmodified bus? Lin Tian was not going to reveal all his cards, but mysteriously said that a great man had his own plan, and he was not going to lose just like that. Su Xueqing had heard a lot about Lin Tian from recent events, because lately, he was the only topic of conversation at the university. Before leaving, Su Xueqing said that she would be interested to see how Lin Tian would win this race. After Su Xueqing's Bugatti sped away, Lin Tian and Xiaoli also decided not to linger and to follow the plan. Lin Tian began to execute his plan step by step, and the first step was the most important. He dialed a landline number on his phone, and the receiver on the other end was picked up. So far, everything was going according to plan, but our hero was a little nervous and took a deep breath to relax before speaking. Lin Tian shamelessly told the police that a crowd of racers had gathered on Luojia Mountain. Meanwhile, Zhang Hao was already rejoicing that his main opponent, Lin Tian, was somewhere behind him, while he was already ahead. He was already dreaming of winning this race and then kicking Lin Tian's ass for all the shame he had to endure. But suddenly he had to slam on the brakes because there were spikes in front of him. Hao had no idea who dared to set him up like that. The officer was outraged that the guy thought it was a setup and announced that she was arresting him. Since he posed a threat to public order, illegally modified his car, and participated in an illegal race, Hao was caught red-handed. Zhou Weiwei didn't even know who the citizen was who called the police, but she felt obliged to thank him if she ever met him in the future. Xiaoli drove the bus at a normal speed. She figured they'd need to take a different route, and decided to ask her boss about it. Lin Tian called the police to block the short route. The others would have to take the long way, so they had a chance to win. Xiaoli thought that the guy meant that they would storm the post. She was very surprised by this idea. But the guy urged her not to worry, because when the time came, she would understand everything. Zhou Weiwei had already arrested everyone she could on the spot, and scolded them for their misconduct. Suddenly, a bus drove right past her, hitting her skirt. Zhou Weiwei was slightly frightened, and her skirt was completely torn at the back. Lin Tian acted as if nothing had happened, and pretended that he had not expected to see Sister Zhou here at all. Of course, Zhou Weiwei could only think that Lin Tian was also here to participate in the race. But who in their right mind would participate in a race on a bus? Lin Tian assumed that Aunt Zhou was simply exhausted from her work. Therefore, he made it clear to the officer that he was simply trying to get home on the last bus, and asked him to let him pass. Zhou Weiwei agreed with this idea, because you really can't participate in a race on a bus. The bus then calmly moved on, and our hero's plan had indeed worked. But after thinking about it for a while, Zhou Weiwei realized that buses didn't run on Luojia Mountain. What's more, Lin Tian would have to pay for her uniform, which had been torn because of him. Xiaoli was already in a better mood, because they were in the lead in this race and had already covered half the track. So far, everything was going smoothly, and some of the racers who had managed to break away from the police continued the race. Su Xueqing noticed that Lin Tian was indeed in first place. And of course, she already guessed that it was he who had called the police. It was certainly a clever move, and she acknowledged Lin Tian's ingenuity, but she was still confident that he would not be able to beat her on the city track. Xiaoli understood that there weren't many rivals left, but they were still pulling away from them, and it would be very difficult to catch up with them on the bus. But Lin Tian wasn't sitting idle. Now he was taking the second step, making the second call. He dialed a number and asked them to act immediately, and do everything strictly according to his instructions. Money was no problem for him, and the more forceful they were, the better. One of the racers had no idea what kind of idiot had called the police, but he was happy that he had one way to win. With his recently modified nitrous oxide boost, he was sure he could even outrun Luo Jiashan's snowstorm. So the guy immediately decided to use the nitrogen boost, the tornado. His car surged forward, overtaking Luo Jiashan's Bugatti. The car was working as it should. But suddenly, a light appeared right in front of him, and I had no idea where it came from. An accident occurred on the road because the drivers were blinded. They simply could not see where they were going, and crashed into each other or the curbs. Suddenly, a loud voice rang out, "Earthlings, let me study your bodies!" The first thing that came to the drivers' minds was that aliens had appeared. This, of course, caused them to panic. Many immediately forgot about the race and their desire to win. It seemed as if these guys had completely lost their minds. They were too young and did not want to be subjected to experiments. Therefore, without any shame, they knelt down and begged the aliens to spare them. Lin Tian, who was passing by, reminded them that he was not an alien and that they had mistaken him for someone else. He was just a rich guy who could afford to pretend to be an alien. Our hero did everything he could on his part. Now it was up to Xiao Li. The girl knew exactly what to do in such a situation, and took out a small pipe with thin needles. She took 3 light breaths and the needles went straight into the young men's necks. They probably didn't even understand what had happened, but they couldn't move anymore because their consciousness had left them. Lin Tian waved his hand happily to everyone. Suddenly he remembered a fable about a turtle and a hare. Now these guys would have to sleep like the rabbit in the fable. Lin Tian was very pleased with Xiao Li's work. Her accuracy was amazing. The girl was pleased with such a compliment and admitted that she had learned this trick from Detective K Dongzi. The bus continued on its way, overtaking most of its opponents who were already fast asleep. But he still hadn't managed to knock Su Xueqing out of the game. The girl admitted that this guy did have a couple of aces up his sleeve after all. She had to acknowledge Lin Tian as her opponent, and in order not to lose this battle, the girl decided to speed up. In addition, she used her nitrogen boost, which she had not expected to use in this race. Her desperate desire to win was inspiring. She couldn't let Lin Tian beat her. Lin Tian and Xiao Li still had 3 kilometers to go. Our hero was nervous because he was afraid of missing the broadcast of his favorite blogger, and the signal here was very poor. He had to admit that being the best was difficult, but was there a worthy opponent for him? As he was calmly riding on his bus, he heard a strange noise behind him. Right next to him, he saw a snowstorm flying past. Su Xueqing was literally rushing forward. Her enthusiasm and desire to win were obvious, since she was performing such extreme stunts. She was truly a racing goddess, managing to overtake Lin Tian in such circumstances. The girl was admirable. But now our hero had to think about what he could do to win, or would he have to admit defeat? In fact, this was not part of Lin Tian's plan at all, so he had to strain his brain and think. After all, the situation was really not easy. But the solution came to him quite quickly. Lin Tian first asked if Xiao Li could throw the radio into Su Xueqing's car. Judging by her smile, it was easier than easy for her. Our hero just had to watch her do it. Xiao Li tore a piece of fabric from her clothes in different places. She tied the radio with her fabric, making a rope out of it, and prepared to throw it directly into her rival's car. With surprising accuracy, the radio landed on Su Xueqing's front seat, who immediately noticed it. Lin Tian's voice could be heard from the walkie-talkie saying, "Beautiful lady, aren't you tired yet? Why don't you stop and take a break?" Su Xueqing was on edge. She didn't like anyone trying to play games with her, and a loser like Lin Tian deserved nothing more than to lick her feet. Lick his feet? Just think about it. Anyone would be outraged, but Lin Tian suggested that they would still have time to do that, but not before he won. Su Xueqing found this response quite perverse, and she had no intention of letting Lin Tian win. But why was the Queen of Racing so confident that she could defeat Lin Tian? Or was it correct to address her as Su Xueqing? Lin Tian wondered. Su Xueqing was visibly tense. She had disguised herself as best she could and even wore a mask, so it was difficult for her to guess how Lin Tian had recognized her. In fact, our hero not only knew what the girl looked like under the mask, he even knew the color of her underwear. But of course, he didn't admit this out loud. Lin Tian did not condemn her for such secrets. Keeping secrets is normal, but she should have shown a little goodwill towards Lin Tian. It was clear from her voice that Su Xueqing felt uncomfortable, because the guy had revealed her secret and caught her red-handed. She couldn't do anything about it, and had to slam on the brakes to keep her secret. Our hero's yellow bus surged ahead just as Lin Tian had planned. He had won. All the spectators and fans cheered for the victory of the new hero, Lin Tian. It was another moment of glory. Su Xueqing literally devoured Lin Tian with her gaze, because if he revealed her secret, she was ready to kill him. Amidst all this commotion, our hero wanted to leave as soon as possible, because the long-awaited broadcast was about to begin. And finally, the goddess Fei launched the broadcast. There were quite a few viewers waiting to catch a glimpse of this goddess. The girl often flaunted her voluptuous figure in live broadcasts, and counted on some kind of reward from her gentleman. Usually she just danced, communicated with viewers, and accepted their compliments. Lin Tian had already tuned into the broadcast, and was enjoying the goddess Fei's figure. Suddenly he wondered who was behind this mask. What kind of person was the fairy goddess hiding? She had an advanced account, and 170 viewers had already tuned into this broadcast alone. There were haters, but there were also her true fans, such as Lin Tian. Suddenly, during her next dance, her cat jumped right on her. The usually calm cat was a little aggressive today and cut the fairy goddess's leg. People reacted sharply. They didn't want to continue watching this stupid girl. They quickly switched to the broadcasts of other girls, who were already starting to undress. The streamer was very sad. She even apologized to her viewers for making a mistake. Lin Tian was very angry that so many people had started openly hating on the goddess Fei. What did this bunch of shit know about her, and how dare they say such things to her? In such a short time, the number of viewers had decreased significantly, and to be more precise, there were only 7 viewers left on her stream. Lin Tian could really feel it. If only he had the money to make a gift list, he would definitely make sure that his goddess Fei was at the top. Suddenly, he noticed a strange glow coming from his fist. Was this how wishes came true? The fairy goddess was named Queen of Broadcasts by the app. Lin Tian was a little jealous. He wondered who had done this, and who had such good taste and so much money. Just like that, someone had given his goddess the title of Queen of Broadcasts. Her broadcast already had about 2 million viewers. She tearfully thanked Lin Tian for this gift, thanks to which she received this title. Our hero was surprised to realize that his goddess had just mentioned his nickname, but he didn't even realize how he had been able to give her such a gift. Later, he received a congratulatory message saying that he had become a crowned noble in the goddess Faye's broadcast room. A gift package was sent from his account. Our hero even made it into the top gifts of the day, where his name was in first place. With great difficulty, Lin Tian realized that this handsome multimillionaire with good taste was none other than himself. It seemed strange to him, but suddenly he remembered that he hadn't yet looked at his prize for winning the race. It turned out that his reward from the system was a gift generator, the so-called golden finger. An unlimited amount of virtual currency could be used on any website. Although it seemed that he had an unlimited amount of this ability, he felt that he was losing a lot. The next day there were classes again, and Lin Tian felt sleepy as usual. But what he saw next helped wake him up. He saw a suspicious scar on one of his classmates, which was covered with a band-aid. He immediately assumed that it was the goddess Faye, who had been injured by her cat just yesterday. Could it be that Su Shuiqing was behind all these broadcasts? Was that even possible? At that moment, our hero thought it was a waste of time. After all, she didn't suit him in terms of height or face. Su Shuiqing was waiting for Lin Tian. Apparently, she had some business with the guy, and she was glad that she had finally been able to wait for him. Lin Tian was not very happy about this news. They didn't know each other very well, so why was the girl waiting for him? Su Shuiqing asked innocently how he could have done what he did yesterday, but in her heart, she was ready to kill that bastard for threatening her last night. But it seemed as if he hadn't heard her. Suddenly, he noticed a strange glow in the center of the classroom. First of all, he was interested in where this light was coming from and what was going on here in general. It turned out that the light was coming from Jiang Hao. His beautiful curls had been replaced by a shiny bald spot that kept reflecting the sun's rays. Jiang Hao tried to keep his composure and act confidently, but unfortunately, it was obvious how uncomfortable he was. Jiang Hao already thought he was cursed. Lately, he had been running into Lin Tian too often. Literally, wherever he went, Lin Tian was there. But only now did it dawn on him that it was Lin Tian who had called the police, because it probably wouldn't have been profitable for anyone else to do so. He no longer wanted to hold back and openly attacked Lin Tian with accusations, wanting to know if he had really called the police yesterday. Lin Tian pretended that this guy had gone crazy, saying that he had spent the whole night with Su Shuiqing yesterday. Lin Tian was counting on Su to confirm all of this. The girl was put in a very awkward position, because Lin Tian was openly blackmailing her, and now many of her classmates might think that she was in a relationship with Lin Tian. She had no choice but to nod obediently and confirm Lin Tian's words. After all, the secret was more important. In her mind, she was ready to bury Lin Tian for blackmailing her so blatantly. The whole class was shocked, but Lin Tian acted as if nothing had happened. It was shocking news, because the famous flower now had a boyfriend, and it was Mr. Lin himself. What a young master he truly was. Su Shuiqing struggled to hide her anger and was already plotting her revenge. She couldn't just forgive Lin Tian for this humiliation. Finally, it was time for class. Our hero's first class was with Teacher Chen. Our hero wasn't particularly interested in the subject of the lesson. He carefully examined every detail of his teacher's body. No, it wasn't sexual interest but rather surprise. Something made him think and question his initial theory. Some things seemed obvious, but before jumping to any conclusions, Lin Tian wanted to double-check everything carefully, and in the end, his thoughts converged. Most likely, the goddess Faye was his supervisor. After all, they looked exactly alike. Of course, Teacher Chen noticed Lin Tian's strange behavior and had to reprimand him. For our hero, it was a very unexpected surprise. After all, his unattainable fairy goddess was right before his eyes. He couldn't believe that his Teacher Chen was really his beloved sweet goddess. He didn't even know whether to be happy about it or not. But then a new task from the system, one of hellish difficulty, came his way. Now our hero had to gather the 3 best streamers on the internet within a week. Of course, after such a task, questions arose. What did it mean to gather them, and what reward awaited him? Why was it encrypted? In any case, our hero wanted to complete the task as soon as possible. He couldn't refuse it. Although there was a high probability that Teacher Chen was the goddess Faye, he wanted to confirm it with his X-ray vision first. When he was about to do so, he convinced himself that he was not doing it for his own pleasure. Of course, he also remembered that the goddess Faye had a mole on her thigh, which meant that the teacher must have one too. But unfortunately, he saw nothing. Her thigh was covered by leggings, and he couldn't see the mole. Lin Tian was even upset that his X-ray vision could only see through one layer of clothing. Was that fair? Lin Tian's behavior was really strange from the outside. Teacher Chen couldn't ignore the way he was looking at her thighs, and in the end, she had to say something to him. After this remark, Lin Tian behaved as if nothing had happened, as if he had nothing to do with it, and didn't understand what was wanted of him. After that, the teacher received a strange phone call and was forced to leave the students to study on their own. After class, she promised that they could ask questions. She continued talking to someone on the phone and rushed out of the classroom, but it was clear how tense she was after that call. And her mood did not escape Lin Tian's gaze. He clearly noticed that the teacher was on the verge of tears. That's when he remembered that the lovely goddess Faye once paid back when she was insulted by the audience, which once again confirmed his guess that Teacher Chen was the goddess Faye. While everyone else was busy studying, Lin Tian was very angry. He couldn't allow anyone to make his goddess cry. He didn't care about the mission or the money. When our hero left the university, he saw Teacher Chen quickly riding away on her scooter. One man who was watching reported to someone on the phone that the girl had already left, and asked his interlocutor to pressure her again. The stranger couldn't believe that Teacher Chen was still holding out. Lin Tian saw and heard everything, and jealousy clouded his mind. He immediately realized that this guy was trying to hit on his goddess. Teacher Chen was in a very difficult situation. Her father needed surgery. The doctor demanded money, and Chen only hoped that he would help her with the operation. But the doctor was hesitant, because several of their specialists had already allocated money to help Chen's father with his previous surgery, and this time he claimed that they could not help her. Chen tried to get the money as quickly as she could and did everything she could to save her father's life, but then her hope was cruelly dashed. Suddenly, she received a message with an offer to have dinner with Mr. Zhou for $500,000 and not keep him waiting too long. $500,000 was a very good amount, especially in her situation. How could she pass up such an opportunity? Bouncers were already waiting for her at the hospital entrance. They decided to masterfully show sympathy, saying that the girl should deal with this. Otherwise, her father... However, the man did not expect Chen to have so much patience. When he signed the contract with her, he did not expect this chick to be so stubborn. At one point, he even felt sorry that she was so beautiful. But he didn't feel sorry for long, because he simply didn't have time, as at that very moment he got punched right in the face. Lin Tian didn't mess around with these guys for long. He understood perfectly well what kind of situation Teacher Chen was in. She was his goddess, and he didn't want her to be treated so rudely. Lin Tian confidently took Teacher Chen by the hand and told everyone that the men should listen to what he was about to say. He told all these scumbags that this girl was his, but Teacher Chen didn't even know what to say. She was so upset that she couldn't even react to what was happening. One of the bouncers didn't care about this news at all, because this woman had a contract with their company, and if she was Lin Tian's girlfriend, it didn't matter much to them. And anyway, it was entirely her problem that she hadn't read the contract carefully, and they had a penalty for breach of contract. But Lin Tian didn't care either. He slapped this scumbag hard across the face and didn't want to listen to him anymore. If this jerk couldn't speak properly, then he shouldn't have spoken at all. Lin Tianya wasn't interested in these dirty little affairs, because he had his own. One of the men finally came to his senses. He was in bad shape, but very angry, and wanted to kill this guy just to get revenge for his tooth. No matter how strong our hero's fist was, the scum believed that it couldn't be stronger than their knife. Lin Tian thought that these scumbags were completely stupid and misunderstood him, so he pointed for them to look behind them. The bouncers were scared and of course turned around, because they thought there might be an ambush there. But there was nothing behind him, and in those few seconds our hero managed to grab Chen and run away. If it was easy for him to fool these fools, then he was sure that it would be easy to escape from here, especially since he had his own bus. The scumbags followed him, wanting to finish what they had started, and set out to catch Lin Tian and Chen. But they didn't even need to catch them. They were sitting right in the front seats. Lin Tian was completely calm, and the girl felt tense, but decided to trust her student. Lin Tian decided to remind them that these scumbags didn't even understand whose bus they had gotten on, and what they had signed up for. The man remembered that this guy had already fooled them once, and they believed that he wouldn't be able to fool them a second time. After all, it couldn't be his bus. But it turned out he could. Xiaoli was already inside and quickly attacked the uninvited guests. She knocked out the first and second ones with her very first blows. They were so weak that they couldn't withstand the girl's blows. After knocking out the two bouncers, she calmly dusted off her clothes, as if she'd been rolling around in the mud. The fare dodgers were thrown out, and as the bus drove off, Lin Tian did not miss the opportunity to remind them that it was indeed his bus, although it was unlikely that they heard him. And so, finally, Chen and Lin Tian were left alone while Xiaoli took over the bus. The teacher didn't know where to start, so the guy wanted to find out what was going on in her life first. But first and foremost, Chen wanted Lin Tian to let her go. All this time, our hero kept Chen on his lap and held her with his hands, making the teacher feel extremely uncomfortable and probably very embarrassed. But our hero had even forgotten that she was sitting in his arms, and with an innocent smile, he confirmed that it was indeed true and that he was not lying. Moreover, Chen wanted Lin Tian to let her off the bus, because it would be better for both of them. She couldn't afford to pay for breaking the contract and was going to apologize to those men. She had to continue to follow the contract, otherwise she would be in big trouble. But Lin Tian thought differently. He didn't want to let Chen go. Moreover, he said that she was now his person. Our hero had already completed part of his task. He had already gathered one of the best streamers on the internet, with 2 more to go. Lin Tian was pleased with how everything was going. After all, this meant that he could recruit the 3 best streamers separately, which greatly simplified the task. Chen didn't even understand what nonsense Lin Tian was talking about, because since when had she become his person? Lin Tian had to admit that it wasn't happening yet, but she could become his very soon. No matter what situation Chen found herself in, she wanted to remind our hero that she was, first and foremost, his teacher. But apparently, our hero wasn't very concerned with such formalities, and in the end, they arrived at the teacher's stop. At this stop, our hero dropped off Teacher Chen and hoped that they would meet again tomorrow. Chen was completely confused, because too many incomprehensible events had happened to her today. And did Lin Tian really like her? Maybe she liked him too, but formalities prevented her from accepting this, because she was a teacher and he was her student. Although Chen got off at her stop, the bus continued on its way and drove into some godforsaken place. He and Xiaoli had their own plans, and apparently these plans were very stressful for the girl. But Lin Tian also looked more serious than usual because of this. The situation was complicated, so Xiaoli even suggested that her master call for backup and some of his people. But he ignored this suggestion and asked if everything was ready for their plan. Xiaoli confidently tapped on the black suitcase and confirmed that everything was ready. Lin Tian understood perfectly well that Xiaoli was still afraid of them, even with that gun. Upon our hero's arrival, a whole group of gentlemen was already waiting for him, but from their appearance, it was immediately clear that they were not happy to see him there. Lin Tian walked on with a completely impassive expression, but they did not stop him, only saying that he was asking for trouble. But our hero knew exactly who he was looking for and why he had come here in the first place. Lin Tian boldly addressed the local boss, urging him not to pretend to be someone important. Our hero had business to attend to, and he wanted to finish quickly so he could watch the live broadcast. The man turned around and immediately asked a question. He wanted to know if Lin Tian was the one who kidnapped the actress and his company, Tian Fei. Kidnapping is a crime, and the boss was going to make this conversation difficult. Lin Tian confirmed everything that was said, which was absolutely true. Yes, he had stolen her, but what did he get out of it? The man either misheard or something, but he decided to follow the old script, where the accused usually denies and disagrees with the charges. He was probably too used to everyone justifying themselves in front of him, and it took him a few minutes to realize that Lin Tian was admitting his guilt and calling it the wrong script. However, the cockroaches in old Lin Tian's head really bothered me. After all, he wanted to hurry up and started taking something out of his inside pocket. Everyone present tensed up, and the boss was surrounded by a crowd of bodyguards. They were afraid that our hero was about to pull out a gun, so they were on guard. But there was no gun. From his pocket, he took out a cute key with a picture of Peppa Pig on it. Everyone was taken aback. Who would have thought that a guy like him would use something like that? They were ready to see any kind of weapon, but not a key with a pig on it. Lin Tian calmly continued what he had started, and carefully opened his case. And there was a weapon in the case, which was not good at all for those present. This time it really was a gun, and the boss was particularly tense, as he didn't want to worry about an assassination attempt right now. As soon as the case with the weapon was opened, Xiaoli immediately burst into the building, and immediately began to attack these scumbags. Our hero's fury was uncontrollable. Why shouldn't the boss now see what he was worth, since he wanted Lin Tian's girl so badly? Lin Tian aimed his weapon at the old man, and was ready to shoot him right in the head. The boss sat in his chair, shaking with fear, and for some reason, it didn't even occur to him to run away while Lin Tian was advancing on him. He was stressed, and at that moment he wondered why this guy was more reckless than he was. He decided that running away was pointless. Lin Tian pulled the trigger of his gun, and then the shot was about to happen. The boss closed his eyes, afraid of what was happening. But when he felt that no shot was fired after pulling the trigger, he opened his eyes in surprise. The man thought he was in paradise because there was money everywhere. Was this what paradise was like? But for some reason, the madman with the gun was still standing in front of him. Was he part of the package that came with the money in his paradise? In fact, the boss needed to stop dreaming, because his god was right in front of him, Lin Tian, and every bullet here was payment for the contract of the goddess Fei. Our hero deliberately showed the photo and explained that this girl no longer belonged to the company of that old man Tian Fei. And after that, no buts. Lin Tian didn't even want to know anything else. But if suddenly that meant that this money was not enough, Lin Tian wasn't greedy and offered a little more money. After all, he was rich and didn't feel sorry for it. He threw money right in the old man's face so that he would choke on it. But was this money still not enough? In that case, Lin Tian decided to make a triple money storm and take out 3 guns with money at once. The boss had to admit that this young Mr. Lin was indeed a ruthless man and very generous. Noticing that the men were satisfied, our hero handed the contract to Chen to be torn up. And finally, before leaving, he reminded everyone once again that Chen was his girlfriend, and no one dared to touch her or even think about anything bad. Xiaoli understood that it was none of her business, but was it really worth it for Lin Tian to spend so much money on his teacher? She was just curious to know the answer. Without hesitation, Lin Tian replied that it was worth it. He was confident in what he was doing. But why would he give money to someone who had bullied his teacher Chen? The situation was a little complicated, but the main thing for Lin Tian was to throw dust in their eyes and get out of there in time. All the money was fake, but in the heat of the moment, no one even noticed. But someone still found real bills among all the junk and reported it to their boss. It was a small amount, only 250 yuan, but that was not enough. The boss was even ashamed to look at such trash. How could his lackey even give him such a thing? Amidst all the commotion, the boss found himself in the crosshairs again. He was ordered not to move, because this time there was a real gun pointed at him. The old man immediately recognized Miss Caozong, knelt before her, and begged for forgiveness. But if he wanted to apologize so badly, he'd be better off just dying. Chen hadn't ordered anything lately, but for some reason she received a mysterious box with a message. Please leave us a good review if you are satisfied. Inside the box were torn pieces of paper, apparently from a document. The teacher immediately recognized these pieces of paper as her contract. She realized that if it was torn up, it meant that it was no longer valid. Moreover, among these scraps of paper, she found a letter. Inside was a new contract from Tian Lin. All the terms were written there, and the girl just had to think about whether to agree to them. She immediately remembered that a few days ago she had been given the status of Queen of Broadcasts, and it was all thanks to Lin Tian. While she was sitting in her office, someone was watching her from afar. Of course, it was Lin Tian himself, or rather his assistant. As always, he felt completely relaxed and simply allowed Xiaoli to do her job. Xiaoli came to the final conclusion that Chen had signed the contract after all, because she simply couldn't refuse such a generous offer, since her father needed money for surgery. The previous wave of gifts had attracted a lot of attention to Goddess Fei, and the popularity of her broadcast was also steadily growing. There should have been no problems with Teacher Chen, but our hero couldn't provide gifts for 3 people. The system indicated that with the money he had, he could only sign contracts with 2 streamers. The first streamer had already been secured. Now it was time for the next one. Our hero had no intention of stopping, and he planned to achieve his goal by any means necessary. Cao Bile was a very famous streamer with an audience of almost 15 million on her broadcast. So, together with Xiaoli, Lin Tian went to Cao Bile, ready to sign a contract with her for any amount. It wasn't difficult to meet her. What's more, when he made his proposal, she immediately agreed to sign the contract. Lin Tian was a little shocked, because this streamer wasn't even going to bargain with him, even though she was #1 in her field. Cao Bile admitted that when she saw his younger brother, she thought he was a good person and wouldn't lie to her, so she wanted to trust him. Our hero was very flattered by these words and for some reason thought that this little girl had a great future ahead of her. Well, it was very easy, and Lin Tian was already anticipating that victory was just around the corner. But Cao Biao was sure that Lin Tian had brought a wolf into his house, and that very soon he would be in her hands. In honor of such a successful deal, Cao Biao decided to raise a glass and make a toast to Lin Tian. Lin Tian had no objection. He was ready to drink himself silly. While our hero was drinking thoughtlessly, Cao Biao gave an inconspicuous nod to his servant. Xiaoli immediately noticed something was wrong when Cao Bilo's servant headed for our hero's private bus. Either he didn't pay attention to the girl or he thought she posed no threat to him, but the man began to take something out of his inside pocket. But suddenly, a thin needle with a sleeping potion hit him in the neck. Xiaoli saw right through this old man, and if he wanted to frame her young master, he would have to get past her first. The sleeping potion was fast-acting, but the old man was still standing on his feet and scratching the back of his head as if he had been bitten by a mosquito. Xiaoli was extremely shocked that it had no effect on the old man and he was still standing. Without any secrecy, he admitted that he was immune to all laxatives and sleeping pills. And anyway, didn't she even know who he was? The old man had to reveal his identity and make it clear that he was Maori. He wasn't going to stop there and wanted to show the girl his unique Chinese martial arts. But Xiaoli was not going to stand by and watch, and decided to participate in order to show off her own skills. She struck the first blow, but the Maori old man easily dodged it. She didn't even manage to touch the old man. The Maori's body was very flexible, and Xiaoli tensed up slightly because the situation was getting out of her control. And these movements were very confident. It was a square dance that the Maori personally demonstrated to Xiaoli. Yes, it was painful. It was a cunning move, but Xiaoli was still ready to use all her strength to win. But the Maori claimed that she would not be able to keep up with his dynamic rhythm. And unfortunately, he was right. The girl couldn't keep up with the Maori's movements, and he struck her right in the neck. Xiaoli was knocked out, and of course, the Maori took the opportunity to take a photo with his latest defeated enemy. Meanwhile, Lin Tian and Xiao Bi enjoyed food, wine, and each other's company, celebrating their shared victory. But under the table, the girl was hiding a little secret that our hero shouldn't have known about. Meanwhile, Lin Tian was already fast asleep, enjoying his dream. Cao Bile did not miss the opportunity to mock this guy. Did this fool really think she would sign a contract with him? Cao had already thought it through. As soon as Lin Tian got drunk, she would tear up the contract and then throw Lin Tian back on the bus, where the evidence had been planted. And then Lin Tian would sit in prison and drink with his cellmates. While Cao was dreaming about all this and thinking out loud, our hero suddenly remembered that he didn't like drinking alcohol. He was probably surprised by the girl's monologue, but nevertheless tried not to react to her words. Xiao Biao was extremely surprised when she saw that Lin Tian had been listening to her all this time and had not been asleep. In fact, our hero was a little embarrassed to talk about it, but as soon as he walked through the door, he looked at Cao Bilo with his X-ray eyes. Of course, he saw the small bag tied to her leg. It wasn't hard to guess what was in it, so Lin Tian didn't hold back and boldly reproached the girl for being short-sighted and not hiding things well. In general, he admitted to himself that it was a wonderful sight, and it seemed that he would have to get used to looking at beautiful girls with his X-ray eyes. Cao Bilo tried to keep her composure, but she was already furious. She believed that even if he had found that bag, sooner or later Lin Tian would end up in her hands. Lin Tian felt super confident because the girl should be worried about herself first. Didn't she want to know who had drunk her powder in the end? Quite unexpectedly, whether from weakness or powerlessness, Cao Bile sat down in her seat. But she was not going to admit that she had been poisoned, even though it was already obvious that she had fallen into her own trap, and she accused Lin Tian of being a bad person. When the girl was almost unconscious, our hero suddenly remembered that there was one more thing he hadn't done. Cao Bile was very frightened, because the look on our hero's face did not bode well for her. With her last ounce of strength, she tried to tell him that what he was about to do was illegal. But he was already licking his lips with anticipation, and was not going to stop at anything. Xiao Biao was already anticipating that the guy would start hitting on her and couldn't resist it. Lin Tian simply did not understand why the girl was reacting so strangely, why it was against the law, and what was illegal about it in the first place. Lin Tian held the bag in his hands, and was about to pull himself up for food, and a silent scene hung between the characters. Apparently, the girl misunderstood the guy. Lin Tian didn't quite understand what she meant by illegality, and explained that what he was doing was a completely traditional Chinese virtue, and that there was nothing strange about taking food. Cao Bile had no idea how to invite someone to dinner, since he hadn't even eaten anything. To be honest, Cao Bile was even a little offended. After all, she was a great beauty, whom it was impossible to resist. And in her presence, Lin Tian continued to think about the leftovers. But what was wrong? Was the girl implying that she was more important than food? Cao Bile felt furious. The guy was like he was from another world. In the end, her anger grew into something more, and she began to throw food off the table. Our hero clearly did not like this gesture. After the food was destroyed, he was ready to incinerate the girl with his gaze. He couldn't take it anymore, and pulled Cao Bilo toward him. Her body was still weak, and she couldn't even resist the guy. His hand began to beat Cao Biao's buttocks. He did it without any childishness, simply punishing her for her misdemeanor. Chow Biao could do nothing about it and had to just endure it. Lin Tian was dissatisfied with the girl's behavior. How could she waste food and allow herself to break dishes? Food was sacred to him. He couldn't ignore this disrespect for food. Chow Bilo, in turn, wanted to call the guy the most offensive words, but she held back. Even her father had never hit her. But Lin Tian decided that if her father hadn't raised her properly, then he would do it for him. Chow Bi was shaking with pain, but it seemed more from the humiliation she had experienced. Our hero finished what he had started, gathered up all the leftovers, and was already heading for the exit, where Maori had returned by that time. Maori had no business with Lin Tian. He immediately inquired about the condition of his mistress, who was still feeling pain in her buttocks. Chow Bile did not dare to tell Maori what had happened to her, and dismissed it by saying that everything was fine. Maori had already told his mistress that everything was ready, and that Lin Tian was about to meet an unfortunate fate. Our hero was already on his bus when Xiaoli regained consciousness. Suddenly, he realized that he had never noticed before that Xiaoli was also a very beautiful girl. While they were driving, they were surrounded by the patrol police. They could no longer continue their journey. Based on a report from a concerned citizen, the police suspected that our hero was hiding a pile of stolen money. Lin Tian was a little taken aback, as he hadn't expected such a setup. Before he got off the bus, Xiaoli pulled him by the sleeve and handed him a gun. Our hero was surprised by this action, because what was he supposed to do with this gun? Shoot at the police? Meanwhile, the police officer was already delighted, as this was the perfect moment for him. He immediately pointed out to everyone that the suspect had a gun. The guns were pointed at our hero, but Lin Tian had never held a real gun before. Pretty quickly, the smug cop ordered his men to open fire on Lin Tian. But no one fired. The officers decided to disobey the order. Zhou Weiwei came to our hero's defense. She covered him with her body, preventing anyone from shooting. Zhu Weiwei demanded that Officer Yuan look closely at what Lin Tian was holding in his hands. It was a water pistol. And our hero confirmed all these words by shooting water into the air. Still, for Officer Yuan, this was no reason to stop what he had started, because Lin Tian had thoughts of resisting the police and was considered dangerous. Zhou Weiwei thought more sensibly, because in fact they had blocked the roads in all directions around them, and Lin Tian simply could not escape, so there was no need to shoot. Yan was wary. He remembered that Officer Weiwei had been investigating Lin Tian, so why was she now helping him when she had disliked this guy? Had she gotten too hot in the sun? In fact, Zhou Weiwei had no personal dislike for Lin Tian. She only relied on justice and believed that they should not let the bad guys get away and should catch the good guys. Lin Tian was so touched that Aunt Zhou called him a good guy that he couldn't help but hug her. It was clear that Zhou Weiwei was embarrassed and didn't want the guy to touch her, as he was still a suspect, but she just didn't see the need to shoot him. Officer Yuan was not going to watch these sappy scenes anymore and roughly pushed his colleague away. She couldn't take it and simply fell to the floor from the force with which Yuan pushed her. This greatly angered our hero. In his opinion, this was too much and crossed the line. Yuan mocked Lin Tianyu right to his face. Did he still think about helping others? Did he think that without Zhou Weiwei he would have someone else to support him? But Officer Yuan shouldn't have said too much because it made him look too stupid. Our hero turned the corner and ordered someone to come out. Yuan cautiously peered inside but couldn't see anything. But pretty soon he noticed a quadcopter with a camera flying out of there. Yen reacted quickly and caught the quadcopter. He understood that compromising evidence had been recorded on it, so with a sharp movement, he smashed the quadcopter and camera on the asphalt. Yuan thought he had destroyed the evidence, but Lin Tian did not seem upset by this. He claimed that Yuan knew in advance that streamer number 1, Chao Bil, and streamer number 2, Goddess Fei, were his actresses. Yuan's wig was barely staying on his head, but he tried to keep a straight face. He condemned Lin Tian, because what was so special about money that you had to spend it? You had to at least be alive to do that. Lin Tian could no longer stand this officer's stupidity, because he was really stupid, and apparently, he didn't even understand that there was such a thing as streaming. Yuan continued to accuse Lin Tian and reproach him for allegedly being able to do whatever he wanted with the money. Suddenly, a large crowd appeared. Goddess Fei had just said in the broadcast that viewers could meet her here, and people immediately came. The women groped Officer Yuan, thinking it was cool that his police uniform was so realistic, and his gun looked real too. They had seen all this in Chao Bilo's broadcast, and did not regret coming here at all. Lin Tian confirmed Officer Yuan's thoughts, because after all, with money, you could really do anything. Meanwhile, Cao Bilo's drug had finally worn off, and Lin Tian was no ordinary player, as the girl had to admit. Still, the girl really hoped that Maori had prepared everything according to plan, and now Lin Tian was clearly not in the mood to laugh. Maori assured his mistress that there could be no problems with him on the team. In that case, Cao had no reason to doubt him, and decided to call first to take care of Lin Tian, and let him know the consequences of what he had gotten himself into. She began to feel around in her pocket for her phone, but was surprised to find something else. She pulled out some kind of toy phone with a piggy bank from her pocket. Chow Biao flew into a rage when she realized that this bastard had replaced her phone. Our hero had thought ahead that Chow Biao's plan wasn't that simple, so he decided to use her phone for a live broadcast, and the Goddess Fei also started a broadcast. And it all really worked. Lin Tian could see for himself how powerful the crowd was. Only now could our hero confidently sign the contract when he saw the effectiveness of one of the streamers. Chow had signed the contract from the very beginning, but Lin Tian waited until the last moment to see where it would all lead. Lin Tian was satisfied because he had already recruited the second best streamer, and now he only had one left to complete his task. In the end, he simply couldn't resist the temptation to participate in the broadcast himself, to interact with viewers and find out if they liked such a passionate open-air broadcast. Everyone should remember him as Tian Lin from the live broadcast of Chao Bilo. After all, starting today, he would become the richest man in the world. People should watch his broadcast because tomorrow there would be a big giveaway. Lin Tian was already known for his noble deeds when he gave quite generous gifts. The audience had no doubt that he could give them something too, so they spread the news everywhere. Everything seemed to be going well, and the viewers were there, and the situation was under control. But still, he didn't have enough viewers. In the end, all the commotion was interrupted when someone fired a shot into the air, frightening the crowd. Officer Yuan finally resigned himself to the fact that he would not shoot Lin Tian, but would simply search his bus. For our hero, this was excellent news and a clear sign that he needed to act. Lin Tian acted out a scene with the officer in front of everyone, asking him not to search his bus because so many people were watching the broadcast. But if our hero obstructed the search, he would be in trouble, as the officer kept telling him. Therefore, he immediately gave the order to his employees to enter the bus and search it. But first, he turned off the camera broadcasting the event. Lin Tian, of course, thanked him for this and showed some obedience. In fact, this aroused some suspicion in the officer. He found it strange that this guy had changed his expression so quickly. Officer Yuan assumed that he wanted to say something in his defense, but Yuan did not miss the opportunity to gloat that it was too late for any excuses. The fact that the officer had smashed the phone that was broadcasting only made people want to know more about what was happening here. Moreover, everyone present here was part of Lin Tian's broadcast. Yin clearly felt out of place, but nevertheless tried to pretend that it didn't matter to him, and that the guy was about to be caught red-handed anyway. Finally, one of the police officers discovered a suspicious black suitcase, identical to the one that had gone missing. Yuan did not hide his excitement at this news. After all, he knew in advance that Lin Tian would not be able to escape anything that had been planted by his people. When the suitcase was opened, the light inside blinded the observer. Yuan was already rejoicing, thinking that gold bars were hidden there and that Lin Tian had fallen for his trap, because now the evidence was irrefutable. Yuan waited for Lin Tian to justify himself and repent, thinking that he shouldn't have loved studying so much. Officer Yuan had no idea what this was all about, or what kind of studies this guy was talking about. But later, everything became clear to him, because there was no money or gold bars in the suitcase, just simple math and English textbooks. There was a moment of silence. The officer didn't even know how to react, and he was filled with anger and rage at his failed mission. He had no idea what it all meant and where the stolen money was. What money was he talking about anyway? Lin Tian didn't understand him at all. The officer was so convinced that his plan was working, that he didn't hesitate to reveal that Lin Tian had hidden the stolen goods on the bus, and that his colleague had just found them. Lin Tian, in turn, did not lose his composure and began to accuse the officer of forcing his colleague to plant the loot on him. The situation began to escalate, and Officer Yuan openly threatened our hero. He claimed that discrediting the police was a crime. Lin Tian was not particularly frightened by this, but rather angry. In response, he warned the fool to put down his gun, otherwise he would not get away with just prison. The officer was struck by Lin Tian's confidence, because who could be so bold as to stop him? Lin Tian confidently replied that until recently it was indeed no one, but now that person was here. The officer only had to turn around to see a familiar face. The man was extremely curious to see if he could stop the officer, or maybe someone had doubts. All of Officer Yuan's confidence vanished in an instant when he saw the man above him, in terms of status, because it was Director Zhou from the Disciplinary Bureau. The Disciplinary Bureau had just received an internal report, and it was determined that the police had committed many disciplinary violations. Therefore, Director Zhou would be forced to continue the investigation and prosecute Officer Yuan in accordance with the law. They could not tolerate crime. Yuan had already been caught and tied up, but he tried to justify himself by saying that he didn't know where the stolen money had gone, because it had supposedly just been in his suitcase. After all this, Director Zhou turned his attention to Lin Tian. He guessed that it was he who had asked Zhou Weiwei to come to the district prosecutor's office. The girl confirmed everything, because there was nothing to hide. Director Zhou thought that at first glance it was wrong, but he recognized that Zhou Weiwei had a heart of gold, and moreover, he was quick-witted and calm in his actions. Zhou Weiwei got a little angry and embarrassed when Director Zhou called Lin Tian her boyfriend, because he wasn't her boyfriend. He was a suspect. However, it didn't matter to Director Zhou. He would return to organize the investigation, and Zhou Weiwei shouldn't talk nonsense on the street. These were fatherly words of advice, and it wasn't the first time Zhou Weiwei had heard them from her father, who was usually not very talkative. As expected, the system could make money appear or disappear. Lin Tian had already decided that this money would go towards increasing the popularity of Fei and himself. Chao Bilei still topped the charts, but the goddess Fei was catching up and continued to occupy the leading positions. Moreover, Lin Tian also began to actively promote his account, and was already in third place in popularity. This meant that the task had been completed, and our hero didn't need to look for any streamers. He had killed 2 birds with 1 stone. Of course, now he was looking forward to his reward. He really hoped it would be an improvement in his X-ray vision with a full body upgrade. But the reward for the task seemed rather boring to our hero. It was the opening of the main questline and a personal storage space. Still, our hero tried not to be discouraged, because it would probably come in handy sooner or later. In one of the skyscraper's offices, the stranger suddenly felt a sense of danger, but it interested him more than it frightened him. Lin Tian already had a new task. He needed to create a company, expand the staff, confirm the location of the office, and complete the first transaction. The reward was calculated and determined based on the percentage of the task completed. Surprisingly, this task had no time limits or strict requirements. Lin Tian tried to think everything through carefully. At the moment, he already had a company with 2 employees. However, he did not have an office, and the number of transactions was 0. Lin Tian already felt that he was about to become the richest man in the world. But in front of him, a man was tearfully begging him to finally sell him the product. Lin Tian was doing his usual work, and his customer was humbly waiting for Lin Tian to finish indulging in his thoughts of wealth. The guy felt awkward. The man just wanted to buy some sunflower oil, but because Lin Tian was distracted, he had to wait. Our hero was actually sad that after completing so many tasks, he had to work part-time to earn a living. Lin Tian's colleague was in such a hurry to get to the store that she slipped and spilled all the milk in the bottles. Of course, this did not escape the attention of the manager. The girl was immediately called in for a talk. The manager was dissatisfied because Chen continued to mess up, and he got the impression that she didn't need this part-time job. She could do nothing but apologize. But tears were already welling up in her eyes. The situation was not the best for her. The manager was very intimidating and asked ominously, "What am I going to do with you?" Xian repented and was ready to pay for the damaged goods, just so she wouldn't be fired from her job. With a satisfied look on his face, the manager warned her that half of her salary for that month would be deducted. Before leaving the office, the manager told the girl to wait for him in his office. He had something else he wanted to talk to her about. Lin Tian was sitting at his cash register, but he already had a feeling that something was wrong. The manager was always in a bad mood and was even willing to scold the guy. He was unhappy that Lin Tian was staring at something and was already prepared to cut his salary in half for such slow work. Our hero did not react to this in any way. These were not the first attacks from the manager, who had a rather nasty temper. Xian, in turn, felt guilty because Lin Tian had also been scolded because of her, so she apologized to him as well. Lin Tian wasn't angry with the girl at all. They were 2 poor students, and he believed that they should help each other. Xian practically glowed. She decided to go to the manager's office first, and then suggested going out for dinner after work, as she had half-price coupons. Lin Tian was completely moved, because this girl was an angel. Qian Dodo could only guess what the manager wanted, but before listening to his demands, she asked him not to fire her, and promised to do everything right. But that depended on how well Qian knew what to do. After all, the manager had his own needs. But suddenly, with a snap of his fingers, the cash register began to hang directly above the manager's head. Then, under its own weight, it simply fell right on the pervert's head. He didn't faint, but he was very angry, and he continued to threaten Lin Tian with dismissal for such actions. However, our hero didn't care. He wasn't attached to this job, and even if he was fired, he wouldn't be upset. In fact, the manager didn't waste any time, and fired Lin Tian on the spot. Lin Tian was surprised by this decision because how could he be fired? The manager must have misunderstood something. Moreover, from that moment on, it was the manager who was fired, because now the store belonged to Lin Tian. The man thought the guy was crazy. How could he buy this store? It was impossible. But if he didn't believe Lin Tian, he had to call and ask. At that moment, the manager called senior management, and they whispered amiably about something. In the end, the manager stood with a stony face, while Lin Tian waited for him to say something else. But he didn't say a word. Instead, he silently threw the watch straight at Lin Tian, but it hit the wall. He thought that Lin Tian was trying to deceive him, because he had just called senior management and found out that the store was not for sale. For some reason, Lin Tian looked frightened after that. But then he laughed as if nothing had happened, because did he tell this fool to call senior management? The manager was annoyed because he felt like he was being made to look like an idiot. Who else was he supposed to call if not them? In the end, Lin Tian handed him a piece of paper with a number on it and asked him to call that number. As he dialed the number, he warned Lin Tian that if he didn't get a satisfactory answer, he would send the guy to the police. The manager had no idea who he was calling, but the phone was answered quite quickly, and surprisingly, it was Lin Tian. There was no point in talking on the phone anymore. The manager's eyes showed surprise, and Lin Tian seemed to confirm what he had said. In the end, the man flew into a rage and was ready to kill Lin Tian for playing with him. He wanted to do it with a chair, but suddenly the chair in his hands just disappeared. Lin Tian decided he could reveal his cards and confess that he hadn't bought the store, but he had bought the land on which the store stood. And from now on, it was the office of Tian Tian Lin's company. There was no longer any place for the store here, so the new manager ordered the building to be demolished. Right before the manager's eyes, the store was being destroyed, and he couldn't do anything about it. Lin Tian suddenly remembered that his colleague Chen Dodo was an architect, so he offered her a job as an architect at his company. Our hero decided to take a break from construction and chat with his favorite teacher. By the end of the conversation, she understood everything. First, the person who told her to start broadcasting gave out gifts, and then the real identity of the owner of the company with which she signed a contract. Lin Tian didn't let Chen finish. He thought it was normal that she found out about it, and he didn't try to hide his identity. After all, he was the owner of the company. But Chen rudely interrupted him, and Lin Tian had to admit that the owner of the company was his father. In fact, our hero did not even expect such a turn of events, and did not understand why Chen thought so. In fact, she was convinced that Chen was just the son of a rich father, and that's why she wanted to tell him something. The son of a rich father. It was fair to say that Lin Tian's father belonged to the rich negative generation. Despite the fact that Chen was supposedly Lin Tian's father's employee as a teacher, she wanted to warn the young man. His social practice grade was almost 0, and things couldn't go on like this. First of all, as a rich son, Lin Tian didn't have to worry about food. Although last month our hero couldn't even afford enough food. Second, Chen was sure that Lin Tianyu didn't need to worry about clothes. Although in reality, our hero's white underwear had been washed together with his jeans and now had blue stripes. And thirdly, Chen reminded him that our hero didn't need to work. However, Lin Tian had just fired his boss yesterday, so now he really didn't need to work. That's why Lin Tian needed to devote more time to social practice, complete an internship, and earn points. Lin Tian was not going to make excuses, but said in advance that he had already found a construction site for the company building and would go there later to move bricks. Chen was actually embarrassed and didn't know what else to say to this guy, so she just wished him luck and told him to take care of himself. Lin Tian understood that it was pointless to try to convince his teacher otherwise if she had already made up her mind. Just before leaving, Chen reminded the young man to devote time to his internship, otherwise he would not receive his diploma. All this time, Hao had been eavesdropping on the conversation from the shadows, and he remembered perfectly well that Lin Tian might not get his diploma and be expelled from the university. However, he was ready to do everything to prevent Lin Tian from getting those credits, even if he tried. To this end, he called his father and complained that he had been short of money lately. Chairman Jian Danjing listened to his son and was a little upset by the situation. Someone else chimed in, saying that if the son wanted to spend money, the father should give it to him. However, money was no object to him, or at least that's what he told himself. The man had recently heard that Mr. Jian Danjing's funds had been frozen, so he was very curious as to where he would get the money for his son. Certainly, only the chairman himself knew this, but he did not know that the information about the freezing of his accounts was also known to third parties. The man was aware that the chairman had also secretly divorced his wife, but he could still take his reserves. Jiang Danjing was furious that someone had been secretly investigating him and now knew all his secrets. It was not just out of human curiosity, but for selfish purposes. The man made a tempting offer, and the chairman should have considered it. Otherwise, it would not be his fault if something happened to his restaurant. The stranger left his business card. His name was Da Fan Pai. Jiang Danjing had to think about the offer. Meanwhile, our hero, as he had told teacher Chen, humbly worked on the construction site, stacking bricks. Carrying bricks turned out to be the best way for him to relax. Meanwhile, Chen Dodo kindly prepared lunch and called all the brothers to eat. Lin Tian really hoped that today's lunchbox would contain a large chicken leg, which he loved so much. Chen Dodo specially prepared food for her boss and was happy to personally hand him his lunchbox. Lin Tian was actually flattered, but he felt that they were all one family, and she shouldn't single him out. He didn't have time to take his food before some muscle-bound guy snatched it, deciding to jump the queue. He didn't know what a queue was, and if Lin Tian didn't want any trouble, he had to be an obedient boy. Later, this man noticed Chen Dodo. He'd never seen her before and hoped she would have time to hang out later. Lin Tian couldn't stand it. He just boiled over when someone started harassing Chen Dodo again. But someone's hand calmed our hero down. The guy asked him to wait, because they couldn't afford to mess with this scumbag. It was clear that Lin Tian was already ready to jump into a fight, but he didn't understand why he couldn't do it. It turns out that this guy had a difficult past, and it was connected with a gang of gangsters. This man was also unhappy that the guys were whispering among themselves. He warned them that they should be afraid of him, or he might beat them up. A phone call distracted him from the conversation, but he promised that he would deal with the guys when he returned. This fool's behavior was alarming, and Lin Tian was completely indignant at what was happening. The guy asked Lin Tian not to leave, because they could get in trouble, and if they got caught, their wages could be deducted. But it seemed that the guy didn't understand the situation, because the muscle man would be in trouble because Lin Tian was the boss here. The guy probably didn't even realize that Lin Tian was really the boss, because where had you ever seen a boss working among ordinary laborers? The big man turned to his companion, who was standing in the shadows like Brother Shan, probably because he could help him with something. Brother Shan said that he had already sent his people to the construction site, so all that was left was for him to do it. Of course, our hero could not ignore these whispers and assumed that they were planning to do something. The situation was critical. Xiaoli was still undergoing anti-hypnosis therapy, and he had no help. And at the construction site, a gang had already gathered around Chen Dodo and that guy. The guy was in a critical situation and had already been beaten up, but he tried to hold on as best he could, and finally asked Lin Tian to come back and not leave, because he couldn't fight off all these scumbags on his own. But they mocked him even more for being so weak that he couldn't even fight back. And how could he still say that they would be ruined if Lin Tian came? Was he really trying to brag about it? One of the scumbags became curious to see if it would hurt the guy if he hit him with a shovel. Suddenly, our hero's bus pulled up to the site, ready to run over all these scumbags. Lin Tian was very curious to know if it would hurt if this scumbag was run over by a bus. He couldn't help himself and wanted to check it out. Lin Tian was extremely dissatisfied and addressed the person who was causing all these problems directly. It was clear that this piece of trash was scared, although he tried to defend himself with the name of his boss, saying, "Do you know who my boss is?" In fact, our hero didn't care who he was at all. But the scumbag couldn't understand how his brother Shan could lose face like that. In the end, Lin Tian actually met his old, precious acquaintance, who was supposedly the boss here. They were probably very happy to see each other. Although Lin Tian did not expect to see his old acquaintance here, he tried not to show it. He greeted Shanya's brother cordially, immediately asking if he really wanted to scare him. Shanya's body still remembered the pain that Lin Tian had once inflicted on him, and unconsciously, the man began to tremble and cover his sensitive areas. Lin Tian did not play with Shanya for long, warning him immediately that he had to get lost, or he would not be able to hold the shovel. One of the scumbags couldn't take it anymore and decided to intervene in the conversation, saying, "How dare Lin Tian talk to Brother Shan like that? Who does he think he is?" Lin Tian finally confirmed his suspicions that this scumbag was also hanging out with Shanya, which didn't improve his situation. But he said it with pride, and even as if it were something he deserved. And anyway, was there anyone in the neighborhood who wasn't afraid of them? While this fool was talking incessantly, someone hit him on the head with their hand. He flew into a rage and couldn't imagine who would dare hit him and who was tired of living. But it was his mother standing in front of him. The scumbag's gaze immediately dimmed. Apparently, his mother clearly did not like her son's behavior and had to teach him a lesson. This little shit had the nerve to say that she was tired of living. Yes, he was probably tired of living. How could she still be alive with a son like him? His mother thought she should have already died and been cremated. She was ready to kill that bastard, and her son felt guilty and apologized to his mother in tears. Mom was very happy that the young man had picked her up. Otherwise, her bad boy would have made a big mistake. Lin Tian was proud of himself and believed that helping people was his passion. Shanya was left without one piece of trash, which his mother had taken away for re-education. Now Lin Tian had to re-educate Shanya, since his mother was absent. Shanya understood perfectly well that he was cornered, and openly said that he had been asked to do this, and was ready to leave right away. But before leaving, our hero asked Shanya to do something too. He wanted Shan to tell him about his employer. It was such a small favor, but Shan couldn't do it because there were rules, and he couldn't break them. To do this, our hero had to throw in a little extra to make it easier to break those rules. Shan still understood that he was doing the wrong thing, that he couldn't break the rules. In that case, Lin Tian decided to push a little harder and gave him 2 more bags of money. The money clouded his mind. Shanya forgot all the rules and said that the guy's name was Jian Hao. How dare this guy challenge his boss Lin Tian? It was just crazy. Lin Tian was quite satisfied. After all, the mafia is a service industry. Our hero was well aware that Shanya had connections, and it just so happened that Lin Tian was about to do something very grand. People whispered about it, and what Lin Tian Shanya said next shocked him. Meanwhile, Cao Bilo received an extremely indecent proposal, which she refused and could not accept under any circumstances. Lin Tian was, of course, dissatisfied with his subordinate's behavior. How could she disobey her boss? For the girl, it was simply unacceptable. She couldn't understand how he could force her to do such a thing. But his guests just wanted to play with Cao, and Lin Tian was only asking her to accept them. He didn't see anything wrong with that. Cao Bilo was furious and confused. She would never have thought that Lin Tian would turn out to be such a person. But the girl couldn't do anything about it. She couldn't break her contract with our hero, so she had no choice but to agree. Breaking the contract could cost her dearly, as Lin Tian was happy to remind her. Lin Tian seemed like a disgusting person to Cao, and she was ready to scream to the whole world. But would that have helped her? Out of helplessness, she simply threw her slippers at Lin Tian's closed door, who was already outside telling her to come on time tomorrow. Her anger knew no bounds. Would she really have to obey him? First, she decided to call Maori to ask a certain gentleman for help. Maori tried to dissuade his mistress from doing so, as it was clearly not the best decision on his part. But Cao saw no other way out. This man was the only one who could help her. Brother Dafan Pai was the only person in the world who would not take money. Nevertheless, Maori was adamant, asking his mistress to reconsider. If she asked him for help, he would make them indebted to him. Cao could not be persuaded, and what's more, she was indignant that Maori had started treating her this way. Maori was forced to carry out the lady's task, and even apologized to her. In an hour, he had to arrange a meeting between Cao Biao and Dafan Pai. An hour later, Dafan Pai was delighted to finally meet Cao, even though his name was like thunder. After a brief exchange of pleasantries, Cao Bilo decided to get down to business and explain why she had asked Dafan Pai's brother to come here. But Dafan did not let her continue. He wanted her to stop talking and give him a chance to look. He wanted to see the most intimate secret in Cao Biao's heart. The girl could no longer utter a word. She seemed to be overwhelmed or hypnotized. Dafan dug up her deepest memories, the ones that tormented her soul the most. One of those memories was an accident in which people had died. As a child, she felt alienated from human society, as if people condemned her and did not want to accept her. She had to face danger and stand up for herself so as not to be taken advantage of. She lost both her parents, lived on the streets, and was ruled by local bullies. Cao Bilo had a very interesting secret, according to Defanya. Cao Bilo didn't fully understand what had just happened to her, and how did the guy know all this information? They hadn't even had time to talk about anything when Dafan admitted that the girl was in his debt. Cao Bilo decided to clarify whether he meant that he was ready to help her. Dafan confirmed everything. He already knew without words that Cao Bilo wanted him to deal with Lin Tian. He admitted that many people had been begging him to do so lately. Dafan hadn't met such a rival in a long time, so he wanted to see his 3 heads and 6 arms. Cao Bi was already there the next day, and still couldn't come to terms with the fact that she had to entertain some guests. She found it disgusting. The girl was already anticipating how they would get her drunk and harass her. But she tried to dismiss these thoughts as quickly as possible. After all, Dafan was here, and she thought that Lin Tian would not be able to resist him. To stay in touch with her protector, she used a special earpiece to warn him of any changes. Outside the restaurant, Dafan and Jun Hao were already waiting and ready to take action. First of all, Dafan gave Jian Hao the task of going and detaining Lin Tian for a minute. Jian Hao obediently listened to his boss. After all, they had a common goal. Dafan still wanted to take a closer look at Jian Hao's secret in order to solve the whole mystery. Lin Tian was about to enter the restaurant when he ran into his favorite classmate. Lin Tian remembered this guy as a student with a shiny bald spot and asked him how he could help him. Jian Hao resentfully reminded him of his name and wanted to know why his classmate Lin Tian had come to eat at this particular restaurant. But that was none of his business, and Lin Tian had no intention of explaining himself to him. Before Lin Tian left and failed his assignment from Dafan, Jian Hao tried once again to detain the guy. Lin Tian was, of course, unhappy, but he turned around anyway, wanting to know what he wanted. Jiang Hao finally revealed that this restaurant belonged to his family, and that he could tell the chefs to prepare a special table for Lin Tian. Lin Tian flatly refused such a generous offer. He just wanted Jiang Hao to make sure he would pay the bill after dinner. Jiang Hao couldn't hold back and said everything he was thinking, that Lin Tian was breaking the law. After they entered the restaurant, Jiang Hao decided to draw everyone's attention. After all, our hero wanted to understand where exactly he had broken the law. Jiang Hao pounced on the guy with accusations that right here, in this room, he was forcing a streamer from his company to entertain guests. Wasn't that human trafficking? Lin Tian did not accept such accusations. He wanted to see concrete evidence, because his business was honest. Jiang Hao didn't believe any of it, and in order to finally get to the bottom of this case, he headed for the door. After all, Shan Ya had already told him about Lin Tian's plans. But when he opened the door to that very private room, his perception was turned upside down. Cao Bi was surrounded by a bunch of kids who wanted the girl's attention, and there was no prostitution or other inappropriate stuff going on. Jian Hao had to eat. After all, these were not the guests he expected to see in this room. The guy even felt a little depressed. He couldn't believe that these were really the guests he was talking about. All these children. Lin Tian felt extremely strange, because even if they were children, so what? He didn't understand the guy's violent reaction. In the end, Jian Hao left empty-handed, accusing Lin Tian of cruelty, but Lin Tian wasn't interested in the assessments people gave him. And yet, our hero had to admit that there was no one better than Cao Bile who could accept these children like that. She was simply a charming princess. Everything wasn't so bad. Cao Bile had prepared herself for the worst outcome, but for some reason she still felt upset. Da Fan, who had been trying to keep up with everything that was going on, was ultimately confused and didn't understand what was happening at all. His lack of understanding made him angry. Moreover, he couldn't understand what kind of distorted code he could see on Lin Tian. Cao Bi didn't have to babysit the children for too long, and by nightfall, they were leaving the restaurant. Lin Tian thought that maybe the girl wanted to apologize to him. And she really did want to apologize to him and admit she was wrong. She was ashamed. The girl said that Lin Tian had a perverted mind. He couldn't believe that Cao Bi really thought he wanted to make her do something like that. But Lin Tian didn't even clarify anything. He just presented her with a fait accompli. What else could she think? This time, receiving guests is a free experience. But tomorrow, our hero will be able to make his first transaction. The most difficult part of the main task for our hero was setting up a company and hiring employees. He was so absorbed in his thoughts about what was happening that he didn't notice the man bumping into him with his shoulder. It was Da Fan himself, who probably did it on purpose, but nevertheless did not hesitate to apologize to the guy. Cao Bile didn't understand how to interpret his appearance here, but she tried not to show that they were conspiring. Da Fan had a wonderful skill. He could see a person's deepest wounds. But with Lin Tian, he could only see numbers. And from close up, he could see the numbers 11 and 637%. Whereas with Cao Bile, everything was written out clearly. Da Fan was extremely intrigued by Lin Tian, and he was eager to solve the mystery of what those numbers meant. Cao Biao had already left, but Jiang Hao was still with his master, awaiting further instructions. Da Fan decided that there was no need to engage in direct combat with Lin Tian. He wanted to start with the people around him first. The next day, Teacher Chen received a call from Dr. Dan. She hoped to hear that her father was on the mend and feeling better. But the doctor's answer clearly did not satisfy the girl, and made her stare at one point for a few seconds. On the same day, Lin Tian's colleague, Chen Dodo, received a call. She had received a call from her landlord, and she happily informed us that she could pay him the rent for this month right away. But the landlord's answer clearly did not satisfy her. Next in line was Cao Bil, oddly enough. It was a normal day for her, but suddenly she also received a call. The call came from an unknown number, but she answered it anyway. What the person on the other end of the line said made the girl nervous. Nevertheless, she pulled herself together and said that she understood everything. Cao wondered what Lin Tian was going to do this time. Meanwhile, Lin Tian nervously scratched his head as if he had fleas. He called everyone he could, but no one answered his calls. What's more, all of his employees quit on the same day, and none of them said a word. Lin Tian felt lost. He didn't know what to do now, and the percentage of his task completion had been drastically reduced from 11 to 3. But finally, he got a call. It turned out that someone had told him about a race that was going to take place that very evening. The system gave him the following task. He had to win the final race, using the same car as before. Last time the reward was excellent, and Lin Tian hoped that this reward would help him overcome the crisis. A few minutes later, someone knocked on his door, and when he opened it, he was surprised by such unexpected guests. Da Fan was standing on the doorstep. He hoped to join Tian Tian Lin's company and wanted to have an interview. Lin Tian had posted a job advertisement in advance, so he kindly let the stranger in. Da Fan, of course, did not miss the fact that Lin Tian's number had become much smaller. But in any case, Da Fan already anticipated that danger would await Lin Tian at the end of the race. And so, the route of this race was longer than all the previous ones. Our hero was already at the starting line alongside the other sports cars. From the city center, the racers had to drive to the eastern part to get a marker, and then head west to the end of the city in one go. Our hero had already heard about this race format. In any case, the racer had nothing to lose, and if he won, he would earn a reward. This final was the same as last year, with no restrictions on the route or methods. The winner received membership in the Club of Divine Heroes, but the losers would have to give up the most valuable thing they had. Lin Tian felt discouraged, because no one had even told him about these rules before. And so, without further ado, the racers had to get ready and start racing. Before they started driving, Lin Tian said that he was counting on his brother Dafan. His company was not in high demand, but he still couldn't give it away. Dafan promised that he would do everything in his power, as if nothing had happened. Although in reality, he was only dreaming and wanted to see Lin Tian's face as soon as possible after he gave up his company. Snowstorm with Su Xueqing also participated in these races, and now had no intention of giving in to other racers, and rushed ahead of everyone. The racers were being watched. Most people were interested in watching the reigning champion, the queen of these races. This year, many people came to try to break her winning streak, but in reality, all that was known was that she had lost to a mysterious dark horse in the previous preliminary race, and that this car had been modified by a god. The ghost bus! It moved slowly but steadily. The host didn't even know how to comment on it, only suggesting that it was a tortoise and hare strategy. The driver and Lin Tian were completely relaxed, but Dafan still decided to point out that their car was too slow to win. Lin Tian reminded him that he had everything planned out and there was no need to worry. Our hero, as before, decided to call the police first and dialed the number, but no one answered. There was no network coverage anywhere. Dafan was already rejoicing. Could it be that Lin Tian really had everything planned out? Actually, it was Dafan who had everything planned out. However, there would be no network coverage in the entire city tonight. In that case, our hero would have to use Plan B. Super acceleration. You didn't think he would have only one plan for all occasions. First of all, this plan required traveling in the opposite direction to the one indicated by Lin Tian. Dafan hesitated, because the road Lin Tian wanted to take led to the south of the city. Everything was correct, but only by taking a detour would they be able to speed up. Many cars were already approaching the checkpoint in the eastern part of the city. Zhang Hao was already happy that Lin Tian's bus was so slow that he couldn't even see it in his rearview mirror. Lin Tian shouldn't even think about correcting his position now, because it was simply impossible. Zhang Hao believed that he would be the first to pass the checkpoint. When they stamped his hand with a special stamp, he noticed a snowflake fall on his hand. But since when did it snow in the summer? Sticking his head out of the car, the guy discovered that it was snowing heavily outside. Of course, it was artificial winter. Snow was literally falling from airplanes, creating a winter atmosphere. But our hero's bus had already been prepared in advance, as it was part of the plan, and now it glided smoothly through the snow. Lin Tian had planned everything carefully because rolling through the snow made it easier than ever to pick up speed. Of course, all the cars had summer tires, which made driving more difficult than it could have been. It was very difficult to control the car, creating dangerous situations, but the bus drove on as if nothing had happened. Zhang Hao, out of sheer helplessness, got out of the car and started crying, not understanding why this was happening to him and why it had suddenly started snowing. Finally, he noticed the huge planes that were dumping tons of snow. It's hard to imagine what he was thinking at that moment, but he clearly felt dissatisfied. After all, he was so determined to win, but in the end, he lost again. The artificial snowfall was the secret to Lin Tian's true acceleration. Driving around the southern part of the city just to get to the checkpoint, what was Lin Tian thinking? That was the question Dafan was asking himself right now. Our hero had to work hard to convince them to get him snow. Money was not a problem for him. He wanted snow by any means necessary. Planes, rockets, artillery, it didn't matter. Moreover, he also demanded several caterpillars, and when the pilots saw the signal, they would have to release the snow. Lin Tian had to pay a lot for such desires, because few people believed that such a madman existed. But fans still did not understand Lin Tian's logic. He spent a huge amount of money, and it was obvious that he was mismanaging his finances. Was his company worth such an investment? In the end, the plane's supplies were completely exhausted, and there could be no more snow. Dafan suggested that they simply go to the office and bribe the judge. Of course, in that case, Dafan's people would catch Lin Tian red-handed, and he would lose both his money and his reputation. That was Dafan's dream. But for our hero, this would be a miserable turn of events. Dafan shouldn't have worried about such things at all, but should have listened to his boss and continued north. Dafan didn't fully understand Lin Tian's train of thought, because if they turned north now, they would end up right in the city center. Dafan should have just trusted his boss, and they would have won. Dafan was unhappy because he didn't understand much, but still, he had to hurry because it was his first day at work, and he had to behave well. There were only a few miles left to the finish line, and the race was about to end. The first group had already broken through, but for some reason there was no sign of the Queen of Racing. Everyone was curious about what had happened to her, because she had always been in the lead before. In fact, Su Xueqing was sure that Lin Tian would not compete so fairly, so she was expecting some kind of trick. Several cars were ahead, but surprisingly, they hadn't fallen into any traps yet. So, in that case, Su Xueqing decided to speed up and get closer to the finish line. Everyone was very happy when the Queen of Racing broke through. They thought she was just saving her strength. After all, such a champion had to win. Su Xueqing was forced to stop abruptly because she heard the sound of a train, and yet she fell into the trap, just as she had guessed earlier. There was a high-speed railway here, but the girl didn't understand why the train appeared here and right now. She was sure that this was definitely all part of Lin Tian's plan. But before the train appeared, Su Xueqing was still in the lead. Suddenly, Lin Tian called out to Su Xueqing because he recognized his beloved girl. How could he ignore her? Lin Tian rushed forward, and Su Xueqing could do nothing but stand and watch. As the old saying goes, behind every successful man, there is always a woman who silently supports him, and it seems that for Lin Tian, that woman was Su Xueqing. Since Su Xueqing's car was called Snowstorm, Lin Tian decided that his car would be called Day Ice. Lin Tian could already see that they were getting closer and closer to the finish line, which meant that an important maneuver was about to take place. The bus detached its extra parts and simply jumped over the obstacles. Lin Tian had probably never had so much fun before. Although the rules did not prohibit it, breaking the cars with a train was too much in Su Huiqing's opinion. Nevertheless, the girl was not going to give up and became even more determined. After all, she also had some tricks up her sleeve. If Lin Tian turned the car into a train, and that was considered his best trick, then fine. Su Huiqing also had a button for emergencies. As soon as she pressed it, the car began to transform. The snowstorm turned into a racing motorcycle, which Su Huiqing rode perfectly. This girl was unstoppable, and wanted to win the second half of the race with her nitro. A high-speed train for a bus. Just think about it. Dafan couldn't even imagine Lin Tian's fantasy, how he came up with such an idea. The guy already assumed that this Lin Tian was some kind of divine being. How else could he have come up with something like that? Lin Tian, meanwhile, was already starting to get bored. He was sad because there were no rivals at all. Just as he thought about it and turned around, he saw Su Huiqing behind him, chasing him at the speed of sound. In fact, Su Huiqing knew in advance that this would happen, so she came up with a plan to ensure victory in this race. This time, she was sure that Lin Tian had lost. Lin Tian seemed not to hear these words at all, paying more attention to the fact that his little Su was wearing black again. Dafan did not ignore Lin Tian's words, and did not quite understand where this guy saw black. They were already behind Su Huiqing, but did Boss Lin really not want to speed up? Lin Tian didn't want to because it was pointless, since they had already won. Su Huiqing, meanwhile, was already counting down the last few meters. She only had a few hundred meters left, and she was sure she had won. Su Huiqing crossed the finish line first, just as predicted. The commentator had already announced Su Huiqing's victory. Everyone was happy that the queen of racing had won again, and her car had evolved completely. Slowly and unhurriedly, the ghost bus took second place. After all, second place was also at stake. Su Huiqing, of course, did not miss the opportunity to remind Lin Tianyu that he had lost. But slowly and unhurriedly, the bus continued to move and drove past the finish line. The commentator thought that this racer was unable to admit defeat and simply wanted to escape. Lin Tian shouted loudly from the bus that it was time to finish and that people needed to get their salaries. A crowd of people immediately rushed towards him, trying to run up to the bus as quickly as possible. Only now did Su Huiqing realize that she had crossed a fake finish line. She had only reached the false finish line. Everyone cheered and praised Lin Tian because he was the #1 boss in the world. Su Huiqing was upset because it was another defeat. Well, Dafan was interested in how she, Chao Bilei, and Jian Hao managed to run into Lin Tian. Su Huiqing was quite rude, because all this had nothing to do with Dafan. He was the #1 eye that could see through everyone. So why couldn't he handle Lin Tian himself? Dafan admitted honestly that he couldn't see through Lin Tian, and moreover, he admired him. What was even stranger to him was the meaning of the numbers on his body. He couldn't solve this mystery. Dafan initially introduced himself as Xiao Long. Our hero didn't know his real name and addressed him that way, so he asked his new employee to add a chicken leg to his lunch today. Su Huiqing was furious because even all these spectators had been invited by Lin Tian. Moreover, these people were now employees of his company, Tian Tian Lin. And thanks to the large number of people hired, the task completion rate increased significantly. Our hero was not going to stop there, and now wanted to bring back the people who had already quit. Dafan was surprised by this proposal. Hadn't they told Lin Tian? At this point, Dafan realized that he was saying too much, and abruptly stopped talking. But our hero did not miss this suspicious moment. The new employee, Xiao Long, shouldn't have known about them at all. Dafan was angry with himself and assumed that Lin Tian was just testing him. In the end, he had to finish the sentence he had started, and he thought that surely they were going to celebrate Boss Lin's victory. Lin Tian saw no point in celebrating the victory. He thought it would be better to hand out the money and everyone would be happy anyway. When our hero finally paid everyone, they returned to their bus and were about to leave on business. Lin Tian was still dissatisfied, because after that moment he realized that this Xiao Long was far from being a simple guy. However, Dafan felt the same way about Lin Tian. The more he got to know him, the more impressed he was. When the bus finally left the race, Su Huiqing gave in to her emotions and hit the motorcycle. She did everything she could to win, but she couldn't do it. What can I say? Even Dafan Pai failed. But the girl couldn't leave it at that, and wanted to teach Lin Tian a lesson. Meanwhile, our hero had already arrived at Cao Biao's lovely house. He entered the house. It was already late, but he hoped to talk to Chao. However, he probably did not expect to see what he saw next. Chao Bilei was in the company of Zhou Weiwei, who was probably interrogating the girl, and she was denying everything. Chao claimed that she had not been involved in a certain matter for a long time, but this time all the evidence pointed to her, and she could not get away with it. Lin Tian felt awkward and assumed that he had arrived at the wrong time. Still, he decided to intervene. Zhou Weiwei began to question our hero. She needed to know if he had any connection to Cao Bil, who was a member of the gang. Chao Bilei also noticed the young man. For some reason, she thought that it was all Lin Tian's doing, and that he had set her up. This was probably the legendary battle between Aura and Indra, our hero thought. Lin Tian couldn't take the flood of words, and decided that someone had to explain to him what was going on here. Cao Bilei was a streamer, and was suspected of involvement in the recent platform fraud. Each of the girls said something different, and it turned into a mess. In the end, our hero couldn't take it anymore, and silently asked Cao Bil to be quiet, and not say anything unnecessary. However, she obeyed, even though she was slightly dissatisfied. Lin Tian wanted to discuss everything peacefully and calmly, so he asked everyone to sit down and asked Officer Zhou to explain everything slowly. In short, an incident involving Cao Biao had occurred that very morning. The streaming platform launched a discount for replenishing the balance. That is, replenish 1 yuan, and then get 50. Lin Tian was even upset that he didn't know about it, because for him, it was a great loss not to know such a thing. In the end, many viewers participated in the promotion. The top-ups were successful. However, a problem arose immediately after the top-ups. The managers and moderators of the live broadcast disappeared at the same time, and the cockfighting company was involved in this. In fact, many suspects simply disappeared along with the money they received from the transactions. The only person who could be found now was Cao Bilo, one of the main suspects. The girl felt lost. A bunch of thoughts were flying through her head. She wanted to say something, but she couldn't quite get her thoughts straight. Lin Tian decided to support Cao, and said that he believed her, that she was not involved in this. After all, our hero trusted his employees unconditionally, and he was sure that Cao had not done anything like that. Moreover, he took all the blame for Cao upon himself, and this was more than just words. It proved his confidence in Cao. Zhou Weiwei was very surprised by this action. Nevertheless, because Lin Tian had already helped the police several times, the officer decided to give him a warning. A special investigation team was set up for this case, and Lin Tian and Cao Bilo had a maximum of 2 days. Our hero was satisfied with this decision. 2 days were more than enough for him, because he was ready for it. Lin Tian was still holding the girl by the shoulder for support, and when Zhou Weiwei left her house, Cao gently touched his hand. Cao Bilo was very grateful to the guy, because she had recently quit her job, but despite all this, he still helped her. Lin Tian spoke to her seriously, because despite everything, he considered her his wonderful employee. Although the problems had not been solved, they had been postponed, and the girl felt the guy's support next to her and could practically relax. Lin Tian was closer to Cao than usual, not only physically, but also in terms of their relationship. It seemed that in just a moment, they could kiss, forgetting everything and giving themselves to each other. But this romantic moment was interrupted by a sudden appearance. Xiao Li was already in top form. Boss Lin's predictions had indeed come true, as Xiao Li remembered, so she assumed they could start acting. Lin Tian was happy to see his precious employee, but our hero expected something to happen. Cao Bilo felt guilty towards Xiao Li, so she apologized to her for hypnotizing her earlier. The hypnosis had long since worn off, so Xiao Li held no grudge. At this point, she had quit her main job, and was now working exclusively as Lin Tian's personal assistant. Lin Tian was relaxed, and in a good mood as usual, so now he was going to go with Xiao Li to take care of the fugitives. Da Fan was waiting for them on the street, and Cao decided to clarify what exactly Lin Tian had predicted about the broadcast and the cockfights. In fact, our hero just had a vague feeling that something might happen soon, so he sent people to train stations, airports, and highways. People had just learned that several hidden individuals had used certain means of transportation, but after tracking them down, a problem arose. For example, investor Li Sangxiang, one of the shareholders of the cockfighting broadcast, a rich kid, was also one of the criminals who had fled with the money. Lin Tian was just beginning to delve into the details of this case, and hoped that the investigation had already been carried out. Xiao Li confirmed that he would be participating in an online gaming tournament that evening. For some reason, this fact amused our hero. An online gaming tournament did not sound serious. Nevertheless, in such games, donations always decided the outcome, and Lin Tian could confidently say that he was good at it. Lin Tian was about to get on the bus, and Da Fan Pai followed his boss, but the latter blocked his way. Lin Tian told his employee that he was going home to play games, so he didn't need to follow him. Da Fan was even confused for a moment, and thought that he could drive the bus for his boss. But since Xiao Li had already returned, Da Fan could relax. However, this guy did not want to rest at all and offered that he could also help, and was ready to do whatever his boss said. Although deep down, he knew he would just be pretending to help. Lin Tianyu didn't like such assertiveness at all. To him, it even seemed suspicious. Da Fanya was not allowed on the bus, but at the end, Lin Tian asked him to prepare a foot bath for him. He wanted to return and wash his feet. Cao Bilo, meanwhile, thought about it, because it turned out that Lin Tian wasn't so bad after all, and she didn't need to turn to Da Fan. So she decided to warn Lin Tian that this worker, known as Da Fan, or nicknamed Dragon, was not so simple. For some reason, our hero assumed that the broadcast being shut down had something to do with him. Otherwise, what else could Cao Bilo mean by this? The girl thought that this was quite possible, and in any case, he could not be blindly trusted. Lin Tian quickly changed his serious mood to a light one, because he already knew this, and it had long been no secret to him. If Lin Tian knew about this, why hadn't he fired the guy yet? It was simple. When Da Fan was near Lin Tian, his tricks simply couldn't work, and Lin Tian could easily control him. Meanwhile, Lin Sansheng was already immersed in his games, rejoicing in his latest victory. He believed that no one else would dare to challenge him because he was invincible. But suddenly, a new opponent entered the game. Lin Tian had already joined Li Sanchong, although he didn't even consider him a rival, but rather another weakling. Li Sang-sun couldn't even figure out who he was, because he didn't even have a beginner's set. He probably thought he was a complete novice. So he decided to launch a crushing attack right away to defeat his opponent. Besides, fighting a player like Tian Tianlin seemed like a waste of time and resources. Li Sangsheng thought victory was obvious, but suddenly he was defeated by Lin Tian. Just think, a noob won in solo. Could anything be more absurd? Li Sangsheng was so angry at his loss that he couldn't believe such a thing was even possible. He lost and couldn't defeat a seemingly simple guy without equipment, even with his best Golden God equipment. Defeating Li Sangsheng without equipment? This guy must be a cheater. But how could anyone tell that Lin Tian wasn't wearing any equipment? Probably, Li Sanzhong simply couldn't afford to buy such equipment. At that moment, it dawned on the guy that it was probably all a disguise, and the real equipment was underneath it. It could definitely be the legendary transparent armor. which has a microscopic chance of dropping. Li Sangxiong thought that compared to this guy, he was probably not a donor, and this guy must be a donation maniac to get such equipment. Li Sangxiong was faced with an important question. Should he use his remaining money to donate it? Lin Tian no longer saw the point in playing, since there weren't even any worthy opponents here, so he wanted to remain a legend in this game. Li Sangxiong's hand was shaking from indecision, because there was a lot of money at stake, and all for a regular online game. But he couldn't. He couldn't lose in a game where he was the best. His ego would simply crush him. Li Sangxiong went to the lottery equipment store in the game, and bought 10 spins for 100 each, spending 64,800 yuan. According to his plan, such a number of spins in a row would be an excellent method, and he decided to start right away to test his luck. He had an endless number of attempts where he tried to win something, but he never got the legendary armor. In the end, he reached his limit and simply could no longer count the number of spins he had made. He could no longer continue like this. Li Sangxiong was deeply saddened and did not understand why he was having such problems. But suddenly, in the midst of his panic, he received a private message from an unknown sender. It was written by Lin Tian, saying that if Li Sangxiong wanted the legendary donated transparent armor, he could sell it to him. Such an offer surprised Li Sangxiong, and he already anticipated that they probably wanted to make a big profit off him. Therefore, he decided that he, Li Sangxiong, even if he died as a vegetable or jumped off a building, he would not want Lin Tian's excellent transparent armor. But our hero made the guy an attractive offer that Li Sangxiong simply couldn't refuse. What Lin Tian offered really intrigued Li Sangxiong, and he already looked at the offer differently. However, he didn't refuse for long and agreed quite quickly, already rejoicing that he was number one again. Lin Tian was also happy on his part, because he had already gotten what he wanted, and it turned out to be quite simple. Chao Bile felt guilty, thinking that Lin Tian had done all this for her, but he didn't even need such rare equipment. Lin Tian was surprised when the girl called his equipment rare, because he had a dozen more just like it, and this could actually be seen on the screen. He really did have a lot of such equipment. Chao Bi couldn't imagine how lucky one would have to be to get so much legendary equipment. But in reality, it was very simple. Our hero had simply bought this gaming company and could create millions of such equipment sets. None of the girls remained indifferent, because who would have thought that Lin Tian would even spend money and buy an entire company for such a cause? But to be more precise, our hero simply traded for this company while he had the opportunity. Cao Bi was almost in tears, because she thought that Lin Tian had traded the Tian Tian Lin company just for her. To be honest, our hero was a little surprised and didn't understand why the girl thought that. Chao actually even speculated that Lin Tian liked her so much that he went to such lengths. But the guy just laughed, because how could she even think such a thing? How could he trade his brainchild, Tian Tian Lin, for some gaming company? Xiaoli watched all this from the sidelines and was surprised that right in front of her was the legendary straightforward man, hardened by steel, but simply put, a virgin. After her subtle hints and straightforward answers, Lin Tianxiao felt uncomfortable, but she still tried to understand Lin Tian better. Finally, Lin Tian suggested recalling the rules of the race, where the loser had to give up their most valuable possession. You see, our hero traded several small companies for 60% of the shares in a gaming company. Then Lin Tian asked the programmers to add enhanced characteristics to his avatar. Our hero's characteristics became much stronger than those of any highly equipped player. So in reality, there was no legendary transparent armor. Lin Tian seemed quite satisfied with his work and decided to move on to the next step. He wrote to programmer Zhang and told him to change the data right away. Xiaoli guessed that the so-called transparent armor was Lin Tian allowing the programmer to change the data. Lin was very happy because he got everything he wanted from Li Sanxiong, and on top of that, he donated a lot. Therefore, our hero did not mind tweaking a few characteristics for him. Lin Tian said he got what he wanted, and Cao Bi wanted to know if it was proof of her innocence. Lin Tian replied sharply that it was not what she thought at all. Xiaoli just couldn't stand to watch this anymore. Lin Tian was indeed an ironic, straightforward virgin. In the end, Lin Tian had his own plans in mind, and now he suggested going to another place. Before leaving, Lin Tian explained that he had received a list from Li Sanxiong of everyone involved in Cao Bi's frame-up. In fact, a few hours later, they were already at the club, or rather, only Lin Tian was. One of the men had never seen this singer before and wondered why. However, Boss Joe had very good taste, because there was a new singer at this establishment and she looked stunning. Boss Joe was interested and asked the guy to tell him more about this girl. It turned out that this singer usually did not show her face, but one girl accidentally saw her face and said that she was incredibly beautiful. This description was enough for Boss Joe to ask for the girl to be brought to his room. Joe's guards immediately surrounded the unfortunate girl and gave her no room to retreat. The poor girl was forcibly dragged to this lecherous old man. Joe wanted to hurt the girl, but the singer felt no fear, perhaps because she had nothing to fear. Joe really wanted to have fun with this girl, and first of all, he pressed her against him. They were very close, and Joe felt something was wrong, which made him nervous. In the end, he couldn't take it anymore and fell to the floor. The singer was surprised that they had stopped. Did it not satisfy Joe's desire and make him happy? In the end, the singer took off her mask, and it turned out that the singer Lin Tian was hiding under it. This pervert was completely lost. He didn't understand who this man was and where the beautiful woman had gone. Lin Tian was very dissatisfied. How could this man still have the audacity to ask about it? Was Lin Tian not good enough to satisfy a pervert like Joe? Couldn't he be a beauty? Lin Tian was furious that he had been so openly insulted. Joe was so frightened that he couldn't even speak properly, and finally asked what Lin Tian was getting at. But without waiting for an answer, Joe called his security guards over the radio to come here. because there was some crazy pervert here. The guards immediately surrounded Lin Tian, separating him from their boss. But despite this, our hero looked confident and didn't even flinch. Lin Tian had ruined Zhou's mood, and now he wanted our hero to pay for it. The guy realized that things had gone too far and he needed to change tactics. He had no choice but to take off his wig and pull out his weapon with both hands. You see, Boss Zhou's men may have been good, but our hero was no slouch either, and he had a gun with him. Zhou could no longer tolerate this spectacle. He felt that he was being treated like an idiot, and ordered his guards to apprehend this madman. The guards obeyed the order and immediately attacked the intruder, even though he warned them that he was armed. Lin Tian did not wait for them to attack him and shot his enemy. One of Zhou's guards fell dead right in front of everyone. But Lin Tian had no intention of stopping, because he knew that no mercy would be shown to him here, and he shot everyone who was there. And the last shot went to Zhou's boss, who was shaking with fear. Now he had to listen carefully and understand what Lin Tian was going to say to him. Lin Tian was like a monster to him, but nevertheless, he was ready to do anything Lin Tian asked of him, just to save his pathetic life. In the end, when they reached an agreement, Lin Tian was satisfied with the result and gave someone a thumbs up through the window. It was his precious Xiao Li on the opposite building, who had assisted in the mission. Chao Bile was also with her, and she simply couldn't convey her admiration, because her sister Xiao Li was simply magnificent and very accurate. For Xiao Li, it was just a trifle. She fired a tranquilizer rifle and did not harm anyone. But someone was also watching these girls from close by. Surprisingly, it was Su Suiqing. Apparently, she had decided to join the game, and now she was wondering what Lin Tian's next move would be. The next day, our hero brought all the figures involved in the case to Officer Zhou. Zhou Weiwei was very pleased, because Lin Tian had done a very good job this time. Cao Bile simply could not contain herself, and the words just flew out of her mouth. See, I told you it had nothing to do with me. Zhou Weiwei agreed that although it had nothing to do with Cao Bile, it wasn't that simple. The girl simply couldn't take it anymore. Wasn't it enough for the officer to find these criminals? Or did she want to dig up something else? But in fact, Zhou Weiwei suspected that someone was behind these people, and that he or they were very powerful. Considering the above, it was the same force that had recently led many companies to collect black funds, Lin Tian thought. Suddenly, Mr. Zhou entered the office and admitted that Lin Tian was very smart. All departments attached great importance to this issue, and now the police had no evidence to support these assumptions. Therefore, Mr. Zhou had other thoughts. He and Zhou Weiwei began to stare at Lin Tian. Our hero did not understand why they were looking at him as if he were a suspect. But Zhou Weiwei explained that Director Zhou wanted to allow Lin Tian to conduct the investigation as a freelance employee. This probably meant that they wanted to use Lin Tian as a secret agent, and he reacted to this rather strangely. His daughter could no longer hold back and showed her emotions, asking her father not to force other people to do such dangerous things. Her father understood perfectly well that his daughter loved her boyfriend, but now everything depended on him. Lin Tian addressed Director Zhou directly, because he believed that this mission was indeed too dangerous. In the end, Director Zhou couldn't persuade Lin Tian to do it if he refused. With a heavy heart, he accepted it. But Lin Tian didn't mean that. More precisely, he wanted to be paid more for completing this mission. In fact, at that moment, everyone looked at our hero as if he were some kind of madman, because it was perfectly normal for him to refuse, but for him to bargain for this mission seemed out of the ordinary. But Director Zhou took it positively, because young people were ambitious after all. In the end, he handed Lin Tian a folder with documents containing everything that connected them. Our hero needed to prepare well and get started. The mission was costly, but the glory it would bring to Lin Tian was priceless. By the way, when it came to completing missions, Lin Tian had never failed. That sounded rather ambiguous. Director Zhou liked Lin Tian. He seemed interesting to him, and if everything went well, he would want to continue working with him. Zhou Weiwei proved to her father once again that there was nothing between them when he tried to hint at their relationship again. Well, the Tsar Bilo case was settled. The next battle was to begin on campus. Director Zhou's file indicated that a teacher was involved in the case, so our hero immediately went to the academy. The hero of our time, art teacher Su Wumei. Every female student was crazy about him. He seemed like the ideal man to them. But our hero had only one impression of him, and it was clearly not the same as the girls. This scoundrel dared to hit on teacher Lin Tian, teacher Chen. If only for that reason, our hero wanted to find out everything properly, to be in the know about everything. Meanwhile, teacher Chen was finally able to be alone. She was still preoccupied with the problem with her father. Dr. Dan called her and told her that her father was on the mend, but that wasn't all. It turned out that teacher Chen's father had disappeared from the hospital. The girl couldn't understand how this could have happened, because her father was unable to move during his recovery. The doctor admitted that he initially suspected that someone had taken him from the hospital, but this did not improve the situation at all. The girl became even more nervous and decided to go to the hospital immediately. Teacher Chen's father's room was in disarray, and the police were already there. One of the police officers only knew that it was a group of people dressed in black who had rushed into the ward at night and kidnapped the man. Therefore, he wanted to understand their intentions and asked if Miss Chen had any enemies. The girl honestly admitted that she did have some conflicts, but they should not have been a reason to kidnap her father. Suddenly, she saw a message from an unknown sender that said, "We have your father. Don't go to the police or else." The police officer noticed a sudden change in Miss Chen's mood, so he thought that something might have happened. But the girl didn't want to take any chances and didn't admit what was going on. Instead, she lied that her student was having problems and she had to leave immediately. For some reason, the girl immediately thought that these kidnappers must be enemies of Lin Tian's family business. And so she sat at the table, looking at his card and wondering if she should warn him. But on the other hand, her father was still in the hands of these gangsters, and she had no idea what to do. Someone's hand suddenly reached out toward her body, and she was so frightened that she jumped up as if she had been somewhere else before. It was just Teacher Suwume. He hoped that Teacher Chen had thought it over and agreed to go on a date with him. But she wanted the man to forget about this idea. After all, she already had a boyfriend, and she had only just told him. Suwume was extremely dissatisfied. Chen had thought about it for so long and now decided to refuse. How dare she refuse him? The teacher was up to her neck in problems, and clearly had no time for goodbyes. But her gentle nature compelled her to apologize to Suwume for rejecting him. At the same time, Suwume wanted Teacher Chen not to be so shameless. He knew very well that she was doing private broadcasts. Therefore, he even had a suspicion that Chen simply enjoyed it when men paid her. Suwume began to approach her, and it didn't look very friendly. Chen was completely frightened, not knowing what he wanted to do to her now. Suwume simply couldn't resist the internet celebrities because one was hotter than the other. He wanted Chen to belong only to him because he had been chasing her for so long and no longer wanted to hold back. Chen screamed in panic, not even knowing how to respond to this pervert, feeling completely helpless in the situation. She was about to cry when she felt someone groping her from behind. Lin Tian appeared so suddenly, like a ray of light, and Chen was no longer afraid. Suwume, on the other hand, was extremely surprised when Lin Tian suddenly appeared out of nowhere. But if it was Lin Tian, could Chen consider it groping, or something else? In the end, it was just concern on the part of her boss, and nothing intimate, just a working relationship. Chen was so surprised by Lin Tian's appearance that she couldn't even formulate the right question, but it was very timely. In the end, it was Suwume who asked Chen that question. They were on the 7th floor, and the man was simply baffled as to how the guy had climbed in through the window. But the answer was very simple. He bought a crane and used it to get up to this floor. Lin Tian was a little scared that they were so high up, so he used that as an excuse to snuggle closer to Teacher Chen. But the girl couldn't let him do that because they were with another teacher, and he was causing them problems. Lin Tian rephrased it a little in his own way, thinking that if no one was here, he could do whatever he wanted. In the end, Suwume couldn't stand it anymore, and he decided to use his power. He threw the chalk so that it pierced Lin Tian's ear, and Lin Tian couldn't even dodge or defend himself. It turned out that Chen Zilin was the woman Suwume liked, and he had no intention of giving her to some student. But Lin Tian reminded this scoundrel that Chen Zilin was his woman first and foremost. Secondly, the light on Suwume's hand was exactly the same as Dafan Pai's. Suwume suggested that our hero probably wanted to find out the secrets of the Su family. But in the end, he gave Teacher Chen one last chance to reconsider and return to him. If Chen Zilin went with Lin Tian, Suwume could not guarantee her father's safety. It was a huge shock for Chen Zilin to learn that her colleague was one of the kidnappers. But Lin Tian tried to calm the girl down so she wouldn't worry, because he was there, close by. Chen Zilin had already lost all hope, because even the police couldn't find the kidnappers, and her father was probably in a difficult situation. Lin Tian hastened to say that he had already found Chen Zilin's father. Suwume thought this was impossible. After all, the Su family's influence extended to all the high-ranking authorities in the city. Suwume naively believed that he was powerful only because he was influential, but he did not realize that even ordinary people were better than him. The man was angry because he didn't understand how Lin Tian could possibly know about this. Suwume threw the chalk with all his might to hurt Lin Tian, but the first throw missed, and the second hit him in the side. In the end, the iron railing opened, and our heroes were in a very precarious position. Chen Zilin was already prepared for the possibility that she would fall from a height, but for some reason, she didn't fall, because Lin Tian was holding her tightly. The plan to throw him failed miserably, and Lin Tian did not die as he had wished. Perhaps Suwume saw how they were filming. The trick with the rope was much cheaper than buying a crane. Our hero and his girlfriend began to climb up and said goodbye to Suwume, hoping to see her on the roof. Of course, Suwume hoped for the same thing, and immediately ran to the roof to punish his enemies. There he found Chen Zilin already hugging her father in a wheelchair, while Lin Tian was waiting for the most important guest of the program. It was like confirmation, because he had said that he had found his father-in-law. When Suwume saw all this, he literally trembled with rage. He couldn't understand how this could have happened. He had tried so hard to prevent it. When our hero put his hand on his shoulder, the anger did not go away, and he looked even more tense. Lin Tian, in turn, burst into tears like a little child. In the end, Teacher Su asked why Lin Tian was crying so hard. But wasn't the scene of the father and daughter's reunion so touching and worthy of tears? Suwume couldn't take it anymore. It seemed to him that this guy was just mocking him. How could he possibly save him? Lin Tianyu found it strange that the man didn't even suspect this. Money was all our hero had. In that case, Suwume had a hunch that Lin Tian had simply bribed his 6 men. But our hero didn't understand why he was asking him this, because he didn't know anything. Since our hero knew nothing, Suwume nervously took out his phone and started dialing someone's number. One of Suwume's employees picked up the phone and waited for his boss to give him further instructions. But Suwume really believed Lin Tianyu and started yelling at his subordinates, asking what other instructions they wanted, since they were working for competitors. But the servant insisted he was right, because they did not work for competitors and always listened to Su's instructions. Suwume was convinced that his subordinates had taken money from Lin Tian and released the old man in return, which was what he wanted to find out. But the old man was under strict supervision, with several servants standing over him and watching him so that no one would steal him. In fact, the servants said that the old man was with him and they didn't sell anything to anyone. But Suwume no longer believed them. He thought they were just denying everything in order to lie. Lin Tian could no longer hide his laughter and smile at having fooled Suwume. And when he looked at Lin Tian, only then did he realize that it was all a trap that he had so foolishly fallen into. Turning to look at the old man, he saw that the wheelchair was already empty. The seemingly frail old man was already flying straight at him. He deftly caught his phone. It was a perfect landing. 100 points, as our hero estimated. In the end, Suwumi was completely confused and became more and more nervous, not understanding what this guy was up to. Plotting was a strange word. Rather, our hero was going to get even with Suwume. Lin Tian wanted this pervert to understand how badly he had behaved. At that moment, the precise location detection device that Lin Tian had prepared in advance appeared on the roof. The wire from this device was immediately connected to Suwume's phone. The location was found very quickly. As it turned out, the caller was not far from the suburbs. This was excellent news for our hero, and he wanted to leave immediately. Xiao Li, who played the role of Chen Ziline's father, quickly got rid of her disguise and was ready to go. Lin Tian ordered Xiao Li to go first, and he would follow her and cover her from behind. The girl even had a special suit ready that would allow her to fly freely. Lin Tian was happy to tell Teacher Chen that everything was now under control, and her father would be safe. But he wanted to know how to punish Suwume. The girl whispered something in the guy's ear, and he was surprised by this, because even for him, it was too cruel. He understood that after this, Suwume would simply burn with shame. Nevertheless, he really liked Chen Ziline's ingenious idea. The young female student standing near the teacher's room immediately noticed the familiar figure of Teacher Su. Such a figure could only belong to him, and the girls couldn't confuse it with anyone else's, because they knew it by heart. They were so happy to see their beloved teacher that they couldn't help but say so, because they loved him and were almost his fans. Teacher Su paused for a moment, sensing that something about him was not to the students' liking, as they had even changed their mood. Su Wumei tried to be as kind and gentle as usual. He knew very well that his students liked him, but he needed to focus on his work. Only the students no longer spoke in the same tone. They didn't understand who this homeless man was at all. Su Wumei began to prove that he was Teacher Su, but suddenly he remembered that he had forgotten something. Nevertheless, even if he had a bald spot on his head, it did not negate the fact that he was indeed Teacher Su. But this teacher was as much a Su Wumei as these girls were ballerinas. In fact, Lin Tian was such a wonderful hairdresser that no one was indifferent to his hairstyles. Sooner or later, Su Wumei would want to remind him of that. And finally, the whole team was assembled. Lin Tian successfully brought all the girls back to the Tian Tian Lin company and was working on a new business venture. Xiaoli still didn't fully understand what the girls were doing. She was more concerned with helping her boss, and didn't delve into the affairs of his subordinates. Lin Tian hoped that when the company had a lot of money again, it would allow them to start a new business plan. The system already showed 72% completion of the task. The progress was excellent. Still, the girl wanted to know more about the new plan, what Lin Tian had in mind. But our hero decided not to go into the smallest details and simply said that he had already thought about the first clients. So he handed Xiaoli some documents and asked her to find these people for him. To be honest, what was written on the papers surprised the girl. The first person Xiaoli came across was Police Officer Yuan, with whom our hero had already had a warm meeting. Next was the former owner of a 24-hour store where Lin Tian had once worked. And of course, how could we forget the handsome bald man, Zhang Hao, who was so actively involved in Lin Tian's life? It didn't take Xiaoli long to gather all these characters, and yet they were already standing in front of our hero. The former manager knew very well that Lin Tian was a big boss, but was he worthy of him looking for him? As for Officer Yuan, he had supposedly let our hero go last time and was demoted by 3 ranks. Zhang Hao, as always, was dissatisfied and did not understand what that scoundrel Lin Tian was up to again. Wasn't 2 races and dinner still not enough for him? Lin Tian listened attentively to everyone, but laughed that they still didn't understand what they all had in common. They speculated that they had all been deceived by Lin Tian, because what else could they possibly have in common? In fact, this was an incorrect assumption. Lin Tian had to explain such trivial things. These guys had only one thing in common: they were all bald. As a result, our hero came up with a new business plan. Namely, he wanted to sell artificial hair. All 3 men were very upset. They thought this guy had gone crazy. After all, artificial hair was sold everywhere. But what if Lin Tian said that this wig had an effect on people so that others would like you? Zhang Hao was the first to speak up on this matter. For some reason, he was convinced that such an idea and advertising were complete nonsense. Lin Tian understood perfectly well that his former enemies would probably not like such an idea, so he demonstrated a living example standing right behind them. Strangely enough, it was Xiao Li, but she was wearing a wig, and the changes in her body were caused by that very wig. The guys looked disappointed. It was hard for them to believe something like that. Zhang Hao didn't understand who Lin Tian was lying to, how wearing a wig would make people fall in love with him. But Zhang Hao needed to think a little and remember whether Xiao Li had been like this before. He looked closely at the girl's appearance, because there really had been changes. She used to seem more delicate to him, or perhaps she looked better and was probably more charming. This description was exactly what Lin Tian wanted to hear. Therefore, he wanted to reveal another secret to them about why Teacher Su Wumei was so popular with girls. Zhang Hao believed that everything was obvious with Su Wumei. This man was talented and handsome. But in fact, Lin Tian searched through Su Wumei's entire phone and found some secret photos. Once, when Su Wumei was still at the beginning of his career, he complained that no one loved him. But then he bought a wig, and everyone loved him. He was adored by women. Allegedly. Today our hero took that wig away from him, and everything went back to the way it was before, with all the girls turning away from him. Zhang Hao looked at the photo of Su Wumei and couldn't believe that this was the same handsome teacher. But without Lin Tian's wig, it was impossible to recognize this teacher. That's when Zhang Hao wondered, could baldness be the reason for his unpopularity? But he only had to think about it for a moment. Teacher Su Wumei had no hair, and no one liked him. But with hair, everything changed at once. Zhang Hao refused to believe Lin Tian's words. He was convinced that Su Wumei did not buy the wig from Lin Tian. In that case, Lin Tian decided to present evidence. However, the guy was already happy that this naive person already believed that teacher Su Wumei wore a wig. You see, Lin Tian went to collect the money for the wig today, and teacher Su Wumei wanted to take a promissory note from him that Lin Tian would not sell wigs to anyone else. But Lin Tian did not want to, and refused. Meanwhile, Su Wumei, who was left without his own hair, our hero believed that everyone should have the opportunity to buy such a wig. Zhang Hao thought seriously about it. It all sounded logical, but he felt there was a catch. Then, to finally convince Zhang Hao, Lin Tian decided to let him touch the hair to feel its quality and smell its wonderful aroma. Zhang Hao decided to smell and touch the hair, and he was satisfied with the result. The hair really did smell good. But then the most important question arose, what was the price of such a wig? But how could Lin Tian take money from this guy? He was a poor student. Where would he get the money? Zhang Hao was very indignant at this statement. After all, he had everything. Lin Tian probably looked down on people because he had a lot of money, Zhang Hao thought. And to back up his words with action, Zhang Hao gave our hero several credit cards, saying that money was nothing to him, and Lin Tian could take as much as he wanted. Xiaoli whispered quietly that Zhang Hao was too excited. But it turned out that there was a special potion made with Chinese medicine on the river. It didn't take much. Xiaoli assumed that this guy had already been cheated out of a lot of money, so she thought maybe that was enough. Lin Tian suddenly jumped up and started pretending that Xiaoli wanted a car, and he asked her what kind of car she wanted. Surely not a big sports car? Everyone was stunned, and Zhang Hao didn't even know how to comment on it. It was obvious that the hint was about his sports car. Zhang Hao, of course, couldn't refuse and handed the keys to his sports car to Lin Tian. Xiaoli didn't understand this, because Lin Tian had deceived Zhang Hao so many times, and wasn't this too much? But our hero thought that he should thank him for it. Zhang Hao apparently had no regrets, just like the other men. They happily went about their business and were very grateful to Lin Tian for such wigs. Our hero was also very happy, because the first transaction had been completed successfully. The office location, employee recruitment, everything was ready, and now he could collect his reward for the first task. But for some reason, there was a mistake. The task completion rate was already at 85%. Only under the line, there was some unknown error in the reward. There was a discrepancy between the employee's identity and the real person. The employee's identity did not match the documents. All new employees confirmed their identities, but there were those who did not. Among them was Xiaolong, whom Lin Tian already knew to be Da Fan. But there were also Xiaoli and Chen Dodo. Lin Tian decided to think about which of these three should be suspected. First, he decided to call Xiaolong, who was ready to follow his boss's instructions. But Lin Tian wanted to discuss something with him and ask his advice on a certain matter. Da Fan was even excited after that, happy to have another opportunity to interact with Lin Tian. Lin Tian tried to sound normal, admitting that he appreciated the dedication of his employees, but all he wanted to say to Da Fan. Da Fan, in turn, listened to Lin Tian with undisguised interest, because whatever it was, he was ready to get rid of Lin Tian once and for all. But in the end, our hero told him the unpleasant news that he had been fired. He didn't want to hear anything else from him, so he hung up as quickly as possible, and was glad that one thing was over. In fact, Da Fan could hardly comprehend what had just happened, and for a moment he even felt confused. But then anger took over, and it seemed to him that Lin Tian was just mocking him. In the end, our hero consulted with Xiao Li, wondering if there was anything wrong with what he had done to Xiao Lun. Xiao Li thought about it from an outsider's perspective, and believed that it was a violation of the employment contract. But in the end, Lin Tian could easily pay him a year's salary, because that money was pocket change for him. That wasn't all. Lin had another case, but this time it concerned Xiao Li. He literally whispered in her ear that she was also fired. This statement shocked her. She was probably sure that she couldn't be fired, because she was an irreplaceable assistant to her boss. But as Lin Tian had recently learned, this girl was not Xiao Li. First, although she carried out Lin Tian's orders, she expressed doubts about his methods, while Xiao Li never did. Second, Xiao Li didn't like it when Lin Tian touched her, but she just endured it silently. Finally, Lin Tian was about to say this, but he wondered if it was really necessary for him to say it out loud. The girl knew she couldn't hide it from Lin Tian forever, and her movements and fighting skills were indeed better than Xiao Li's. Probably, our hero didn't want to emphasize that and was very surprised by such a statement. The girl, in turn, was surprised that her boss hadn't even noticed this. Lin Tian just wanted to say that this girl's breasts were 2 centimeters smaller than Xiao Li's. Of course, this offended the girl, and she did not hesitate to call Lin Tian a pervert. But our hero simply couldn't help himself and didn't even try to hide his peculiarity. Still, he understood that this girl had no malicious intent, but he wanted to know where the real Xiao Li was. The girl believed that he didn't need to know her sister's whereabouts. She began to lose focus, and finally wished Lin Tian to continue enjoying the life of a stupid rich man. Lin Tian was very upset because so much good cheap labor had gone nowhere. In any case, 2 of the 3 had already disappeared from his company, and now our hero hoped that he would be able to get his reward. But the system still showed him an error. Could Chen Dodo also be so complicated? Lin Tian carefully analyzed everything and remembered that Chen Dodo had no problems with her studies. She also had no problems with sports. She was quite good at it. Of course, Lin Tian did not miss the detail that she also ate well and heartily. And as our hero noticed, the girl had no problems at home either. Lin Tian realized that Chen Dodo had no problems with identity verification. But did that mean there could be a bug in the system? All Lin Tian could do at this stage was go to the Tian Tian Lin Company and ask everyone to contribute their suggestions. Fortunately, the office building had already been constructed, and it stood out from the other buildings in the city with its unique architecture. But every time Lin Tian went to his headquarters, someone shouted for the Alliance at him. What was going on now? He entered the Tian Tian Lin headquarters, and right in front of him, girls lined up in 2 rows, loudly greeting Lin. Of course, his lecherous X-ray gaze did not escape the color of the underwear the girls were wearing. And yet he agreed with the idea that having company was good, and even better to have eyesight like his. But suddenly he stopped himself, because he had seen this underwear with a bear on it somewhere before. He had seen this underwear on Chen Dodo, and now she was standing right in front of him. One of the girls explained that the responsible Chen Dodo was the most active of all who had ever worked for them, and she had been here since early morning. Lin Tian felt that something was wrong, because he had been watching Chen Dodo literally all day, and she couldn't have come to headquarters so early. Lin Tian stared at her like a madman because he wanted to understand what was going on. He decided not to make any direct statements right away and to approach the subject indirectly, mentioning her achievement in swimming class that morning. But the girl told her boss that she didn't have swimming lessons in the morning, and maybe he was just mistaken. Lin Tian was sure he wasn't mistaken. Was the girl really pretending? In that case, he would have to question her. Lin Tian remembered that he had invited her to have spicy tofu with coriander for lunch that morning, so he wanted to go to lunch right away. But Chen Dodo thought her boss Lin was just joking. After all, he had invited her to have pumpkin cookies. And in fact, that was correct. Why did she know everything so well? Chen Dodo decided to postpone these conversations. After all, there were still several wig sales contracts that needed her boss's signature, so she asked Lin Tian to sign them as soon as possible. However, Lin Tian was satisfied and wanted the girl to continue trying. He finally understood what was wrong, but it was enough to just talk and observe for a whole day. Our hero's theory was that he believed there were 2 Chen Dodos in this world. He didn't dare to ask the girl directly, so he decided to talk to Teacher Chen, but she was very surprised by this assumption. Lin Tian really wanted these 2 girls to tell him everything themselves. But for some reason, Chen Zilin doubted that this could be true. Lin Tian, on the other hand, was sure it was true, and that this trap would close very soon. Meanwhile, the girls began to discuss recent events, and they noticed that Lin Tian was beginning to suspect them. One of them thought, why not confess everything themselves and continue this double game? But another girl wanted to hold out until the last moment, as she still had one last trump card up her sleeve. Our hero was sleeping soundly. It was just another night, but a knock on the door woke him up in the middle of the night. He looked through the peephole, but the hallway was empty, and there was no one in sight. It was strange, but Lin Tian didn't think much of it. So he went back to sleep, but as soon as he moved away from the door, he heard another knock. This time, he was sure he hadn't imagined it. This was enough to start annoying our hero, so he asked seriously who was there. But no one answered, and in the end, he had to go out into the hallway, where he saw a strange silhouette out of the corner of his eye. This silhouette was getting closer and closer to the guy, repeating something about a mistake. Supposedly, Lin Tian had made a mistake. But as soon as he decided to turn around, the strange creature disappeared as if it had never been there. He stood there, not understanding what it was. Was it a hallucination? The next morning, everything was as usual, with classes and nothing new. And our hero, as always, desperately wanted to sleep. Chen Dodo noticed Lin Tian's strange mood and asked him what had happened, wondering if he hadn't gotten enough sleep. Lin Tian decided not to hide anything, and shared his experiences and the strange thing that had happened to him the night before. Judging by what our hero told the girl, she concluded that the guy had encountered a ghost. Moreover, the main sign of people who encountered ghosts was a distorted perception of time. They tended to see strange things, such as not recognizing people. Lin Tian had already decided to add to her unspoken suggestion that such people see 2 identical people. Chen Dodo confidently confirmed this and claimed that her boss had encountered a ghost. She was sure that if she said it was an encounter with a ghost, she would get away with it, as it was a proven trick. But our hero did not believe such nonsense, and finally asked directly what kind of relationship Chen Dodo had with her. The girl realized that there was no point in lying anymore, and she didn't even know how to answer, so she started to get nervous. Lin Tian said directly that he had seen everything yesterday, and that she and another girl had dressed up as ghosts, but they were wearing bras with cats on them. Chen Dodo was so embarrassed by this clarification that she covered her chest with her hands and began to get upset. But Lin Tian was determined to see this through to the end, and reminded her that the girls' ghost costumes were torn and their wigs had slipped to the side, so he had seen everything. Chen Dodo didn't know how to respond, because it seemed impossible to her, and everything was perfect between them. But in any case, our hero had long since seen through this masquerade, and he could spot liars right away. Lin Tian understood that Chen Dodo might have some doubts, but she could still trust him. However, the girl believed that Lin Tian should not get involved in this. Otherwise, sooner or later, he and all his loved ones would die. This statement frightened our hero greatly, and he seriously thought about what he had heard. Back in his office, he wondered what this secret was that could kill him. In the end, the 2 girls appeared before him. They were grateful to Lin Tianyu for his help, but they had to leave. From the above words, our hero finally understood more or less everything. It was all the fault of the Chen family. But was he really the one who couldn't deal with this family? The girls were in no hurry to leave. They were curious. Perhaps their boss did know something about the Chen family after all. This was a topic for a long discussion, so our hero suggested pouring some cola and talking about it. Lin Tian began his story by saying that the Chen family was a vassal of the Li family, and the Li family is one of the 4 legendary families of China. Although the Li family ranked only 3rd among the other families, it was the strongest in cultural terms. Today, all masters of music, chess, calligraphy, and painting were exclusively associated with the Li family. And if our hero was not mistaken, the Chen family was the very family that sent musical talents to the Li family. The girls were very poor, and they simply did not understand how they could be from a large family. But our hero believed that hands could not deceive. The girls only had to look at the fingers on their palms. The girl thought that Lin Tian had already checked their fingerprints. But in fact, it was much simpler than that, because he was referring to the calluses on their hands, and they couldn't lie. The girls had calluses in characteristic places on their hands, and such calluses could only be found on one type of person: musicians. Even if that were true, it didn't make much difference to the girls, because the Chen family was too powerful. Lin Tian wondered, if the Chen family was so powerful, why did they separate from the family, and why were they able to live separately? It turned out that the reason lay with their father. Their father defended his daughters and was categorically opposed to anyone sending his children to the Li family as servants. But suddenly, while they were driving, they were attacked. There were too many people. The father ordered his daughters to stay in the car and not get out. He left and made it clear to everyone that he would fight even 10 men at once. Then the girls thought that their father had abandoned them and simply gone to his voluntary death. But when they grew up, they realized that their father had saved them by sacrificing himself. This story was so tearful that our hero could not hold back his emotions and simply burst into tears at his father's heroism. That's why the girls didn't want to let him down. They wanted to live well and stay away from the Chen family. Lin Tian wondered if the girls had never wanted revenge. Chen Dodo didn't want to take such a risk in vain, because if the Chen family found out about them, their carefree days would simply come to an end. And yet our hero did not understand why they were not burning with revenge and did not want to avenge their father. Well, it was all very simple. Dealing with the Chen family in their situation was extremely problematic. Lin Tian had long since decided for himself that he would always overcome difficulties. And if there were no difficulties, he would create them himself and overcome them himself. Therefore, he decided that he wanted to help the girls take revenge on their family. He had already drafted a written request, which meant that he was ready to fight the Chen family alone. Lin Tian actually remembered his agreement with Mr. Zhou, because that meant he wouldn't be fighting alone. He would simply give an order that would influence the situation. And let's finally take a look at the Chen family's music school, where teacher Xiaoli was in an ambiguous situation. Principal Chen, meanwhile, looked very relaxed and thought that the teacher would like to have tea with her. But he clearly wasn't in the mood for tea. After all, someone had put on an unusual show at their school. Even after hearing this news, Principal Chen's mood did not change. She decided to have tea first, and then come and sort things out after her tea break. Of course, it was our hero who had staged this show. Lin Tian stood in the main hall of Chen's school and demanded that the principal be called. But if he wanted to see the principal, he had to talk to teacher Xiaoli first. He was considered the best clarinetist in the world, so he decided that he would be the first to start the competition. Since it was a wind instrument, Lin Tian decided that such a task was for Ermazi. This cute, freckled boy named Ermazi was already ready for the competition. But for some reason, Xiaoli felt offended and questioned whether such a boy could compare to him. Lin Tian was also indignant about this. Did you have to look good to play a musical instrument? In that case, why didn't Xiaoli tell him that Lin Tian was musically gifted? In the end, the teacher didn't care. They had nothing to talk about, so we just wanted to get started. Oh, this man. He was the epitome of elegance. He sounded very confident and seemed to radiate beauty. The sounds of these melodies brought listeners to tears that they couldn't hold back. Well, our hero had to admit that it wasn't bad for a master of emotional performance. The clarinet had a wide range, almost 4 octaves, and was the champion of the wind instrument class. Xiaoli couldn't even imagine who could play better than him. But wouldn't that be the same as just playing on people's emotions? Now it was Ermazi's turn. His music didn't just convey a sound, but an entire atmosphere. He was a hooligan in drunken music. It was the real deal. These weren't just tears. It was mourning in its purest form. If the previous melody didn't impress Lin Tian, this time tears streamed down his face. And all this was because in Shenzhou, all funerals were played with sona. None of those present could hold back their emotions. They remembered the days of mourning when they buried their loved ones, and they wept as if it were that day. Xiaoli had to admit that he had lost this competition, but he was convinced that Lin Tian would not always be able to win with such tricks. In the end, he had to turn away again to wipe away his tears. Through his tears, our hero wanted to continue the competition. He wanted to play with 10 and waited for the next competitor. Director Chen took the initiative, saying that now it was her turn. Lin Tian immediately recognized this girl as the eldest granddaughter of the Chen family. And Director Chen immediately recognized the guy who had bravely challenged the entire Chen family. But Lin Tian was no longer listening to her. He was staring at her beautiful body and couldn't take his eyes off her. Of course, he couldn't resist the temptation to look at this beauty with an X-ray gaze. And now all he could do was simply read the poem. The first sentence read, "The death of the departing master before he achieved final victory." He read the next sentence while lying on the floor. Often makes heroes bleed from the nose. Our hero simply lost consciousness for a few minutes and had difficulty opening his eyes. To his surprise, he found someone's bust in front of him. It turned out that he was lying right on the lap of this fragile girl, who was trying to bring him to his senses. She did not try to rush him, but waited calmly for him to feel better. Lin Tian was frightened. He jumped up sharply and realized that he had never even thought he would fall for something like this. The first thing he did was turn to Ermazi, because the only way to deal with this lady was to get a secret weapon. Ermazi could only hope that the secret weapon could be obtained for 5 yuan. Blood continued to flow from his nose, but he decided to put on his glasses so he wouldn't be distracted by Miss Chen's figure so often. Finally, he uttered some secret words that only Ermazi knew. Ermazi left to carry out his tasks, and Lin Tian hoped that Director Chen was a big-hearted person and would not require an explanation for his mistake. Of course, she didn't need any explanations. She just wanted to know what the next competition would be. The wind instrument competition was over. Therefore, the next ones in line were the string and percussion instruments. Miss Chen found this very boring and didn't even want to participate. Lin Tian really hoped that the girl had already admitted defeat. But Miss Chen hinted that they could play something else. Just her and Lin Tian. This suggestion annoyed Lin Tian a little. He didn't understand why she thought he was one of those people. In any case, it didn't matter. He wanted to know the rules as soon as possible. Miss Chen laughed coquettishly and admitted that she liked Lin Tian more and more. She warned that the preparation would take 1 day. Director Chen would play an instrument and Lin Tian would play an instrument. It was a fair and honest decision. In return, the loser would have to do whatever the winner wanted. These rules suited our hero perfectly, and he was intrigued. Since they had agreed, Miss Chen decided to seal the deal with a light kiss on the lips. Lin Tian was slightly surprised by the girl's action, so to avoid any misunderstanding, she explained that it was just a kiss to seal the promise. Our hero was indeed slightly embarrassed and still did not understand why they should not kiss for a few more minutes. Nevertheless, Miss Chen was eagerly awaiting Lin Tian's brother's performance. Our hero's musicians were excited because they had heard rumors that Director Chen was a real witch who could take human souls with her playing, and besides, no one had even seen what she was playing. The second man confirmed this because she was also called the soul-tearing erhu, and the dynamic allegro beats were out of the game. Lin Tian understood the seriousness of the situation, and he wanted to involve Chen Dodo in order to defeat the entire Chen family, otherwise it would not be revenge. But the men were very surprised, because Chen Dodo did not know how to play any instruments at all. The next day, many people gathered at the stadium so as not to miss such a rare spectacle. After all, it wasn't every day that someone challenged the Chen family. Sparks flew in the air. Lin Tian stood face to face with the unknown witch. The most dangerous moment in our hero's life had arrived. Of course, Lin Tian's close circle of friends also watched this event, and Cao Bi did not miss the electric spark hanging in the air. At first, our hero thought that this spark had simply passed between them, but then he realized that it was real, and for some reason it lingered. The explanation for this phenomenon was very simple. The reason was Miss Chen's electric instrument. This was quite unexpected for Lin Tian, as he thought she would be playing the organ or conducting. He wondered what kind of instrument this witch could have. A synthesizer, an electric guitar, maybe electronic drums, or even an electronic guzheng. You will find out very soon, because Miss Chen has already ordered her boys to bring in the instrument. It was simply enormous, and how they managed to hold it in their hands remained a mystery. Lin Tian had no idea what was hidden under the black cover. Miss Chen already suspected that today, Lin Tian would not become anything more than a brother to her. The girl was happy to present her tool, which was a Tesla coil. Now Miss Chen urged Lin Tian to watch closely what she was going to do. It was a real show that Chen demonstrated with confidence, summoning lightning here. However, not everyone was happy after that, because they had to bake a little, although such music was incomparable and unlike anything else. But Chen, of course, wanted to know the final verdict from brother Lin. Was she really that cool? Despite the fact that such a demonstration changed his hairstyle to look like a lamb's, Lin Tian admitted that she was indeed cool. Although the girl even expected Lin Tian to pretend that he didn't care. But first, our hero heard such professional, real electric music for the first time in his life. Secondly, relying only on a small iron cage to isolate the electric field, Miss Chen was still able to control the sound, which Lin Tian could not do. And thirdly, Miss Chen's beauty was completely and naturally in the electric current, and she impressed Lin Tian with it. For some reason, Chen took this praise as if she had won, and now Lin Tian would have to do whatever she said. But the guy reminded her that he did not admit defeat, as the competition had only just begun. But people couldn't even imagine whether there could be music more powerful than what had already been demonstrated. Our hero didn't waste any time, dialed the right number, and ordered them to begin, while he himself picked up Miss Chen's musical instrument. This performance only convinced Lin Tian even more of what music was. In his opinion, music is vibration. Therefore, he decided to use Chen Dodo's method to pay tribute to the Chen family. Miss Chen was very surprised by this statement that music is vibration. But soon everyone heard a strange rumbling sound like an earthquake. People were frightened, and Director Chen's security guards wanted Miss Chen to leave as soon as possible, because they thought an earthquake had started. To calm the crowd, Lin Tian explained to everyone that it was not an earthquake. In fact, it was just his music. It spread everywhere and throughout all the buildings. Lin Tian admitted that his music wasn't very good. He didn't understand rhythm very well, and hadn't studied music theory. But he only had money, and he knew how to use it well. And thanks to his money, he had all these buildings, which served as instruments. Finally, he wanted Chen Dodo to go public. He gave credit to these girls. After all, thanks to Chen Dodo, who studied architecture, he calculated the vibration speed of each building and the sound they could produce. Then our hero used modern vibrators to turn the purity of the sound vibration. Usually, people who perform music control the instruments. But Lin Tian decided to turn everything upside down and let the instruments control people. This way, it was possible to listen to the music between the instruments, and he believed that no one else in the world could repeat this feat. Of course, Lin Tian now wanted to know how Director Chen felt. But at one point, something made our hero tense up and start to feel nervous. Miss Chen honestly admitted that she felt very sweaty and incredibly pleasant sensations. But at the same time, she felt sad. Lin Tian still didn't understand why she felt sad. Was it because of her loss? Miss Chen admitted her defeat, but after hearing Lin Tian's music, how could she listen to anything else now? She believed that he should now take full responsibility for this. Kaobile was still watching everything from the sidelines, boiling with jealousy that this woman was so shamelessly groping her Lin Tian. Lin Tian understood everything perfectly well, but he wanted the girl to do him a favor. He wanted these two girls to return to the Chen family and regain their identity and honor. Since they had an agreement from the beginning, Miss Chen promised to keep her word, but she also wanted to ask Lin Tian for a favor, even though she was the loser. She didn't mention it yet, because it was pointless. Lin Tian was already losing consciousness and couldn't stand on his feet. Soon he fell unconscious. The guard managed to catch him, and Miss Chen ordered him to be taken to the mansion, because she had an agreement with him. And so, after that incident, our hero still hadn't opened his eyes, but after a while, he managed to do so with difficulty. He jumped up when he realized that Director Chen was plotting against him. Someone suddenly put a hand on his bare shoulder and said that yesterday Lin Tian had called her sweet. Lin Tian turned around abruptly and saw Miss Chen standing naked in front of him. She thought that everything between them was consensual. Only now did our hero begin to realize where he was and that he was completely naked. Lin Tian wanted to cry because of the crap that was happening to him. But he couldn't stay upset for long because Miss Chen didn't want to waste any time while they were together. Chao Bila was very worried because no one had seen Lin Tian since yesterday, and she didn't know what had happened to him. The Chen girls assumed that he was fine, because he didn't have what the Chen family needed anyway. But Chao's anxiety was not simple. She imagined the most terrible scenarios, including rape, which she would very much like to avoid. The girls did not believe in such an assumption, because although Lin Tian was handsome, he was not so handsome that anyone would want to do that to him. They were more interested in how to get rid of their problems, because their identities were already known to everyone, which did not play into their hands. Suddenly, Miss Chen appeared. She had overheard the girls' conversation and immediately intervened, explaining that she did not want to cause problems for either of them. As soon as Cao saw Director Chen, she immediately ran up to her to ask where Lin Tian was. She ran, forgetting everything and not even looking at the road, when suddenly she bumped into something. Or, to be more precise, someone. In front of her was Lin Tian, whom she had been looking for, exhausted and emaciated, as if he had been pulled out of a grave. Cao Bile was very frightened by the sight of our hero. She was worried that Miss Chen might have tortured him. But he didn't tell her that, only explaining that everything was fine. Since everyone was already gathered, Miss Chen suggested discussing all matters concerning the Chen family. The woman honestly admitted that she would like to cooperate with these girls. But there was a problem. Chen Dodo Italia said that the Chen family's affairs did not concern them, and moreover, they did not want to cooperate with Miss Chen. But Miss Chen only had to remind them who had helped these girls hide their secret. And she hit the nail on the head. After all, that's how it all started, and they couldn't resist her after that. But had they really forgotten how much fun they had had together? Even though she had changed her name, to the Dodo girls, she was still the same sister, Pingzhu. Lin Tian decided to intervene in the conversation and confirmed that he had seen evidence that she was indeed Sister Pingzhu. Miss Chen understood perfectly well how much the girls had been through over the years, but she believed that it would all be over soon. Why was she so confident? Simply because she had finally found a way to regain control of the Chen family. Xiao believed that this woman was lying. After all, if she had a way, then why was she cooperating with them? But in reality, it was because Lin Tian was helping and assisting her in this matter. And not just Lin Tian, but her Lin Tian. She made this clear by how close she was to him. But that wasn't the point right now. Miss Chen reminded them that the head of the family was currently discussing the business plan, and Pingzhu wanted to use some evidence stored in her notebook. The girls immediately recognized what it was, but decided to refrain from commenting. And Pingzhu, in turn, was very happy that her sisters Chen Dodo and Dome had finally returned to the family. But whatever the case, Lin Tian believed that they needed to get rid of the head of the family as soon as possible. Pingzhu was of the same opinion. Moreover, she already had more ambitious plans. Pingzhu lived with the desire to turn the entire Li family upside down. Chao Bile was a little scared, because this family was very influential throughout Shenzhou, and how did Pingzhu plan to do it? Nevertheless, Lin Tian believed that they could handle it, and should only move forward. In fact, our hero initially wanted to hire a secret agent, but now he realized that he could fight with their help. Pingzhu had already scheduled a meeting for the day after tomorrow at the Chen family home, and then they would plan everything more carefully. But Miss Chen had not even finished her thought when Lin Tian hurriedly excused himself, as he had urgent business to attend to. The most important thing for him now was to collect the reward for his task. He had made tremendous progress, already completing 95% of the task, with only a little left to do. In addition, 2 rewards were already ready, and now our hero could solve the Chen family's problems. But first, in order to do this, he wanted to use his new skills, and this was impossible without the help of one character. Our hero was about to face his first duel with Da Fan Pai, face to face. Probably the men knew that sooner or later they would have to confront each other. They agreed to meet in a cafe, but Lin Tian didn't waste time with pleasantries, and immediately made it clear to this dragon that he wanted to resolve all the issues between them. Lin Tian actually surprised Da Fan with this invitation and this statement. He had been waiting for this meeting to happen, and now it had. Da Fan was convinced that Lin Tian would not be able to defeat a man who had escaped from hell. Since Lin Tian had already seen Su Wumei's techniques, Da Fan considered it unnecessary to hide his own. He challenged Lin Tian to fight and, in turn, used the ancient striking technique of the Su family. Our hero tried not to lose his vigilance and used his new technique, which consisted of viewing his opponent's properties. The system worked flawlessly on anyone. Lin Tian only had to focus his gaze on the person whose properties he wanted to see, and that was all there was to it. So, Dafan had these stats. Strength at 3 points, intelligence at 4, appearance at 3, mana at 5 points, and luck at 3 points. Lin Tianyu now just had to decide which of these attributes he wanted to change, and that was it. Dafan was not going to cancel his attack, but our hero stood motionless and smiled as if to an old friend. Suddenly, coffee flew past Dafan's face. For a moment, he even thought it was some kind of hidden attack. But no, it was just someone in front of him who had broken a cup of coffee. The waiter sincerely apologized to the gentleman, because the coffee had simply slipped out of his hands. Dafan didn't believe in such coincidences, and had already thought that it was really Lin Tian's doing. He continued walking toward our hero and didn't even notice that he had stepped on the spilled coffee. And then he slipped and fell right on it. Even out of politeness, our hero couldn't help but laugh, as he found it quite funny. Of all the properties that Dafan had, Lin Tian decided to choose to deprive him of his luck to 0. Dafan Pai. Everyone calls him the Dragon. He is the strongest warrior in the criminal world. When he was just a child, his father took him everywhere with him. Once, he and his father defeated almost all the families in Shenzhou. In addition, Dafan learned many techniques from various families and mastered them perfectly. Hand, foot, knife, weapon, sword, nunchaku techniques, and so on. Dafan learned everything as a child, and he mastered these techniques perfectly. He even learned the ancient eye technique of the Long family by sitting with his eyes open in front of car headlights for a day. And it was only thanks to this eye technique that he could unravel secrets and see through people. Moreover, of all the fist techniques, the Su family's techniques were considered the strongest. And today he used his strongest technique, but before he could even execute it, he slipped. Someone was watching this whole scene from afar. Of course, it was Su Suiqing, and she was surprised that Lin Tian possessed such strength that he could even withstand the Su fist technique. There was silence between them, but Lin Tian reminded himself that according to the script, this dragon should say to him, "Why didn't I defeat you?" And indeed, this question was of great interest to Dafanya, and he repeated it thoughtlessly. Lin Tian had already given a prepared answer, and it was all because he had planned it all in advance. But Dafan was not going to stop there, and wanted his opponent to witness the power of another ancient technique, powerful Qigong. It was the power of the super dragon, the technique of the dragon family, the spirit of the heavenly dragon. Su Zhueqing was shocked because Dafan had shown his true power, which affected everyone. However, our hero was also surprised and a little nervous, because it turned out that this guy could even do that, and his properties did not change. Dafan was unstoppable now. He was going full power and was about to bring Lin Tian to his knees. The blow hit our hero right in the chest. He didn't even know if it was possible to resist the change in properties. But in the end, he couldn't do anything at that moment, and Dafan's powerful blow knocked him to the floor. Dafan believed that Lin Tian was lucky, because it was the most ancient technique, and in the last 50 years, our hero would be the only one to die from it. Lin Tian got up from the floor with ease, but admitted that it was indeed very powerful. Still, Dafan had expected his opponent to be unable to get up at all, so now he was nervous. Since Dafan's round was over, it was now Lin Tian's turn to attack. The same fire as Dafan's surrounded our hero's body. Lin Tian felt great. He couldn't even hold back a smile from the power he had gained. Dafan had no idea where Lin Tian had learned the ancient techniques of his family. Lin Tian was surprised that Dafan didn't even know his alias, and his alias was the copy ninja Tian Tian Lin. Without waiting or saying a word, Lin Tian quickly struck Dafan. The guy had a rough time, and after that blow, his appearance was even slightly damaged. But fortunately, he was alive. But what worried him more was how Lin Tian managed to do such a thing. Our hero seemed to activate his father's mode and offered to teach Dafanyu this. All this was, of course, because our hero used a skill he already had in his arsenal. As it turned out later, intelligence is the most important thing, which our hero had already realized more than once. During the attack, the dragon's energy was fueled by the surrounding aura, no matter what it was. Of course, Lin Tian didn't want to miss the moment and took advantage of the pocket safe. Now our hero would have to accumulate more energy, because he liked this technique and wanted to take it with him. Lin Tian began to shamelessly provoke Dafang, saying that he was stronger than him, and that he wanted to see more of the guy's techniques. Dafan was not stupid after all, and guessed that Lin Tian was using some kind of cheat abilities and deceiving him. Dafan wanted to defeat Lin Tian by any means necessary. Therefore, he used the strongest form of the second-generation dragon. All those people who owed him something now had to transfer their powers to him. Lin Tian was impressed by how powerful it looked, and wanted to take those powers as soon as possible, so he asked his opponent to hit him quickly. Dafan had never heard such a stupid request in his life, but perhaps after working for Lin Tian for so long, he had stopped being surprised by anything. But of course, he couldn't refuse, and threw a ball of energy at his opponent. Dafan was sure that Lin Tian would not survive such an attack, but our hero simply snapped his fingers, and the ball flying towards him disappeared into space as if it had never existed. Dafan expected anything but such an incident. He probably still has a lot to learn about his former employer. The cluster of human energy was stored in our hero's system safe. Lin Tian turned around with satisfaction and left, thanking Dafan in advance for sharing this with him. If he had anything else useful, he should let him know. Lin Tian calmly left the already destroyed cafe, but Dafan was literally burning with rage, his cries audible throughout the street. Lin Tian paid no attention to this, because suddenly the guy noticed that he had a new task. The task was called Qigong Master. According to its conditions, he had to obtain true energy, and as a reward, he could receive a side task called Expert Wu Lin. Of course, the guy accepted this task, as it looked very tempting. But then he wasn't so happy anymore, because he had to create his own techniques in 3 days. And if he failed this task, he would be punished by having all his chakras disrupted. Before he had even solved this problem, Chen Dodo was already calling Lin Tian with new... The Chen family had found Pingzhu and kidnapped her. Lin Tian first tried to calm the girl down and find out if she was hurt. The girls were fine, and they admitted that it was their fault. Pingzhu was kidnapped when she was about to leave. Lin Tian asked the girls to hide in a safe place for now, and he would take care of everything. Lin Tian didn't even know what to do. He stood next to some beggar and stared at the floor, feeling lost. He understood that he first needed to find Pingzhu, but where could she have gone? This time our hero was on his own, so he would have to play all his cards. He placed thick wads of cash in front of the vagrant and told him to search the entire city. The man immediately understood his master's order and threw away his crutch, which had been nothing more than a prop. This man had his own gang called Guy, and he ordered everyone to gather and get to work. So Lin Tian's new task spread throughout the city, and they tried to tell as many people as possible about it. The vagrants took photos of Pingzhu and simply asked other passers-by where this woman was. If someone didn't know where she was, people would just pick up the photos and continue asking other people, spreading the word. This is how a whole network was formed. Meanwhile, Pingzhu was surrounded by guards. Her eyes and hands were bound. She didn't even know where she was. She was taken to an abandoned building where there were no people at all. But fortunately, one of the vagrants saw everything that was happening and knew that this woman was wanted. He compared the photo with what he saw and was sure it was definitely her. Meanwhile, Lin Tian and one of the vagrants were eating chicken, which the man kindly treated Lin Tian to. Our hero really liked the chicken, and the reason was that the man had followed Lin Tian's secret recipe. During this snack, he received the long-awaited call. His phone was in a rather strange place, but the main thing was that it was there. And most importantly, it could be used to transmit important information. For example, one of the vagrants had found Pingzhu and reported this to the chief. As it turned out, Pingzhu was at the Chen family's secret base. Our hero decided to stick to the plan they had discussed in advance and not change anything. Lin Tian wanted to use his plan to show how cool they were. The guys finished eating their chicken and were ready to show who was boss. Our hero waited for nightfall and prepared everything necessary. And so the first warrior went on the attack. He pretended to be drunk and began telling the guards how much he missed them, his beloved ones. Of course, no one felt any sympathy for some sick drunks, so the guard asked him nicely to get lost. But the vagrant just stood there and stared blankly at the man, so he had to repeat his request in a more rude manner. On purpose, the bum threw up all the contents of his stomach right in the guy's face. Of course, it was disgusting, but he simply didn't know where to go because everything stank. In the end, his colleague had to threaten the vagrant with a gun to get him to leave and not test their patience. But as soon as he tried to shoot, instead of a bullet, there were some bones in the chamber. The gun was completely inoperable, of course, thanks to the efforts of the gang. After all, the gang's secret weapon was chicken bones. Meanwhile, Pingzhu was thirsty and asked for a drink of water. Of course, the guard was not so foolish and gave her water to drink from his hands. Of course, he explained that he was fulfilling this request, and would fulfill any of her requests only because she was a huge gift to the Li family. A gift for the Li family. Just think about it. Pingzhu had always considered them to be nothing more than pathetic slaves to money. Such words made the guard laugh. He did not expect the girl to speak so suddenly, and in general, it seemed to him as if she was pretending to be a heroine. But they couldn't continue their pleasant conversation because they heard a boom. The door literally flew off its hinges and a man entered shouting that everything was fine. Lin Tian felt like some kind of superhero, and indeed, he really was one at that moment. After all, Pingzhu could completely rely on him because he had come to save her. Although the girl's eyes were closed, she could tell from his voice that it was her precious Lin Tian. Of course, the guards didn't like such insolent people, because they only created unnecessary trouble. But the guards had their own soldiers who carefully guarded their treasure. But it seemed that against Lin Tian's calcium, these weapons were useless. The soldiers didn't even have time to pull the trigger before chicken bones flew straight into their faces and knocked them off their feet. They were real losers. Lin Tian realized that they didn't even know how to fight. Our hero called on his calcium brothers, and they were able to go straight on the offensive. They could take whatever clothes, pants, and weapons they wanted. Now it all belonged to them. But the chief guard had no intention of stopping and wanted Lin Tian to test his strength. Our hero was interested, because the guy started to glow with an interesting color, which he liked. They rushed at each other in hand-to-hand combat and simply fought with their fists. The guard didn't understand what was happening. He struck. His attack was not weak, but for some reason his whole body was shaking. Lin Tian did not hide the truth that he had changed his properties, and now this man had become weak in all respects. The guard realized that things were bad. He called the name L01 and ordered the agent to return with a report and forget about him. Our hero did not like the prospect of some unknown person wanting to avoid him, so he was going to demonstrate how he could change properties. As soon as he tried to do so, he realized that the system had deceived him. More precisely, he couldn't see the stranger's intelligence, strength, appearance, mana, or luck. Everything was completely encrypted. Usually, our hero could always find out the properties of any person, and only now did he think that maybe it wasn't a person. But if it wasn't a person, then who was it? To find out at least some information, our hero decided to use his X-ray vision, and he simply couldn't believe what he saw. But even if he didn't believe his eyes, the proof was right there in his hands. A broken strand of golden hair. It was his former employee, Xiao Li. She had once been loyal to him, but as it turned out, she had other goals. Lin Tian reviewed different versions of what could have happened, and each of them shocked him. It was enough to imagine that Xiao Li could tell him that from now on she was no longer human. After all, our hero understood that the system was unlikely to be wrong, which meant that the problem lay elsewhere. The third rule of properties was that the total score of properties could not be changed. The scores could be rearranged as desired, but the final sum would always be the same. The second rule of properties. During inactivity, the property parameters did not change. The first law of properties. Viewing properties was possible for absolutely anyone. Initially, our hero was puzzled by what had happened to the twins and their story, and now he could no longer use Xiao Li. There was only one conclusion. Xiao Li was indeed not human. It was a strange plot twist, and Lin Tian could not answer the question of who the girl really was. But our hero had to return to reality and think about everyday things. The man had already dealt with his enemies and asked his boss how to deal with them. Lin Tian didn't really care. He allowed the gang to do whatever they wanted with them, as long as they didn't take off their underwear and were civilized. Finally, the guy freed the captive. Pingzhu was very surprised that Lin Tian found her so quickly. But it was all thanks to these guys, which our hero didn't even hide. However, Pingzhu believed that thanks to Lin Tian, they were also able to let off some steam. To tell the truth, for some reason this phrase stumped Lin Tian, and he didn't even know how to respond, but there was no need to answer. Pingzhu confidently continued, because she had learned everything about the heiress of the Chen family. Pingzhu was so polite to this man that he considered it undeserved, because he was just a rude man, but he promised to invite her to dinner one day. At the man's request, Pingzhu was no longer so kind. She already guessed that his gang was secretly trying to destroy all of the Li family's plans. But the man pretended that the girl was talking nonsense. Apparently, our hero was the only one in the room who didn't really understand anything. Pingzhu explained everything in order. The guy gang actually worked in restaurants undercover in order to gather information from the people. The man decided to turn this news into a joke, as if it were just a small business. But Pingzhu didn't want this man to be so modest. After all, she had come to him for a reason. It was clear that the man did not want to continue this conversation. He was glad to meet her, but he was tired and wanted to leave under this pretext. Before the man left, Pingzhu decided to clarify one last thing. Did he really not want to take revenge as the eldest of the Li family? It was clear that this topic was too sensitive for Brother Li, as he tried in every way to change the subject or deny the truth. But despite all this, Pingzhu was not going to stop. She did not understand. Would he really forgive them for breaking his legs and throwing him out of the house? Had he never thought about getting back what belonged to him? Lin Tian, meanwhile, was very impressed that old Li really was from a wealthy family. Still, old Li wanted to end the conversation, and he repeated once again that he had no connection to the Li family. Pingzhu actually understood, because every family had victims of behind-the-scenes struggles. But Li did not understand why the woman was talking about this. After all, if he could destroy the Li family, he would have done so long ago. Pingzhu admitted that she used to think there was no hope for that either. But that was until Lin Tian appeared. He was the one who could solve many of their problems. The old man sighed heavily, as if he could no longer argue, and finally wanted to understand what Lin Tian had to do with it. Pingzhu admitted without any modesty that this guy had money, and money solved everything. However, our hero was not ashamed of this at all, and even liked to boast that he had a lot of money. The next day, the most important gentleman gathered in the Chen family hall. The head of the Chen family, Chen Pingzhu, spoke first. He addressed Mr. Li, saying that the musicians from the Chen family were ready for the next year, and the question arose as to when Mr. Li would need them. Li Dazhen seemed not to be participating in the conversation. He was busy with his phone, and couldn't care less about the musicians. Nevertheless, Mr. Chen Pingzhu wanted Mr. Li to make a decision, as the Li family was authoritative in this matter. But Mr. Li Dazhen was too busy, and he didn't want the man to distract him with such nonsense. Pingzhu didn't even know what else to say or how to deal with this underdeveloped teenager. In the end, the third head of the Chen family, Chen Pingwang, thanked them for their hospitality, but was forced to leave this misunderstanding behind. Pingzhu was extremely dissatisfied with this turn of events, because they hadn't finished talking yet, so where was he going? But the Chen family still had no say in the matter, so what difference did his presence make? Pingzhu became even more enraged, because how dare Chen Pingwang speak like that, since Mr. Li was still there? But Mr. Li couldn't care less about what was happening in this room. Whether someone left or arrived, it made no difference to him. Chen Pingwang was the only one who wasn't afraid to say it outright. He was well aware that no one cared about the Chen family, and that in Chen Pingzhu's hands, the Chen family would be completely destroyed. The old man was outraged, assuming that Pingwang would betray him just as he had once betrayed Pingzhu. Mr. Li could no longer restrain himself, and responded to the old man with a harsh slap. He had already warned the old man not to shout, but it was precisely because of Li Dazhen's shouting that he lost. He had practically won, but in the end, he ran into 3 players. Mr. Li pointed his finger at Pingzhu, and ordered him to find these 3 people. Still, he had the courage to remind them that they were discussing an important matter concerning the Li and Chen families. Li Dazhen was not interested in this at all. He wanted these 3 people brought to him by any means necessary, and his father would pay them for it. In that case, Pingzhu couldn't refuse such a wonderful offer. Therefore, he wanted to know the details of the case. One was called, "Why are you wearing my clothes?" The second was called, "Your father is my brother." And the third was called, "Tian Tian Lin." Pingja suddenly realized that the name Tian Lin was familiar to him. Pingja ordered everyone to quickly find all these people, especially Lin Tian, whom he guessed was some boy from a wealthy family. Li Dajin was outraged that they had dared to bypass him and win. He wanted to find them and deal with them. But suddenly someone from the corridor shouted that there was no need to look for them. Right in front of them appeared three figures: the exiled Lord Li, Lin Tian, and Pingju. The girl was happy to introduce herself, asking why he was wearing her clothes. It was her, Pingju. Everyone knew Lin Tian, but he still felt it necessary to remind them that he was hiding under the nickname Tian Lin. And finally, the man from the Li family was happy to appear as your father, my brother. These nicknames were not created without reason, because Li Dazhenya's father was actually his younger brother. Lin Tian immediately warned this brainless teenager that he would kill him if he dared to interfere with him, as he had a team. And as long as Lin Tian was alive, Li Dazhenya didn't even have the right to hope for success. In the end, Pingju intervened in all this, because it seemed like arrogance to him. He immediately recognized Lin Tian as the man who, together with Pingju, wanted to steal the company. Lin Tian put on the most innocent look, as if he had been forced to do it. Pingju was outraged. How dare her brother talk to her sister's husband like that? Pingju was even angrier because no one obeyed his orders and everything was falling apart. These people in his family had no conscience at all. But Li Dazhen was forced to slap the old man again. How dare this old man talk to their family members like that? In fact, Pingju had to forget about the money for the whole next year. Pingju couldn't take it anymore and literally begged Mr. Li to reconsider his decision, because without his support, the Chen family would not survive. Pingju was shocked that their family could no longer survive without humiliating themselves before the Li family. Where had such a thing ever been seen before? Pingju reacted very sharply to any statements that were not included in his script, so he ordered the arrest of this insolent Pingju. But Lin Tian stood up for his wife, because if the Li family didn't give them money, other people would. Li Da was amused by this statement, because if his family didn't give money, would Lin Tian really finance the Chen family? The answer was obvious. Lin Tian had enough money to afford such a luxury. Meanwhile, Pingju was speechless. He couldn't believe what was happening, and what was happening was that Lin Tian could now afford to buy the Chen family's company. Actually, no, Lin Tian wasn't after that, even though he could have bought the company very easily. As was well known, the Chen family had always tried to nurture refined classical musicians. But people were tired of this and didn't like it. Therefore, the Chen family made a living only by flattering the audience. Pingju thought a little differently, and was much more progressive than these old people. At that moment, it was already a completely different era. It was the era of idols. That is why Pingju and Lin Tian wanted to hire versatile artists who could do everything. That way, they could earn money from a large audience and cultivate idols. No one liked this idea. Neither Li Dazhenyu nor the old man Pingju. They looked at Lin Tian as if he were crazy. But still, someone approved of this idea and thought it was quite good. Chen Pingwen thought it would be a great direction for the Chen family to develop. However, others were also willing to consider the idea, especially since they could reconfigure the equipment to suit their needs. Pingju continued to be indignant, believing that this bunch of beggars did not know how to earn money. Lin Tian suggested that the old man probably wanted the Chen family to earn money only from the Li family. Li Dazhen, who seemed to have just joined the conversation, decided to clarify whether their money was no longer needed. Pingju was afraid that they would be left without funding and began to justify himself sharply, as if that was not what he meant. Pingju did not want to drag the matter out, and suggested holding a meeting right away to resolve everything, since it was unclear when everyone would be able to gather again. Li Dazhen was unhappy with this turn of events, because it seemed that the Chen family wanted to turn their backs on them. Lin Tian reassured the young man that they did not want that, and had already turned away, so he could relax. Mr. Li had already ordered that the main guests be escorted out, as they were no longer needed here. Pingju was pleased with the situation, because the Li family would no longer interfere with them. Lin Tian finally suggested starting negotiations and discussing their future plans. The only one who was unhappy was, of course, Pingju. He was overcome with panic that everyone was planning something, talking among themselves, and no one even wanted to know his precious opinion. He was annoyed that these people with their insignificant plans had decided to start something of their own and didn't take him into account. He agreed with the idea that everyone really wanted to become idols now, but they had certain resources, and wasn't it better to do business with the support of the Li family? Lin Tian was obviously waiting for these words from the head, and suggested holding a competition to see whose idol would be more successful. Pingju did not rush to refuse, and asked his assistant to bring him a list of this month's programs. They decided to choose this particular program. Whichever idol ended up in the spotlight would take over the leadership of the company. Lin Tian was pleased, so he suggested starting the selection process tomorrow. He planned to find a male idol. Of course, Pingju demanded that the Li family be informed of this news quickly, with a request that they choose the most popular artist. Moreover, this artist must be provided with teachers in all disciplines. Music teachers, dance teachers, and rap teachers, and of course a basketball coach. Where would they be without him? The assistant doubted the wisdom of his boss, and wondered how important it was to be able to play basketball. The boss was unhappy that his assistant was talking nonsense. He had to do as he was told. Pingju was already sitting in our hero's private bus, and they were thinking about what to do. After all, they didn't have any male artists. But Lin Tian had not decided to choose a male artist for no reason. He already had a candidate in mind. Moreover, he was sure that this person would be perfect for them. Surprisingly, that person was Zhang Hao. He already had a slight bald spot and looked quite handsome. Our hero hadn't contacted him yet, but the guy had a bad feeling. Suddenly, his father called him. Zhang Hao thought that he wanted to send him money for pocket expenses again. But his father had other plans. He wanted to open 10 more branches of his company, and wanted his son to become a manager. Zhang Hao wasn't very happy about it, but he didn't refuse his father. Still, he wondered where their family had gotten so much money. His father was happy to tell him that they had found an investor. Not only that, but they had just signed a contract, and he had finally managed to pay off all his debts. In short, his father had won his son's agreement, which made him very happy, and now he thought that they could move on to the next stage of the agreement. Lin Tian sat there with a stony face the whole time, although he was probably happy that everything was going according to plan, or maybe he was confident that everything would go according to plan. In the end, he handed over all the necessary funds to Mr. Zhang Hao. He didn't care how they would use them. They could even afford to lose money. Lin Tian had only one goal, to make Zhang Hao a star. Zhang Hao, meanwhile, did not even expect that he would become the boss so quickly. He was now only interested in how luxurious the new branch would be. When he arrived at the address, it was completely empty. He didn't understand what was going on, so he decided that he needed to tell his father to change the location of the branch. As he stood there feeling nervous about it, a woman's hand touched his shoulder and greeted him. He turned around and saw an incredibly beautiful girl behind him. The stranger just wanted to ask if Zhang Hao was the manager of this restaurant. Zhang Hao was very embarrassed by the attention of such a lovely girl and replied uncertainly that he thought he was the manager. The stranger was delighted, as she had heard that a very good restaurant was opening from the Zhang Hao company. The girl admitted that she couldn't afford to eat at the main Zhang Hao restaurant, but she thought she would finally be able to eat at its branch. But she looked at the building and noticed that the restaurant had not yet opened and she had rushed too soon. It didn't matter to Zhang Hao anymore, so he said that they had opened a long time ago and that the girl could come in. But there was absolutely no one in the restaurant, and the guy was confused because he didn't know what to do. Besides, the girl was in a hurry, and she was wondering how long she would have to wait because her classes were about to start. The guy still didn't really know how to get out of this situation, but he promised that everything would be ready soon. Zhang Hao had once seen other chefs cooking, so he wanted to do everything he could. He started cooking, but suddenly heard screams in the main hall. The unfortunate girl was surrounded by huge men on all sides. Zhang Hao just glanced at these people, turned away, and was terrified. It was too late to run away, because the stranger thought that the director had come to rescue her. In order not to lose face, Zhang Hao said that this was indeed the case, and that the girl had nothing to fear from him. The men were ready to beat this guy up and kick him, but he believed that whoever was to blame should be asked, and why did these men need him anyway? The girl was delighted, because Zhang Hao turned out to be so strong and managed to defeat everyone with just one blow. Zhang Hao himself couldn't believe that he had defeated them all. Suddenly, someone had been secretly filming them for a long time. The journalist never thought that the young hero could surprise them so much. Brother Zhang had already become this girl's idol. He was fair and could speak so beautifully. Yes, he was destined to become an idol. Zhang Hao was surprisingly very modest and thought that he was far from being an idol. Soon, news spread everywhere about how the modest restaurant manager heroically saved the girl and destroyed a group of bandits. Pingju and Lin Tian were already satisfied with this news, because Cao Bilo had done an excellent job. And yet Pingju did not understand at all why Lin Tian decided to make him an idol. After all, this guy did not fit the bill in any way. Our hero believed that this was his trump card, because now it wasn't artists who were gaining real popularity, but people like Zhang Hao. Therefore, Lin Tian was confident that they would succeed if they raised a piece of trash like Zhang Hao. Finally, the casting for the Idol Savior 1 on 10 was held in the city. A huge line formed at the entrance. Zhang Hao also attended the event, but he felt insecure and kept asking other people if this was really the venue for the Idol Savior event. When people saw Zhang Hao, they whispered to each other, recognizing him as the young hero who had saved the girl. The girl looked at Zhang Hao and confirmed that it was indeed him. After all, he had such a silly but cute look about him. He could definitely make a great idol. Pingju, of course, noticed the mood of the crowd and Zhang Hao, immediately guessing that this was the guy Lin Tian had chosen. In fact, no one expected that the news about Zhang Hao would surpass the popularity of all the websites that had been bought by Chen's company. They had spent a lot of money, but Pingju had to admit that they had lost the first round, and now they were convinced that Lin Tian should not be underestimated. The host had already started the show and welcomed the guests, and the broadcast of their event was about to begin. The first candidate was a student intern from the Faculty of Culture, Li Tian. This handsome guy sang and danced beautifully. He was full of himself and left no one indifferent. Girls were especially fond of him. All Li Tian had to do was glance at someone, and they would fall in love. He was loved by the audience because he was gorgeous and talented, and the judges gave him a perfect score of 10 points. Pingju was sure that victory was theirs. Of course, at Pingju's request, the judges gave them the scores they needed. But now it was the next contestant's turn. It was Zhang Hao. He clearly did not know how to behave in public and did not have the same showmanship qualities as Li Tian, so he was very withdrawn now. Zhang Hao also felt confused. He just hoped he had come to the right place. People didn't understand what was wrong with this guy. To them, he seemed funny and stupid, so no one in the hall could hold back their laughter. Zhang Hao pulled himself together and began to sing as best he could, ignoring the other people. But suddenly he lost his balance, tripped over his own foot, and fell down. Security guard Pingju watched the spectacle and laughed, certain that this guy would be disgraced and kicked out. But in the end, one of the judges decided to speak up. Zhang Hao already understood that he had not made the desired impression on the audience and was ready for any reaction. As it turned out, one of the judges was Lin Tian. He stood up to say that he could no longer watch this. Jiang Hao had not paid attention to who was sitting among the judges until that moment, but he was surprised when he saw Lin Tian's brother. Pingju was equally surprised that this guy was among the judges, and what was he doing there in the first place? Chen's assistant felt that he was losing control of the situation, because earlier they had checked all the lists of judges, and there were only top streamers on them. But apparently, this guy didn't think so. Even Pingju knew that Lin Tian was a top streamer. He wouldn't even be surprised if this halfwit had slipped him some money for his evaluation. With a completely serious expression, Lin Tian expressed his opinion to everyone that Jiang Hao's performance was not bad. The competitors didn't even expect Lin Tian to want to promote his idol in this way, so it was a shock to them. Lin Tian was still forced to admit that the previous contestants' parameters were much better. That's why our hero decided to use the golden button to give Jiang Hao a chance to prove himself in the final. People were amazed. Was something like this really possible? After all, it seemed obvious to everyone that Jiang Hao was far from being an idol. Lin Tian anticipated these questions. People were probably wondering why he had made such a decision. The audience tried to make sure they had heard correctly, and that one of the judges had indeed pressed the yellow button. To reassure everyone of Lin Tian's decision, he clearly repeated that he had indeed given Jiang Hao the opportunity to advance. The other judges were also not particularly happy with this decision, as it was not entirely appropriate, and they hoped that Lin Tian would reconsider his decision. In the end, someone from the crowd decided to influence this decision, and shouted that he was against it. Pingju picked up on the mood of the audience and confirmed that he was against such lawlessness. Lin Tian, looking completely innocent, asked why they had such an opinion on the matter. Pingju's answer was simple and obvious. Jiang Hao couldn't sing or dance, so why should he be allowed to advance to the finals? Why couldn't Lin Tian give Li Tai this chance? Lin Tian, meanwhile, was struggling to come up with the most appropriate answer. But Pingju didn't let him finish, and rudely interrupted with his guess that Lin Tian was in cahoots with Jiang Hao, and began to question what kind of relationship he had with Jiang Hao. In a few minutes, Vice Chairman Pingju checked some information on the internet. As it turned out, the company that sent Jiang Hao was a joint stock company, and the main shareholder in this company was, of course, Lin Tian. Jiang Hao was completely lost. He probably didn't even know what was going on. However, the host did not expect this, and did not think that the best streamer would turn out to be such a person. Pingju plucked up his courage, went up on stage, and began to demand an explanation from Lin Tian. However, our hero wanted to explain why he gave this opportunity to Jiang Hao, and the reason was that Jiang Hao was his employee. Pingju was discouraged by such honesty. Lin Tian admitted that he had deceived everyone, and he was sure that soon, this guy would be slandered. But that wasn't all. All the artists on that stage were his employees. Even the most incredible idols and other popular performers confirmed their boss's words. All these people worked under the Pingju Music Company. They were official partners of this program, if Pingju didn't know about it yet. The assistant chairman was angry because despite this, their sport had not gone anywhere. The assistant chairman demanded that the other judges quickly use the eject button, and expel Jiang Hao, of course, for money, as he immediately hinted to them. They couldn't disobey this gentleman, and did as he asked. 2 against 1, Pingju was sure that Jiang Hao had lost. Lin Tian sighed wearily and heavily, trying to find the right words. It was certainly good that they were against him. But did they really think that Pingju had won this argument? The men looked in the direction Lin Tian was pointing and saw the following scene. Pingju had already given the contract to Li Tai, and he confidently signed it without hesitation. Lin Tian, in turn, thanked Pingju for providing them with such a talented artist, because now he was theirs. And according to the rules of the bet, Pingju no longer had his idol. This meant that Lin Tian had won the bet. The assistant chairman was on edge, because it was a real deception and they had been blatantly cheated. Lin Tian, however, did not hide this, and boldly admitted that he really did have a trump card up his sleeve. Pingju, meanwhile, either couldn't believe what was happening or something else, but he burst into hysterical laughter. However, none of that mattered anymore, because now it was time to give Lin Tian the position of head of the Chen family. But before handing over the position, the assistant chairman demanded that our hero first pay a penalty for terminating the contract. Without any fuss, our hero handed the man a small stack of craft paper. The man could no longer control himself and lost his temper, because he recognized in this bundle the very money with which he had bribed Lin Tian yesterday. The guy could do nothing but chuckle and ask how it felt to have your own money used to pay your fine. It must have been incredibly pleasant. Pingju, who had been silent until then, joined the conversation and ordered everyone to stop. Lin Tian felt somewhat offended, because Pingju yelled at him, and for no reason. Even his father had never yelled at him. Pingju believed that you could fool around as much as you wanted, but he couldn't allow anyone to disgrace his family. So he warned the boy that he had gone too far, and called Mr. Li, making it clear that he needed him. In this way, he wanted to show Lin Tianyu what happened when rich people played games. Meanwhile, one of the officers approached the host of the project and said something that made the man nervous. Later, he warned everyone that due to technical difficulties, filming had been completed and the show was cancelled. Sarcastically, Pingju began to tell Lin Tian that the family had helped them cancel the show. Then, with the most innocent look on his face, he apologized to Lin Tian, saying, "I'm sorry, but money rules the world." Lin Tian turned away for a moment and began to say that since he had become rich, he had realized one thing. Complete freedom of action did not lie in making money. And in spending them wisely, one could have millions, but not understand how to manage them at all. Lin Tian, uttering this phrase, managed to open the curtain behind which stood a detachment of officers led by Mr. Zhou. At that moment, Pingju probably began to understand that the Li family had not even gotten up from their chairs to offer them a helping hand. Officer Zhou Weiwei announced the violations, which consisted of violating trade laws and bribing people. There was also interference in the show's proceedings. The police also learned that Chen Pingzhu was associated with illegal groups. Based on the above violations, Pingzhu and his loyal assistant were arrested. The assistant chairman decided to take all the blame upon himself, saying that he was solely responsible and that Mr. Chen Pingzhu knew nothing about it. However, Lin Tian warned him that his confession had been recorded on a dictaphone. Moreover, our hero had bribed Li Tai a few days earlier, but now he simply decided to arrange a surprise. Faced with a hopeless situation, Pingzhu felt powerless and couldn't even get angry. It was obvious that Lin Tian had planned everything in advance. But before leaving, Pingzhu warned Lin Tian not to count on cooperation with the channels anymore. Zhang Hao was still there, watching everything from the sidelines. When our hero was left alone, he approached him, deciding to clarify whether it was all because of him. Of course not. But Lin Tian would never say that. He asked Zhang Hao not to worry, because he, Lin Tian, was ready to do anything for his friend. Moreover, first of all, this scandal would raise the show's ratings. Secondly, cooperation with the channel could always be bought. That was not a problem. Our hero came out on top again, realizing that he really loved spending money. The next day did not start so brightly for our hero. He considered various options, but none of them seemed to work. Meanwhile, Chao Biao, sitting next to him, didn't even understand what was happening with Lin Tian again. The problem was that Lin Tian was looking for a worthy opponent, someone he could fight. The girl tried to understand Lin Tian, why he needed this at all, and what the point of it was. The point was that our hero wanted to defeat the bad guys with his iron fist of justice. But in reality, our hero had decided to fulfill the task of the martial arts master, and time was very unforgiving to him. That's why he wanted to find someone and hone his skills. As they say, evil never sleeps, and Lin Tian must always be ready. Da Fan Pai was still in the hospital and was slowly recovering. Every single day he thought about Lin Tian. As soon as he was discharged from the hospital, he was going to get even with him. In the end, our hero couldn't take it anymore, and decided to visit his strongest opponent to find out when he would finally recover. Although Da Fan Pai thought about Lin Tian, he was not very happy about his current appearance. This guy seemed like some kind of psycho to him. Meanwhile, on the street, two guys were arguing about who Han Mei loved. Of course, our hero discovered this when he was leaving the hospital after visiting his friend. His eyes and ears did not deceive him, and he hoped that the guys were going to fight. But the strangers didn't understand what had happened before that, Lin Tianyu. It turns out that our hero simply thought, why not help them and offer to fight with them, if it made no difference to them. But the strangers thought he was just another nutcase and ran away, leaving only clouds of dust behind them. Further down the road, our hero came across some lovely elderly ladies, and he thought, why not offer them to hit him, such an ill-mannered guy. The grandmothers ignored him. Then he saw some children and promised them candy for whoever hit him, and whoever hit him harder would get more candy. In the end, all these attempts were in vain. Everyone thought he was crazy. Was this the loneliness of a master of his craft? Just as he relaxed, he heard a gunshot and saw a man right in front of him. The man was apparently looking for Lin Tian from the start, as he knew his name, but Lin Tian did not know who this man was. The stranger hoped until the very last moment that Lin Tian couldn't have forgotten him so quickly. Our hero experienced a strange feeling of déjà vu, as if he had seen this somewhere before. Since Lin Tian couldn't remember this stranger, he explained that his brother had suffered because of him. Lin Tian was aware of the situation and thought about it. But even if you killed him, he still didn't know who this man was. It turned out that his brother was the one who had tried to rob the bank. The stranger had seen the news and remembered that it was because of Lin Tian that he had failed, and was now in prison. Finally, it dawned on our hero what and who they wanted from him. After all, the thief was wearing a mask, and Lin Tian had no idea what he looked like. Words were meaningless, so the thief's brother simply put a bullet in Lin Tian's forehead to kill him. He was happy because it was the end, and he was proud of himself for showing the price of heroism. The bullet was fired, but Lin Tian, on the contrary, said that it was excellent. Our hero was looking for a bad guy just like this scumbag, and it seemed that he had won a ticket to a world of pain and suffering, for which Lin Tian congratulated him. The man was simply dismayed when he saw his victim catching bullets with his bare hands. But for some reason, this did not upset or frighten him at all. On the contrary, it cheered him up, because it explained a lot and meant that his brother could not lose to a weakling. However, now he was going to shoot at Lin Tian with 2 pistols. He was curious to see if the guy could catch bullets from 2 guns at the same time. Lin Tian looked completely focused, and was just waiting for the man to attack him. He was in such a deep hole, but for some reason, it made him very happy. Bullets were flying at him, and he was smiling like a madman. Lin Tian was, of course, grateful to this kind stranger for his help, but alas, he was in a hurry to disappoint him, because it wasn't enough. But this man's decisive revenge was commendable, and Lin Tian was sure that his brother would be proud of him. Yes, unfortunately, this man's time was up, and it was our hero's turn to prove himself. As soon as our hero wanted to do something, he noticed that the man was nowhere to be found. He had already mounted his motorcycle, and was trying to escape at high speed, hoping that they would not catch up with him. On the way, he thought, what kind of crazy young people would catch bullets with their bare hands now? But he was glad that now he had nothing to fear. Otherwise, he would have been like his brother, another victim of this young man. Suddenly, Lin Tian caught up with his new acquaintance, and praised him for his escape style, because it was simply awesome, and Lin approved of that. Instinctively, the man thanked him for the compliment, but asked in surprise how the guy had caught up with him. It turned out to be an ancient martial art, the Lin family's burning wheels. Lin Tian did not forget to thank this kind man once again, because thanks to his training, the young man had gained insight and learned a couple more tricks. Of course, he wanted to practice them a little, So he started with his first trick, the ancient martial art of the Lin family's wheel piercing. As soon as the bullet touched the rubber on the wheel, the motorcycle exploded, and the man was thrown back. Of course, our hero was not going to stop there. He had other tricks he wanted to try. Next up was another ancient martial arts trick, the Lin family's sunrise. After this attack, the man's eyes were literally blinded. For a moment, he felt that he could not see anything, and his eyes hurt terribly. At one point, Lin Tian admitted that it was something along the lines of, "Just don't copy it exactly so you don't get caught." The guy honestly admitted that he copied this trick from an anime he once watched. But that was just a moment of candor. Lin Tian was not going to stop and continued his experiments. Next up was an ancient martial art, the spirit of the Lin family's incorporeal unity. Lin Tian came up with a name for the new trick, the ancient martial art of the Lin family's rubber gun. Just think about where he got these names. After all, only a few were mentioned, and there were dozens of them. After these dozens of attempts, the man could no longer bear the pain and asked to stop, admitting defeat. It was easier for him to surrender to the police. In fact, our hero was also tired, so tired that he couldn't even perform the final move. Finally, the long-awaited sound of the task being completed and the award being received was heard. The task was completed, and Lin Tian received 1 bronze award, 5 silver awards, and 8 out of 10 gold awards. Lin Tian was pleasantly surprised that there were even additional rewards. But for the first stage, he received tickets to a martial arts competition. His internal QI storage was increased, and he also had the opportunity to synchronize his energy. The more tricks our hero could use, the more awards he would receive. And there were also Diamond, Star, Royal, and Absolute Master awards. It all boiled down to the fact that he needed to find a stronger opponent and hone his skills. So he remembered that the man had mentioned something about the Song family and its 7 demons, and now he wanted to find out more about their family. The next day, our hero and Qiao Biao set off for the place of the 7 demons of the Sun family. Their bad reputation preceded them, but today they would go undercover to their residence in Tuang and deal with everyone at once, as Lin Tian had planned. Qiao Bilei admitted that she hadn't been in the underworld for a long time, and she even got goosebumps. Who knows? Maybe she was happy to return to the past. But at the doorstep, they were greeted with incredible kindness. Or, to be more precise, with knives and gangster slang. The guys stopped our heroes because they needed to know where they were going, and if they had tickets. Lin Tian was slightly confused and indignant, because what tickets were they talking about? In the end, he admitted that he had a couple of tickets, but he couldn't give them away because they were his. The guys clearly didn't like this answer, and they immediately went on the attack. Qiao Bilo decided to take the initiative in this situation and asked the guys to stop, since this was her territory after all. She whispered to Lin Tian that what they were saying was local slang, meaning slow down and ticket. However, our hero didn't need to worry, as Qiao could handle it herself. At that moment, it was as if America had been discovered for our hero. He was surprised that such a thing even existed. Already speaking in gangster slang, Cao Bilo addressed the guys, saying that if they were going to act superior to them here, they'd better call their parents right away so that the adults could talk, which in plain language meant, "You're no match for me." After such a short introduction, the guys immediately understood that this girl was one of their own. The man continued the dialogue, because the Heavenly King wanted to catch up with the Mountain Tiger. In plain language, this meant, "How brave. Aren't you afraid of the wrath of your ancestors?" Cao's answer was not long in coming. The river demon could not enter the city pagoda, which meant, yes, these ancestors must already be standing on the edge of the cliff, ready to jump into the raging river before it finds them. "You chirp too beautifully for such a gray chick," said the man. "That means you bluff well. I almost believed you. Roots grow into the ground, and the deeper the root, the older the tree." Cao made it clear that she was the daughter of a branch of the clan, the main branch of the clan. All this time, our hero was trying to understand this intricate dialogue, but apparently he was having a hard time doing so. The man asked how long Cao had been caring for the tree, which indicated what generation of disciples she was from. To build a house, you need a foundation, and then you need to lay all the bricks from the first row to the end. Cao Bi could not actually say this until she entered the main hall. The man said that someone had already laid the foundation for Cao. In translation, did she mean to say that she was from the first generation? His insight could always find light in the darkness. Cao meant that if he understood who she was, he should accept it as a gift and let them pass. It was such a beautiful day, but the stranger who came out from inside the house did not understand why there was so much noise. The young man introduced himself as Sun Ji, but he allowed these guests to call him simply Sun. Some progress had already been made. Lin Tian and Qiao Biao introduced themselves and gave their names. Sun Ji continued to speak in local slang, asking the guys what they thought of the weather here, which meant who sent them here. Lin Tian, who did not know how to speak gangster slang, answered the question directly, saying that the weather was beautiful, as it was everywhere, with a light breeze and no scorching sun. Qiao whispered to the guy to be careful, because Sun Ji was communicating in slang. Therefore, Cao herself answered the man's question, saying that the second master of the Sun family was kind to them, and had invited them to visit his home. Lin Tian quickly picked up on this, and began to agree, saying that Mr. Sun Qigong had invited them, but as good guests, they had not come empty-handed. In that case, Sun Ji agreed to show his dear guests inside. On the way, Lin Tian asked the girl where she had learned this slang. She whispered that she had lived in Tiger Mountain for some time, which is how she had learned it. Our heroes whispered among themselves, but probably did not understand what trap they were walking into. As soon as they arrived, Lin Tian wanted to get down to business right away, specifically that he and Qiao wanted to join them. Sun Ji looked completely carefree, and without even thinking about it, he said that it was entirely possible. In fact, Lin Tian was very surprised that Songji was talking about such an important matter, with such a relaxed expression on his face. Sunji had been given so much money that he saw no reason to worry about anything. Lin Tian felt that there was something fishy going on, because he had planned that he would be sent away, and then he would fight with every person on this mountain. But everything was not going according to his plan. Sunji even teased the guy a little, saying, "Come on, another warlike fool." For Cao Biao, this was simply outrageous. How could Sunji laugh at them right to their faces? Did he really think they didn't know the rules? They had come to the mountain gates not just for an excursion, but to fight the demons of the Sun family. Sunji admitted that he did not condemn senseless fighting, let alone murder, especially if it was on their family's property. Sunji preferred to resolve everything in a civilized manner, walking among the trees in the fresh air. Chao didn't understand what trees or fresh air he was talking about. He was part of the Sun family, and the Sun family were the masters of the underworld, the underground arena, and the black market. For some reason, the words underworld made Sunji nervous, and his sister scolded him with her words. Still, he had to admit that maybe it used to be that way. He was cruel and a little bit reckless. But now, everything was different. After all, he even had an honorary certificate for his great contribution to the development of the city and his free assistance. Although Lin Tian was a little out of touch with reality, Sun Zi seemed to him to be overdoing it, and together with Chao, they stared at the man as if he were some kind of madman. Our hero was even a little upset after that, because Sun Qigong had given him completely different information. Sun Ji admitted that it was not their fault, because they could not have known. Sun Qigong and the sixth brother had already severed their ties with Sun Ji. If they couldn't accomplish anything today, Lin Tian inquired about the fate of his money, which Sun Ji had already pocketed. And not for free, he offered his guests something to see with their own eyes, rather than just hear from him. So they followed their host and found themselves somewhere in the courtyard of his estate. Sun Ji showed his guests the cacao tree, also known as the chocolate tree. He considered these trees to be simply beautiful, works of art, and he was happy that someone had invested in them. Now getting to the point, about Lin Tian's money, Sun Ji asked him to sign a contract. The title read, Limited Liability Company, Sun Family Cocoa, Investment Agreement. Lin Tian, without even reading it, thought the man was rushing things. But to tell the truth, he didn't have much time. If Lin Tian and Chao didn't buy his trees, someone else would. Spend so much money to buy a remote garden with cocoa trees? Who else but our hero was rich enough to spend money like that? Sun Ji explained that although these gardens were located far away, which was completely inconvenient, his cocoa was the best on the market. Competitors wanted to buy the Sun family's cocoa gardens, not to harvest cocoa beans, but to destroy them completely. That way, they could use their cheap raw materials to take over the market. For this reason, Sun Ji was very reluctant to let this wonderful cocoa disappear from his garden. Chao Bilei had always known that Sun Ji was a bit of a weirdo, but she never imagined anything like this. Lin Tian was a little confused, but for the sake of Sun Ji's obsession with cocoa, he decided to invest money in these gardens. But Lin Tian also suddenly wanted to buy the company that wanted to destroy these gardens, so he needed to know its name. Sun Ji did not conceal the names of his competitors, and his competitors were called Xiao, Xiao, Su Fu. The next day, our hero was already sitting in his office, carefully reading the documents. No matter how you looked at it, Su Shuiqing was creating more and more problems for him, which were quite difficult to solve. At first, Lin Tian thought she was just an arrogant girl with big ambitions, nothing more. But only now did he realize how wrong he was. In addition to driving a car, this girl had many other skills that even men sometimes couldn't master. Lin Tian was interrupted from his thoughts by Ping Zhu, who entered the office shouting that they had problems. Lin Tian was no longer surprised by anything lately, and thought that perhaps the acquisition of the subsidiary company Xiao Xiao Su had failed. In fact, the purchase went smoothly, but there were other problems. As soon as they decided to sign the contract, Lin Tian didn't let Ping Zhu finish, and voiced his assumption that they had raised the price, immediately adding that it didn't matter, they just had to pay. But in reality, things were much worse. These guys sold the company without saying a word, but then something bad happened. Several people from the Su family who worked at the subsidiary company all quit. Every single one of them. Lin Tian was shocked. After all, these guys quit, even though he had raised their salaries. Not only that, but they also asked Ping Zhu to fire them through disciplinary action. One of the Su family members said that their older sister had accepted the money, but they had nothing to do with it. It was very similar to sabotage, through the dismissal of the entire management team. In the midst of all this, our hero received a message from someone. He couldn't even imagine who would write to him at such a time. As it turned out, it was Su Weiqing. She wrote, "Stupid rich man, are you happy now?" This message was enough to pique Lin Tian's interest. In addition to all this, the girl also left the location where she was, and on the same day, Lin Tian went to some abandoned factory. He looked at the photo she had sent him in the message and compared it to the place he had ended up. While he was doing this, someone's hand touched him from behind. Lin Tian was so surprised that he was even scared, thinking that the girl was going to attack him, so he used his ancient martial arts, the roar of the Lin family's fire dragon. But Su Shuiqing believed that all of Lin Tian's ancient martial arts were completely useless. Lin Tian himself noticed that it didn't work. Moreover, he didn't understand where all the qi had gone. He wondered if Su Shuiqing was some kind of vessel for storing qi. But Su Shuiqing didn't quite understand what he was talking about and what the guy wanted from her. However, he wasn't going to explain it, dismissing it as just thoughts out loud. And so, when the greetings were over, Su Shuiqing decided to get down to business. The subsidiary company that Lin Tian's family had acquired. Lin Tian interrupted the girl again, saying that he was speaking now, Not this woman. The first thing he wanted to know was why Su Xueqing was following him everywhere. Su Xueqing was a little offended by this statement. After all, she had rushed here based only on a photo from a message. But did she always take photos like that? Lin Tian was convinced that she did it on purpose. In the end, Lin Tian was indeed right, and it would be pointless for the girl to deny it. Lin Tian was the strongest person Su Xueqing had ever known. Lin Tian was even embarrassed by such compliments. Could that be the only reason? He dared to suggest that she was secretly in love with him. In her opinion, that would be too much for her. Whether Lin Tian liked it or not, they were now in the same boat, so he had better get serious. Our hero still didn't understand what was going on and what kind of mess he had gotten himself into. It seemed that Su Xueqing had warned the guy to get ready because now the game of survival was about to begin. He didn't even have time to react before several needles were stuck into his neck. Su Xueqing was already anticipating that when their acquaintances arrived on the island, the lovely Lin Tian would beg her for help. Were there things in this world that couldn't be bought with money? Su Xueqing was convinced that there were such things, and more than one. First, advanced scientific and technological achievements and discoveries. Second, emotions, such as those you get when watching your favorite team play. But now there was something that combined these things into one. And that thing was the survival game, Island of Despair. There were no rules here. Initially, it was just a regular game of fighting for the amusement of the rich. The winner received a prize, incredible achievements of scientists in various fields and research, in a single copy. Because of such a prize, strict rules were introduced, and breaking them was dangerous for one's life. But Su Xueqing had been watching Lin Tian for a long time. Meanwhile, our hero was already fast asleep, drooling and completely ignoring the girl. She had to raise her voice so that Lin Tian would pay at least a little attention to her and listen carefully. But Su Xueqing's voice was like a strong sleeping pill, and whether he wanted to or not, Lin Tian fell asleep anyway. Still, it was fair to say that sleep was beneficial, so the guy would be happy if the girl continued. In general, Su Xueqing decided to briefly explain that several teams would participate in this game, and now Lin Tian was Su's partner. Lin Tian was a little confused as to why, out of all the possible guys, she chose him. As Su Xueqing had already said, she had been watching Lin Tian for a long time. He knew how to fight and was capable of making decisions. On top of that, he was so rich that it was impossible to bribe him. Moreover, there weren't many people who could help Su Xueqing in this matter, so Lin Tian should be grateful that she chose him. But now it was time to take the plunge. To begin with, the girl thought they needed to go to the base to find supplies. Lin Tian decided to casually mention that it was his first time flying on an airplane. This fact surprised Su Xueqing, because the guy had so much money, but he was flying on an airplane for the first time. However, it didn't matter to her. She literally grabbed him by his jacket and pulled him down, and together they flew away. Only when they were already approaching the ground did Lin Tian realize that he had encountered a small problem. He didn't have a parachute. Panic set in because he could die. Su Xueqing explained that according to the rules, the group was only allowed one parachute, but since the girl was generous, if Lin Tian called her mistress, she would share her parachute with him. Lin Tian heard Su Xueqing's offer, but he had another option. A minute later, the girl discovered that the parachute was no longer on her back. Our hero's wonderful storage space was really convenient to use. Just think how many useful things could be stuffed in there. The girl didn't even realize when Lin Tian had stolen it. But he was a rich man, so how could he be called a thief? Moreover, he had already paid Su Xueqing for this parachute. After all, he had bought it. The girl screamed and demanded that this lunatic give her the parachute back. If he didn't pull the ring now, it would be too late. Lin Tian finally took pity on her, and promised that if she addressed him as Master Lin Tian, please, then he would share the parachute with her. Su Xueqing couldn't bring herself to say it. She could call him by his name, but Master Lin Tian was too difficult for her. Su Xueqing was falling at a breakneck speed, and Lin Tian had time to mock her. The girl was already sure that she would turn into a pancake and just wanted her parachute back. In the end, our hero wasn't such a heartless person, but he still hoped that the girl would call him master later. Finally, the parachute opened. Lin Tian held Su Xueqing tightly around the waist, and they were already approaching the ground. Still, Su Xueqing had a hunch that Lin Tian was just afraid to take responsibility for all this. The closer they got to the ground, the more Su Xueqing could see that they had spent too much time, and that someone must be waiting for them below. Lin Tian did not ignore these guesses, and decided to do something about it. Behind the hangars, men were indeed hiding, waiting for the people with parachutes to land below. They peeked out from behind the wall, and finally waited for the parachute to land right next to them. When this happened, they were happy to wait, but these greenhorns did not understand that any delay was equal to death. The man took aim with his crossbow and hit the target. He was convinced that this was the end for these guys, and now, together with his colleague, he was going to search these people, because they needed money. But to their surprise, they found only some clothes, and not a single body. Finally, it dawned on this scumbag that they had simply been fooled like suckers. A moment later, they were lying where Lin Tian and Su Xueqing had been. These guys were obviously not skilled enough to catch our hero. He fell into a deep sleep after Lin Tian knocked him out, but Lin Tian was still surprised that these guys had nothing with them except weapons. Didn't that dear lady tell him that all the participants were rich guys? But before answering that question, Su Xueqing wanted to get her clothes back, because standing there in her underwear was not a pleasant experience. In fact, the girl simply forgot to mention that 60% of the participants were petty thugs, hooligans, bandits, looters, and the like, or as they are called here, tyrants. The rest were rich tyrants. If a tyrant wins, he will be completely acquitted and even given money. But Su Xueqing should have said this right away because our hero was counting on this pocket money, but now there was nothing left. Suddenly, the girl noticed something in the distance and warned Lin Tian to be careful. Su Xueqing probably meant only the bullet that the guy had already caught. Lin Tian kept watching and observing, and was convinced that the girl was worried about him. Her concern warmed our hero's heart and soul, for which he thanked her. But it turns out that Lin Tian simply misunderstood everything. In any case, now was not the time for matters of the heart. It was much more important for them to deal with the enemy. This time, Su Xueqing decided to go to the place where the sniper was standing, so she decided to let our hero see kung fu techniques that were head and shoulders above the ancient martial arts. Lin Tian suddenly thought about it, because he didn't know the girl's abilities, so he thought that this was indeed a great opportunity for him to learn more. Literally a few minutes later, the girl, as promised, brought the body of the sniper who had shot at them. The poor guy didn't have time to escape. Our hero had only seen something like this once before, when a girl killed him in a matter of seconds. It was incredible. Another defeated man was in very serious condition, but he was holding a button in his hand that sent some kind of signal. This signal had already reached other armed men, probably from the same team. The man we already know was aware that Su Xueqing and Lin Tian were there, and had been spotted by his man. Su Wumei ordered all his soldiers to capture his cousin, and of course that asshole Lin Tian. Our hero and Su Xueqing relied heavily on their own strength, and were not as prepared as Su Wumei, who had gathered an army in advance. And in fact, they were surrounded. Lin Tian could already sense out of the corner of his eye that someone was behind the wall, and he knew for sure that they were in trouble. Su Xueqing confirmed Lin Tian's suspicions. She realized that someone had surrounded them on all sides, so she warned the guy to be ready to fight. Lin Tian was increasingly surprised, because it turned out that the girl probably had X-ray vision. She confirmed this guess, and even said that her vision was more advanced than his. Lin Tian pointed to his side where the soldiers were coming from, and the girl pointed to hers. The situation was not ideal because they were indeed surrounded. Su Xueqing began to realize that something was wrong, and that she was probably overlooking something. However, she was not going to give up and decided to first destroy the guys who were on her side. As it turned out later, Su Xueqing possessed nanotechnology combat skills, and used bonus power. But her strength was not enough to even hit her cousin Su Wumei. He stopped her blow right in midair. Su Wumei did not hesitate to teach the girl that she should not rely too much on nanotechnology. After all, even a simple switch could disable the nano-weapons on the girl. Lin Tian began to understand the situation, and now began to guess why Su Wumei had not chosen a direction from the start. Su Xueqing had backup options, such as conventional weapons. She also reminded him that she never looked up to anyone. She fired a bullet straight at her relative, but the bullet got stuck in his bulletproof vest. Did the girl really think that if she had some kind of protection, Su Wumei didn't? As it turned out, she was wrong. Su Wumei had even stronger protection. He pulled the girl behind him and explained that he had a set of nano-armor that even stopped blood. As for our hero, Su Wumei was sure that he was just a man without any advantages. Therefore, he wanted Lin Tian to come closer to him and kneel in front of him. Lin Tian began to approach the guy, and then he pulled off an unexpected trick. He began to hit the man in all his vulnerable and unprotected places. Su Wumei defended himself very well, but he forgot about one important organ, and in the end, he paid for this oversight. Su Wumei probably didn't realize it, but Lin Tian was kind and explained that his advantage was his IQ. However, Su Wumei would not be able to copy that. Finally, our hero received a notification from the system, and the guy already noticed the first change. The color of the system had changed to a red hue. The main tasks that Lin Tian had to complete were to become the champion of the survival competition, and upgrade to the final version of the system. As a reward, he would receive access to the main mission number 2, the right to choose one mission, and access to additional side missions. Only now did Lin Tian think about the fact that after so many years, he was using something that wasn't even a finished product. Or maybe this upgrade was what would give him more money. But he couldn't stand there and think about it anymore. Su Xueqing pulled him out of his thoughts and led him away. They didn't have time and needed to go. Soon, a nerve-paralyzing gas would begin to spread across the island and eventually fill the entire island. That was why Su Xueqing was rushing Lin Tian. Staying in one place for too long was dangerous. The further Lin Tian walked, the more surprised he became. He didn't understand what else the girl thought it necessary to hide from him. But she wasn't going to discuss it. After all, they didn't have time, so she decided it was better to focus on the task at hand. Now they needed to follow the direction of the plane, because it had dropped the loot. However, things weren't so bad. Lin Tian was pleased to think that they had air support here. Most of the participants already had top-of-the-line equipment, except for Lin Tian and Su Xueqing, as Su Wumei reminded them. If her brother said so, then Su Xueqing was probably right in guessing what he was hinting at, and he probably wanted to offer his head in exchange for theirs. Other players were already guarding the location where the bridge was, and they were looking around to see if there were any other people. But as soon as they saw a car approaching them, they aimed their weapons and fired to kill. Having taken up an advantageous position on the bridge, they believed that they could easily deal with anyone who wanted to get the equipment thrown out of the plane. They were sure that their team would definitely become champions this time, but looking through their binoculars, they noticed some movement again. They sensed that something was wrong, so they hid behind the barricades and prepared themselves. But what they saw next completely stunned them. A crowd of naked men carried Su Wumei, who was tied up and wrapped in explosives. As soon as they approached the barricade, they threw Su Wumei away like a useless object. The men realized they were trapped and surrounded, so they opened fire. On the other hand, Lin Tian and Su Xueqing had already rushed over. One bulletproof vest wasn't enough for them, so they used about a dozen. When they finally dealt with everyone, they took off their bulletproof vests and thought that in terms of cunning and intrigue, these guys were only bronze medalists. Su Shuiqing was most interested in what had been placed here as loot this time. Inside, they found a portable invisible safe and no weapons or other useful items. Nevertheless, when Lin Tian saw this safe, he tensed up, because this safe was an exact copy of his small storage room. Suddenly, the girl remembered seeing something similar in a scientific journal. Storage technology that compresses objects to nanoscale, with an optical stealth function. You could put almost anything in here, and it would be well hidden. Lin Tian was struck by the thought that this was a basic version of his real storage space. Whoever saw it first would have to take it, and Su Shuiqing was going to do just that. After all, it was her property anyway. This was so that Lin Tian wouldn't get upset. However, he didn't really care. He was much more interested in who created it in the first place. Lin Tian began to think more about the possibility that the items in his system had been developed by someone. For example, his personal storage, attribute adjustments, ancient martial arts. Su Shuiqing looked up at the sky and noticed that something was wrong, because the airdrops were too frequent, which was unusual. Even though our hero was here for the first time in his life, he sensed that something was wrong. It was enough to just look at his legs, which were engulfed in an incomprehensible structure. Now it was obvious that the circle was shrinking again. Lin Tian couldn't understand. Had this survival game always been so disgusting? This circle was shrinking without stopping and showed no signs of stopping. But as Su Shuiqing remembered, it hadn't been like that before. They tried to run, but they weren't fast enough. The circle was shrinking much faster. In the end, Lin Tian decided to carry the girl in his arms so that they could run faster. On the way, he didn't forget to tease the girl a little, saying, "Can ancient martial arts really help?" But he should have kept that to himself, because the girl had already noticed something behind him. And yet it was illogical, because the circle was accelerating along with them. Lin Tian ran faster than before. In the end, he decided to stop abruptly and instinctively threw the girl off after braking. Lin Tian began to suspect that someone was just messing with them. After this assumption, he heard someone clapping. The silhouette of a man standing out from the rock complimented Lin Tian, because he was really good. However, the man was sorry that Lin Tian figured it out too quickly. Su Shuiqing immediately recognized the man as Zhao Boshi. He was born into the most powerful scientific research family in Shenzhou. His great-grandfather was one of the members of the Qing dynasty who studied abroad, and so was his great-grandfather. Even before his father was born, his family consisted entirely of intellectuals. Zhao Boshi was the only one of the fourth generation involved in scientific research. He was known throughout the world as the Lord of Asian Scholarship. Zhao Boshi. He went to college at the age of 13 and became a doctor at 15. Now, at the age of 22, he was a distinguished professor. His patents and inventions brought him a lot of money and fame. No one knew how much he had. And if Lin Tian really stole his money, then he was obliged to return it to him. Lin Tian felt uncomfortable, and in general, he did not understand how he could return what he had already spent. However, Zhao Boshi was very surprised that the guy admitted it directly and did not try to hide the truth. Moreover, Zhao Boshi probably already knew where our hero had spent everything, so what else could he be afraid of? But in reality, Lin Tian was thinking that he couldn't anger Zhao Boshi, because what if he really was the creator of this system? In the end, Zhao Boshi admitted that he didn't need the money, that it was all small change to him. He had another goal, and that was why he had come here. Zhao Boshi was much more interested in how Lin Tian found a bug in the system he was designing. Just then, a thought struck our hero. Zhao Boshi probably didn't know about his personal system. Lin Tian, however, had no intention of revealing his information, and said outright that it was a secret. Lin Tian didn't even need to say anything else. Zhao Boshi already understood that he had to defeat Lin Tian. Defeat him in programming, in invention, and in everything else. But Lin Tian didn't mean that at all. He was going to say that he was willing to reveal the secret if Zhao Boshi paid him. But Zhao Boshi refused to believe it until the very end. Did the guy really think he would fall for that? For some reason, Zhao was convinced that Lin Tian was not a dirty capitalist who only cared about money. Su Shuiqing, who was standing on the sidelines, admitted that she hadn't done anything and didn't understand why she was suffering the consequences. In the end, Zhao Boshi had already blocked his account, and the money no longer affected them. In this way, he wanted to force Lin Tian to fight fairly and pit their knowledge against each other in a duel. And yet Lin Tian came to the conclusion that the money the system had given him actually belonged to Zhao Boshi. After all, now the balance showed a system error. This made him very angry. He was unhappy that the system was taking all his money. Anger enveloped his body, and he was ready to tear Zhao Boshi to pieces, so he headed towards him. Zhao Boshi liked our hero's determination, but he was also too naive. Before disappearing completely, Zhao Boshi warned that he would be waiting for him in the last circle, but for now he had to have fun with his friends. As soon as Zhao Boshi disappeared from the scene, our heroes were immediately surrounded by soldiers. Su Shuiqing wanted Lin Tian to cover her rear so she could break through, but Lin Tian was nowhere to be found. The guy had already run towards the zone without even explaining anything to Su Shuiqing, who didn't understand why he was running there. Our hero wanted to test one of his theories and broke through into the zone. Once there, he was able to confirm his thoughts that it was a fake circle. Moreover, it was just a hologram, just like Zhao Boshi himself. If Lin Tian was right, then the resources in the airdrop were also sorted by him. But there was no time to relax, as danger pursued the heroes everywhere, and this time it touched Su Shuiqing. There was something wrong with this chest. She had originally put it in her back pocket, but now it was shining brighter than anything else. Lin Tian didn't understand how Zhao Boshi could do such a thing. Was it really that important for him to defeat him? Zhao Boshi had ruthlessly planted a bomb in the airdrop, and Su Xueqing didn't even suspect anything suspicious. Only rubber bullets were used in this game. Lin Tian couldn't imagine how Zhao could kill Su Xueqing in a game like this. Lin Tian remembered that he had to reach the final zone. If that was the condition, then Lin Tian was going to fulfill it and avenge Su Xueqing. A long and difficult journey awaited our hero. There were dangers at every turn, but he managed to avoid them through luck and his own vigilance. The road was indeed very long, but finally Lin Tian was closer to the last zone. When he finally got close, he shouted as loud as he could for Zhao Boshi to come out of his hole. Zhao Boshi came out as if nothing had happened, as if he were greeting an old friend. He asked Lin Tian not to rush and to wait for the others to arrive. But that would be pointless. After all, there was no one else left here but Lin Tian. Our hero bribed everyone he could. He bought cars from ordinary soldiers. He simply threatened others at gunpoint, so that they would take the money and leave quickly. He dealt with whoever he could, and to those who remained alive, he simply handed out money and asked these clowns to leave the game. In the end, Zhao Boshi had to understand that what could be solved with money was nothing. To tell the truth, Zhao Boshi could have done the same, and it would not have been a problem for him. But if that was all, Lin Tian still would not be able to defeat him. For some reason, Zhao Boshi was playing top 1 in public, and because of that, our hero didn't understand what Zhao would gain from defeating him. Zhao Boshi admitted that he was not only playing against Lin Tian, but also against his friends, family, acquaintances, classmates, teachers, and all of them. Lin Tian didn't even know how to respond to this, because the only weapon he had was a frying pan. What could he do against a genius like Zhao Boshi? And yet, Zhao Boshi hoped until the very end that the guy would pull himself together and show his true strength. But it was all too easy. Our hero dropped the frying pan and admitted defeat. He wanted to give up. Zhao Boshi probably expected anything but an admission of defeat. Did Lin Tian naively believe that Zhao would let him go? But what about Su Xueqing? Zhao Boshi heard the guy say he would avenge her, so why was he backing down now? Lin Tian believed that Su Xueqing should avenge herself. Zhao Boshi probably didn't expect this kind of setup, because Su Xueqing turned out to be alive and well. He was 100% convinced that he had killed this girl, so how did she manage to survive? However, Su Xueqing also wondered about this. She was curious as to when Lin Tian had become a doctor. She felt even better than when she had arrived at this place. Lin Tian was certainly not a doctor, and Su Xueqing's rescue was thanks to the system. He had to buy a resurrection token, and that was the only purchase he could make. The price of such a token was 100 million. The store gave him a 70% discount, but he had to sell all his property, the Tian Tian Lin Company, the wig store, the Tian Tian Lin Preschool Education Trust, and other shares in various companies. He had to sell all of it for some kind of cap. Well, what can I say? Lin Tian wouldn't have bought it if it hadn't been so expensive. It's just money. Useless banknotes, that's all. All these feats for the sake of a beautiful girl. That was much more important. Su Xueqing was, of course, amazed by such an act. For her, it was probably very unusual. But our hero suggested postponing this conversation until later, because they still hadn't finished with Zhao Boshi. It was becoming obvious that this Zhao Boshi was just a robot he had developed. Could it be some kind of Terminator? What else would our heroes have to face? However, Lin Tian guessed that Zhao Boshi would not reveal himself. As an intelligent person, he would probably create a robot and control it remotely while it fought for him. Zhao Boshi also understood that Lin Tian would figure this out with his powers of observation and mobility. Although Lin Tian only used his X-ray vision and nothing more. But what could Lin Tian do, even if he knew all these details in advance? Zhao Boshi urged our hero to give up because the power of money and technology was far more powerful. Lin Tian thought about how Zhao Boshi didn't know the right way to spend money and offered to teach him. Zhao Boshi thought that this kid was just laughing at him. He was literally a billionaire, and some student was going to teach him how to spend money? This did not bother Lin Tian at all, because Zhao Boshi had already lost everything. Our hero urged him to look at the sky, but Zhao thought that Lin Tian was trying to distract him. A few hours before that moment, Lin Tian had given his last remaining card to Su Xueqing. He wanted the girl to buy something for him. She called the stores, but there wasn't enough money, only enough for 1 minute. In any case, Lin Tian wanted her to buy it and set the timer for half an hour so he could buy some time. To control the work remotely, a satellite signal was needed. That was obvious. For this reason, our hero bought 1 minute of satellite signal usage. Zhao Boshi no longer looked so confident. His iron body began to shake. Everything was getting out of control. Lin Tian was of the opinion that if he was going to spend money, it should not be on this technological nonsense, but on finally cutting off the Wi-Fi. The secret technique was to disconnect the internet, and 1 minute was more than enough to deal with this robot. Controlling it from the inside, Zhao Boshi realized he had lost, and had to admit that Lin Tian had become his lifelong punishment. Our heroes suddenly noticed a metal box, and Lin Tian thought it was a prize. Since Su Xueqing was unlucky this time, she kindly gave the reward to Lin Tian, but she was sure that next time she would definitely win. The guy opened the box, and inside was just a small flash drive, but it was sealed as if it were worth millions. Lin Tian guessed that it was most likely the key to updating the system. But as soon as he picked it up, the flash drive disappeared, and his head began to spin. Lin Tian lost consciousness, his body going limp. Su Xueqing panicked and tried to bring him back to consciousness. Meanwhile, our hero found himself in the system space. At least that's what he thought. Soon he noticed a sign indicating that the system software update was complete. The system had evolved and expanded. Recent tasks appeared on the table. For example, the user had to spend all their gold and assets in one go on other people and obtain artificial intelligence. It was an urgent mission, and it was completed. The system balance had been replenished by now. Lin Tian's personal assets had returned to 0. The mode of exchanging personal assets for system balance had been launched. Lin Tian was ready to cry that the system had not left him a penny. Money could satisfy his personal desires and also do good for others. He needed to start his own business in 5 well-known areas: entertainment, food, education, sports, and technology. The system had already generated an exchange rate, profit and loss. This meant that the money Lin Tian earned for the system or lost could be exchanged. The system generated its image, which appeared in the form of a beautiful girl. She told the master that the next missions would not be as easy as before.